Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 1154, Ghost Empire. Inside the steam workshop, Ebner was assembling the physical object, according to the blueprints he had already designed within the White Tower space, while at the same time splitting off his Eye of Wisdom to read through the entire diary that Bernadette had transcribed from memory. These diary entries were intermittent, but all of them dated from after Roselle had become an angel. September 27th. I met Miss Isaka once again. We shared an experience that was tense and exciting, yet beautiful enough. I really do still prefer women of this age. This isn't just nostalgia for youth, it hasn't changed over all these years. Hee, truly faithful. Did he change her into a different outfit again this time? Ebner mocked inwardly, then stopped reading further and began carefully searching for the content he actually wanted. However, even after he completely finished crafting the transformation wand, Earth, for Leonard, Ebner still had not found any diary entries related to the Book of the Three Artifacts. Old Huang didn't record anything related to it. No. It should be that the diaries are incomplete. There are things he wrote that even Huang Bebe never saw, directly hidden away by old Huang himself. The rest of the diaries, though fragmented, are spaced only a few days apart, at most no more than 2 weeks. But this particular year is missing a full 6 months. If Roselle wasn't just being lazy during that period, then something must have gone wrong during those 6 months. The diary entry closest to this lost half-year says that he was setting out to search for the remains of Lu Bo. So during that time, was he digging up my graves all over the place? Maybe the compilation of the Book of the Three Artifacts, and the bestowal of special abilities upon the sword, mirror, and seal, was completed during that period as well. If that's the case, then that book is very likely located in one of my ruins. But it's not in Dennett's Labyrinth, nor in the Palace of the God of Luck. Alvin searched the Nation of Night and didn't find it. As for the Mausoleum of Vicente, the Lord of the Dead, although I've never entered it, I carefully observed it through the door of the Nation of Night and didn't see anything suspicious. Wait, according to the docking formula of the Ghost Empire that Dennett left me, during those 6 months there just happened to be one opportunity for it to dock. And Roselle had been to Dennett's Labyrinth, and most likely saw the coordinates and formulas I left behind. So could it be that he left that book inside the Ghost Empire? If so, why would old Huang do that? With these questions in mind, Ebner put away all the diaries, then narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Speaking of which, what a coincidence, tonight at 11 o'clock is exactly when the Ghost Empire docks at that port. Ever since Ebner had brought the time and location of the Ghost Empire passing that port out of Dennett's Labyrinth, only he himself knew the exact details. Even Zio and Edwina, whom he had promised to bring along to explore the Trunsoist Empire relic, only knew that it would roughly be sometime in June or July, not the precise timing. For something capable of attracting the interest of angels, archangels, or even true gods, the less they knew before departure, the better. Otherwise, they might encounter unknown dangers. Nevertheless, after entering June, both Zio and Edwina had coincidentally reduced their workload. Edwina had even given her crew a full month-long vacation a week ago, so that she could be free at any time. This was also the reason why, after the Iceberg Admiral advanced to demigodhood, there had been no news of it spreading across the seas so far. Thinking of this, Ebner activated the pure white eye and used the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fate to observe his own River of Fate. As a result, he did not discover any traces of his fate, having been manipulated by others. Not someone else, which means it's very likely myself. The Calamity Seal. Ebner muttered soundlessly, gaining a rough understanding in his heart. He then closed the channel behind his eyes and shifted his gaze to the newly crafted transformation wand. This item's abilities are quite good. It not only has many demoness abilities like Black Flame and Frost, but can also release many druid spells. It's just a pity that it lacks invisibility and underground movement. It's just that the magical girl that the holder transforms into is a bit too big. Close to 3 meters tall. After all, the essence of its transformation ability comes from the druid's bear transformation. Although I modified the appearance, it's very difficult to further adjust the size. This should count as a side effect, right? Hopefully Leonard can accept it. After taking out a note and writing down the pros and cons of the transformation wand, Earth, Ebner finally set up a ritual and sacrificed it to above the gray fog. Although he could have had Alvin carry it up directly, Ebner was still quite considerate of Mr. Fool's dignity and normally would not do so. A moment later, Ebner received a response. Mr. Starr had an urgent mission and was temporarily unable to receive it. So that means it'll be stored with Klein for now. Ebner froze for a moment, then the corners of his mouth lifted slightly as he pondered, with Mr. Fool's curiosity, I wonder if he'll try it out once first. Western District, inside Princess Vera's luxurious mansion. The Saintess of Black, Medea, received the summons of her contract master and arrived at the bedroom on the third floor, which was filled with fog. At this moment, Ebner's own clone was already sitting on the sofa, waiting for her arrival. Because that Saintess of Black was bound by the rules of the Mist of Uncertainty and barely counted as one of their own, she knew that Owen was actually one of Ebner's clones. After exchanging a few brief pleasantries, Ebner took the initiative to ask, you should have already received notice that I'll be releasing Natalia and Margaret, right? George III has already informed me, and I still had to scrape together £1 million to bring over. That Saintess of Black said with some dissatisfaction. After all, she belonged to Vera. Although Ebner also had constraints over her, she was not afraid of him. Do you think that if we take the opportunity during the handover to seize another Saintess, the primordial demoness will react? Ebner asked carefully. The way you say it, it's like the Saintesses of our demoness sect are just something you can grab at will. That Saintess of Black gave him a complicated look. But in her heart, she understood that the man in front of her was not exaggerating. After all, he could summon multiple angels at any time, and even a son of God like Amon had fallen into his hands. After thinking for a moment, Medea replied, that Saintess of White and the Saintess of Blue shouldn't be a big problem. Like me, like Margaret and Natalia, their faith in the primordial demoness isn't very firm. But the other two colors won't do. Although they're only unaging demonesses, they're closely connected to the primordial demoness and each controls a core sealed artifact of the demoness sect. If you touch them, it will definitely draw the primordial's attention. End of the chapter. Chapter 1155, Long Time No See. The other two demonesses of unaging, the Saintess of Purple and the Saintess of Grey. I really didn't know they were actually that special. After hearing the words of the Saintess of Black, Medea, Ebner said thoughtfully. The Saintess of Black, Medea sneered and said, Hey, all your intelligence came from Margaret and Natalia, didn't it? But the two of them are still far too young. The Saintess of Yellow, Natalia, is only 500 or 600 years old. She relied on the support of a certain secret organization, ambushed the original Saintess of Gold, seized her characteristics, and only then became a demoness of catastrophe. She has very limited understanding of the primordial demoness. Among the so-called seven-colored Saintesses, she and Margaret have the weakest faith in the primordial. As for the Saintess of Red, Margaret, she's not even 200 years old yet, and was planted by Roselle, and she even bears the surname Constantine. She has never been truly trusted. What qualifications would she have to come into contact with core secrets? So in other words, after the primordial demoness fell into slumber, unless someone touches the Saintess of Purple or the Saintess of Grey, she really doesn't care at all about how the demoness sect develops. She even turns a blind eye when the demoness of catastrophe under her is replaced. But Medea, you traitorous succubus who defected to Cheek's side, what right do you have to mock others for having weak faith? You yourself are under control, and Cheek didn't sense anything at all either, did she? Ebner complained inwardly for a few lines, but on the surface he asked, so the Saintess of White, Katerina, and the Saintess of Blue, Veronica, are good targets for an ambush. Katerina has already been controlled by you once. With her level of caution, even if I'm present, there's no way she'd come to see you without making preparations beforehand. She would definitely leave behind a means to awaken herself or notify the Saintess of Grey. The Saintess of Black, Medea paused here, then smiled and said, so the best target is still Veronica. And if you kill her, you won't have any psychological burden at all. Although she looks cute and very scholarly, the things she's done in the past are enough to make even me feel uncomfortable. Compared to her, Margaret can practically be considered a pure saintess. The Saintess of Blue, Veronica. In Natalia's memories, she really is quite a dangerous figure. After thinking for a few seconds, Ebner asked in return, why do I feel like you really want me to kill her? Of course. I have deep hatred toward her. It's just that bastard has many life-saving methods, and I've never been able to find an opportunity, that Saintess of Black said matter-of-factly. Ebner was rendered speechless. I was planning to take advantage of you luring her over during the handover to capture her, and you're telling me you two are sworn enemies. If you're enemies, how could she possibly come with you without worries? As if she noticed the change in Ebner's expression, that Saintess of Black smiled and explained, you don't need to worry about not finding her. As long as you release the Saintess of Red, and let her appear publicly, that woman will naturally come knocking. Why? Ebner asked with a frown. Although Margaret had explained before that she and the Saintess of Blue had some acquaintance back in Roselle's era, their relationship should have been quite ordinary, right? Margaret's surname is Constantine. That alone is enough for the Saintess of Blue to never let her go lightly. Back then, if not for Roselle's protection, and if Margaret hadn't obtained the legacy of the Saintess of Green and advanced to a Demoness of Unaging, Veronica would have already made her move, the Saintess of Black sneered. She has always spared no effort in persecuting and hunting demonesses of the Constantine and Monica families. The Constantine and Monica families were the two great demoness families before Cheek's rise. The Saintess of Blue persecuting demonesses from these two families. Could it be that she was once a male family member enslaved by those two demoness families? But Medea said that she wasn't close to Cheek, and her faith wasn't devout either. Could it be that my earlier speculation was wrong, and Cheek was not a formerly oppressed male member of a demoness family? Is there another reason why she is obsessed with turning men into demonesses? As his thoughts turned, Ebner asked again, "How much do you know about the primordial demoness?" The primordial demoness. I only know that when she first appeared, she was already a sequence 2 demoness of catastrophe, and that she had connections with His Majesty. I defected to her side as well on His Majesty's orders. The Saintess of Black, Medea sighed. The His Majesty you're talking about is the Knight Emperor, right? So he really did have dealings with the primordial demoness long ago. Cheek most likely relied on the Knight Emperor's help to seize the two great demoness families' sequence 1 characteristics. Ebner thought to himself. Afterward, after setting Thursday night as the handover time, Vera raised her hand and sent Medea out of her room. Only then did the princess smile and sigh with emotion. The demoness, arbiter, and door pathways really are entangled deeply with each other. Ebner nodded, understanding what she meant. After marrying into the Abraham family, the Tamara family split into the apprentice and arbiter factions, and the apprentice faction then colluded with the demoness pathway to establish the psychology alchemists. Furthermore, Tronsoist, as an arbiter, was suspected to have allied with the primordial demoness, and also had private cooperation with Mr. Dor. Finally, within the Ghost Empire, not only was there a Hand of Order characteristic stored, but the empire itself had been forged jointly by a Demoness of Catastrophe and a Planeswalker. Thinking of this, Ebner suddenly realized something. He turned his head and glanced at Vera, asking in surprise, "You know that the Ghost Empire is going to reach that port tonight?" "I'm not certain, but by estimation it's about time." Vera smiled and reminded him solemnly, "Don't forget to bring the ring I gave you." Upon hearing this, Ebner extended his left hand. That ring, which appeared completely ordinary on the surface, was quietly set on his index finger. Vera had previously said that she wanted to use this ring to take a look at where exactly the Ghost Empire was headed, and Ebner had always remembered that. "That's good, then." Vera nodded in satisfaction. At night, Priaisport was lined with elegant gas street lamps made of black metal, their light illuminating the roads. At this time, the vast majority of ships had already entered the harbor, and tranquility was the dominant theme here. Inside a small house outside the port, the Iceberg Admiral, Edwina, wearing a white long dress with a cinched waist, was leaning over a desk writing something. At this moment, however, she suddenly sensed something, hurriedly turned her head, and Ebner's figure entered her field of vision. Edwina smoothly put down her fountain pen, tugged at the sleeve of her shirt with a lace bow shaped like a flower at the collar, and revealed a smile as she said, "Long time no see." Before she could finish speaking, she saw another short figure step out from behind Ebner. End of the chapter. Chapter 1156, The Door. The short figure that appeared before Edwina was naturally Zio Dericha. At this moment, she stood beside Ebner and politely greeted the pirate admiral opposite her. As for the Iceberg Admiral, although Zio had only met her briefly once in Daniel's maze, she was not unfamiliar with her. She had even deliberately imitated the other party's clothing style for a period of time afterward. Unfortunately, she later discovered that it didn't suit her. Seeing this, Edwina also restrained her smile and returned to her iceberg demeanor. She very politely returned the greeting, then walked to Ebner's other side and asked with an unchanged expression, "Is the Ghost Empire about to dock?" "Yes, at 11 o'clock tonight. There are still about 2 hours left. However, I think we should go over early to make some preparations," Ebner said with a smile. Speaking of which, in his memories, not only Giuseppe, but Alvin and Danet as well had all explored that final legacy of the Trunsoist Empire. Even if they couldn't be said to know it inside and out, they were extremely familiar with it. This was also the source of his confidence in daring to bring Zio and Edwina along. Otherwise, even with a promise, he would not have let them take such a risk. As for Giuseppe Castilla, that waste was just an accident. He hadn't even finished exploring Danet's complete memories before rashly entering. His death was well deserved. "Then let's set off," Edwina nodded, then very naturally took Ebner's hand. "Don't you need to prepare?" Zio asked in surprise from the other side. Edwina gently shook her head and replied seriously, "As a prophet, all preparations have long been completed within my own White Tower. No need to emphasize it, I know you're a demigod." Zio muttered softly, then said no more. She only glanced at Ebner. Ebner understood at once and directly took her hand, then simulated the ability of a wanderer, sketching in his mind the appearance of the island where the Ghost Empire was about to dock. The next second, the three of them appeared in the furious sea, on a small island far from the safe shipping lanes. This island wasn't very large, but it had mountains and water, rain and snow, and even temperature and humidity that were all orderly, as though it were a miniature world. It was just a pity that a place stitched together from so many extreme environments would naturally not support life. The island was completely barren, without a trace of vegetation. The weather of the furious sea is already extreme enough, how did the environment here form? Edwina frowned and asked in confusion. Zio, however, said thoughtfully, this place feels very similar to when I'm beside Her Highness. Is it the power of order? No need to guess blindly. The reason this place ended up like this is naturally because of the existence of that port. As he spoke, Ebner led the two of them to the foot of the only mountain on the island. And here, there stood a half-collapsed stone ruin dozens of meters tall. This is the port. But it looks a bit like. Edwina frowned again, seeming unsure. At this moment, Zio spoke up once more, like a gigantic stone gate. That's right. Edwina's eyes lit up as she added, it's somewhat similar to the triumphal arch in Trier that just collapsed. Emperor Roselle came here long ago, and the triumphal arch in Trier was actually a replica he built after returning. This door was in fact jointly constructed by the Knight Emperor and Mr. Dor, the ancestor of the Abraham family. Ebner said slowly, enlightenment continuously surfacing in his eyes. In fact, before coming to this island, he had no memory at all related to this stone gate ruin. It was as if Alvin, Danet, and even Giuseppe had all deliberately forgotten it. Of course, it was also possible that the Calamity Seal or the God of Luck had interfered. Fortunately, Ebner had just recently manipulated Roselle's replica in Trier. The impression was extremely vivid, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to immediately see through so many things. Roselle replicating that door was most likely guided by the Calamity Seal. It wanted me to learn the details of the Ghost Empire and some of the Knight Emperor's arrangements. Then the one who intercepted the memories related to this gate was very likely the God of Luck. Is this another round of gaming? Also, the short-term task Lilith previously gave me, in fact, also allowed me to understand the details of this stone gate jointly built by the Knight Emperor and Mr. Dor. And Lilith can basically represent the goddess's stance, which means they believe it's better for me to know. As his thoughts turned, Ebner noticed Edwina beside him looking at him with her clear, spring-like light blue eyes, filled with intense curiosity. Cooperation between the Knight Emperor and Mr. Dor. What was the purpose of constructing such a structure? Was it merely the port of the Ghost Empire? Ebner smiled and shook his head, replying, the formation of the port was probably just an accident. When it was first designed, it was likely meant to allow the Knight Emperor to travel to the realm of order. Toward the end, Ebner's wording became somewhat vague. The realm of order. Edwina and Zio repeated the phrase at the same time, confusion in their eyes. Ebner didn't explain the phrase in depth. He only continued, you only need to know that this realm could very well allow the Knight Emperor to be resurrected. I suspect there were two purposes behind the door he built to reach it. First, to seek power, in order to win the War of the Four Emperors. Second, after failure, to prepare for his own resurrection. Unfortunately, in the end, the Ghost Empire, forged with the full national strength of Trunsoist, vanished without carrying a single passenger aboard. This very likely caused the Knight Emperor's resurrection plan to fall through. He most likely hid his soul stone on some clansman, hoping that the Ghost Empire would carry it back to the Land of Disorder. But unfortunately, something went wrong with the Ghost Empire, and it set sail on its own, allowing not a single person to board. Yes, unlike source materials such as the City of Calamity, the leak point of the Nation of Disorder was artificially created by the Knight Emperor and Mr. Dor. There's an 80% chance it's located within some mirror world. And all the mirror worlds and doors that lead to that mirror world were established by the combined power of Mr. Dor and the Knight Emperor as independent and hidden spaces. Unless one were extremely lucky and wandered in from an ordinary mirror world, other than the Ghost Empire, the only way to enter the space leading to the leak point would be through this stone gate that once created the leak point, forming a crude entrance. Northwest wonder this place is the ship's port. And what Vera wants to see is probably the leakage condition of the Nation of Disorder, right? However, the Ghost Empire seems to have its own ideas. From my previous experiences, although it endlessly cycles through that hidden space, occasionally leaving reflections in other mirror worlds, it appears extremely resistant to approaching that leak point, never once truly reaching it. End of the chapter. Chapter 1157, Choice. As Ebner pondered on his own, he explained one piece of shareable intelligence after another to Zio and Edwina, causing the latter two's impression of the Knight Emperor to deteriorate instantly. So that means the Night Emperor and the primordial Demoness colluded in secret long ago, selling out the ancestor of the Demoness family, Monica, who had defected to him and sought his protection, to the primordial Demoness. And that's not all. After that, he even sacrificed the Monica, who had narrowly escaped death and fallen to sequence 2, turning her into the Ghost Empire. Then in that case, it's only natural that the Ghost Empire suddenly disappeared and didn't allow the Trunsoist descendants to board. But speaking of which, where did the Night Emperor get the confidence to sell Monica, and still expect her to transform into a ghost ship and continue serving him? Zio found it unbelievable. If she herself were treated like that, then even if it meant the annihilation of her soul, she would never let the other party have an easy time. Edwina, on the other hand, felt that the Night Emperor must have possessed some means of controlling Monica, though it later failed for unknown reasons. Ebner's speculation was close to Edwina's. Combined with the fact that after the death of the Night Emperor's empress, the Blood Moon Queen Alnea, her beauty goddess characteristic fell into the hands of either the Mother Tree of Desire or the Primordial Demoness, he couldn't help but suspect that the Night Emperor had also conducted transactions or reached tacit understandings with outer gods. After all, when the Night Emperor came into contact with Mr. Dor, the latter had most likely already been corrupted by an outer god. Additionally, the ancestor of the succubus family was named Monica, and the Black Saintess, who came from the succubus family, was named Medea. This naming style carried a very strong sense of me. Of course, it was also possible that White Maker had chosen the names, but his naming style didn't seem to be like this. Just as Ebner's thoughts drifted farther and farther away, time quietly reached 11 o'clock, and visible changes appeared in the several dozen-meter-tall ruin at the foot of the mountain. Ripples spread within the half-collapsed massive stone gate, and immediately after, a jet-black warship, forged entirely of steel, entered the sight of the three. At first, it was only the size of a finger, but as it gradually approached, its majestic and grand figure slowly unfolded before Ebner's eyes. First, its sheer size. Living up to the name, Empire, even the newly launched ironclad Prize of the Kingdom of Lone looked like a model toy before it, utterly incomparable. By Ebner's observation, its surface length and width were almost on par with the entire urban area of Backlund, and inside were countless, hidden spaces created by a planeswalker. Its true area was probably close to half of Lone. Second was the overwhelming science fiction feel of the hull. It was completely different from the ship styles of any fourth epic nation. Its structure was entirely enclosed, with no deck. Rather than a seafaring vessel, it looked more like a cosmic warship from a science fiction novel of Ebner's previous life. Who knew where the Night Emperor had gotten such inspiration? Seeing such a transcendent warship, even Ebner, who had long been mentally prepared and had seen it in memories, felt deeply moved, let alone Zio and Edwina. Zio was fine. Whether it was the Dream Maze Tower or Daniel's Maze, ever since following Ebner, she had seen plenty of spectacular things. One more giant ship hardly mattered. But Edwina, as a pirate admiral, had her eyes gleaming with brilliance. What captain wouldn't wish for their vessel to be such a ship? The Ghost Empire moved extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the three could no longer see its full form. A second or two later, the dozens of meters tall stone gate barely aligned with one of the ship's portholes. Now! Ebner shouted, then stretched out both arms, wrapping one around Zio and the other around Edwina, and leapt straight into the stone gate. The so-called docking of the Ghost Empire lasted only the single instant. Miss it, and there would be no chance to board. Thus, in the next moment, the anomaly of the stone gate completely vanished, and its degree of collapse advanced even further. Within a long, narrow corridor, the lights flickered between bright and dim. On both sides were numerous identical doors, one every meter or two, stretching endlessly beyond sight. Moreover, there were no markings on any of these doors. Even Edwina, a prophet with excellent memory, could no longer distinguish them after passing several. After entering the Ghost Empire, through the porthole, Ebner and the others appeared in this seemingly endless corridor and were now observing and investigating. Even Ebner had activated the pure white eye, because during his previous visits, he had not appeared in this corridor. They seem to be deceiving my senses. Edwina said thoughtfully. It's not deception, but the use of the authority of balance, making them appear indistinguishable. Ebner shook his head, then continued. If I'm not mistaken, behind every door here is a world. Then we need to find, within that world, the entrance to the next world, repeating this process. Previously, whether it was Alvin, Daniel, or Giuseppe, they had all appeared directly within a certain world. Won't each world also have more than one exit? Zio asked with a strange expression. She was clearly reminded of Daniel's maze, where each mirror world had 6 doors. Ebner naturally guessed what she was thinking and nodded. Yes. Daniel also entered the Ghost Empire back then, so he borrowed some ideas. It's just that he didn't have the ability to expand a mirror space into a full world. Edwina, who had also experienced Daniel's maze, asked while thinking, the mirror worlds in Daniel's maze ultimately led to his palace, then what about here? I don't know, but I suspect it's the Ghost Empire's core, or the captain's cabin, Ebner replied. He truly didn't know. Alvin, Danet, and Giuseppe had all failed to persist to the end. The difference was that the first two were experts in traversing the spirit world and mirror worlds and had gods backing them, allowing them to leave the Ghost Empire at any time. Giuseppe, who had no skills and no backing, could only be trapped to death within some world. Then shall we just pick a door at random? Zio thought for a moment before asking. In theory, which door we enter doesn't make much difference. Ebner first nodded, then walked to a door on the left and stopped, continuing, but I've decided to start here. Through the land of the unknown, he could sense that Giuseppe's soul stone after death was within the world corresponding to the door before him. End of the chapter. Chapter 1158, Living Life as a Game. On the walls of the royal city of the kingdom of Ostsibo. The Night Princess, Zio Dericha, clad in full armor and gripping a long sword, patrolled the various defensive installations while gazing at the countless kinds of monsters below the city walls. A deep look of worry involuntarily surfaced on her face. Ever since the hero Giuseppe Castilla had died in battle at the Demon King's castle, the situation across the world had gradually deteriorated. By now, even a great power like Ostsibo, which possessed a stone castle, had been besieged and was struggling to hold on. It was hard to imagine what kind of tragedy had befallen those small countries that only had wooden palisades. Yet even after grinding levels with such effort, I'm still only level 12, still very far from the hero's level 25 back then, and yet I'm already the highest level combatant in the entire kingdom. And among the monsters below, there are at least 3 at the same level as me, and there's even one that's higher. If not for the city walls, and the soldiers fighting with complete disregard for their lives to cooperate with me, the castle would have been breached long ago. Even so, we've already abandoned the town beneath the castle. But after the residents retreated into the castle, the daily consumption of food has been enormous. At this rate, we can hold out for at most 5 more days. And the knights sent to seek aid from neighboring countries still don't know whether they managed to break through. I'm afraid the neighboring countries' situations may not be optimistic either. Just as the Night Princess, Zio Dericha, finished muttering a few lines to herself, she suddenly stopped, a trace of doubt arising in her heart. Why did I just say all of that out loud? It was like I was explaining the background of a story, or narrating it to someone. But those doubts quickly vanished from her mind, and Zio Dericha once more became deeply worried. More than 10 minutes later, the sun's light gradually faded, and pitch-black night draped itself across the sky. This should have been the time to return home and rest, but both the Night Princess and the soldiers grew tense. Because nighttime was when those monsters were at their strongest, they often launched attacks after the sun went down. Sure enough, when the last sliver of sunset glow was swallowed by the night, a desolate horn sounded. Large numbers of grotesque monsters crawled out from collapsed buildings one after another and charged toward the city walls. Although most of the monsters were only level 3 or 4, with even some level 1 or 2 cannon fodder, and the kingdom's elite soldiers generally reached level 5 or above, the monsters' numbers were simply too great. If the durability of the walls was depleted before dawn, the human side would quickly be drowned by an endless tide of monsters. Thus, prioritizing the sniping of high-level monsters that dealt significant damage to the walls became the foremost objective of the kingdom's defensive forces. Left side of the west gate, a level 7 stone-throwing troll, ballista team, prepare, fire. Front right of the north gate, 3 level 5 piercing demons, catapults, concentrate fire. Directly in front of the south gate, there's a spellcasting unit preparing, adventurer squad, go down and assassinate it, I'll open the way. Upon sensing the aura of magic, the Night Princess immediately issued the attack order. At the same time, she herself leapt down from the city wall with her longsword, gathered her strength, and swung it, releasing a 10-meter-long flame sword aura that cleared out more than half of the monsters in front of the enemy spellcasting unit. Immediately after, an adventurer team with an average level of 8 quickly followed up, killing the enemy spellcasting unit before it could finish its preparations. Seeing the monsters surging in again from all directions, Zio Dericha held her sword to cover the rear, allowing the adventurer squad to quickly retreat behind the city walls. This tactic had been used many times before, so the princess and the adventurers were highly coordinated. They only needed to wait for the cooldown of Zio Dericha's flame sword skill to end, then use this mob-clearing ability as cover to safely retreat. But just as the 10-meter flame sword aura was released again, and Zio was about to leap back onto the city wall, an accident occurred. A monstrous bird of as high as level 15 suddenly appeared from nowhere and, at incredible speed, grabbed Zio's armor, flinging her, still midair, back down into the swarm of monsters below. Your Highness! Night Princess! The soldiers and adventurers were horrified. They hurriedly used bows, arrows, and spells to drive away the monstrous bird while firing volleys into the monsters below, fighting desperately to buy the princess a chance at survival. But this was clearly of little use, because these soldiers and adventurers, none even reaching level 10, couldn't break through the bird's defenses at all. Seeing herself about to fall into the monster horde, Zio instead calmed down. Although her skills were still on cooldown, the passive effects and basic abilities granted by her level 12 were not something ordinary monsters could withstand. It could be said that before the durability of her armor was fully depleted, monsters below level 10 wouldn't even dream of breaking her defenses. But Zio had clearly overlooked one issue: the grab from that monstrous bird earlier had already pushed her armor's durability to its limit. Thus, after falling into the monster swarm, the Night Princess endured only a few heavy blows while surrounded before her full body armor suddenly shattered into fragments, revealing the court dress she wore beneath. How could this happen? Zio Dericha's heart was instantly filled with despair, because she knew that once she lost the protection of her armor, no matter how strong she was, there was absolutely no way she could break out of the monster's encirclement, especially since those few monsters at the same level as her were rapidly closing in. Was she going to be killed, or captured alive and subjected to a fate worse than death? Zio bit her lip. After swinging her sword to kill a monster attempting a sneak attack, she made her decision: I'll fight until I die. Even killing one more monster is worth it. But just as the soldiers and adventurers on the city wall cried out in grief, when the Night Princess was about to meet her end, a figure suddenly blinked to her side. With a light wave of his hand, countless sword lights burst forth from within the monsters' bodies, killing them instantly, one strike each. Even the level 15 monstrous bird was no exception. In an instant, the battlefield that had been filled with thunderous shouts fell silent, leaving only the soldiers' and adventurers' sharp intakes of breath, and the Night Princess's incredulous cry. "Why, are you the new hero, sir?" As she spoke, she couldn't help but grab the arm of the strangely dressed man before her. Yet the hero in her eyes cast a few odd glances at her, then raised his right hand and flicked her forehead with a bent finger. After taking that flick, Zio Dericha stood there dazed for quite some time. When clarity finally returned to her eyes, she immediately revealed an embarrassed and indignant expression and muttered uncomfortably. "So this is the world behind the door you talked about. Why would it assign me such a role?" Ebner rubbed his chin and replied teasingly, "As far as I know, this world's character assignments are all based on the subconscious. In other words, Zio, you actually really want to be a princess, don't you? A princess from a kind of fairy tale story like this." Having had her thoughts exposed, Zio didn't refute it. Who didn't have a princess dream? She pressed her lips together and stiffly changed the subject. "Then what identity were you assigned after entering?" "You don't know." Ebner's expression turned strange once more. "Why would I know?" Zio asked, puzzled. Nothing. Because I shook off the so-called fate this world assigned me the moment I entered. I don't currently have any identity," Ebner replied with a smile. That was the truth. He truly had no identity now, but when he had first entered, he had been assigned the persona of a playboy, with rumors even saying he had an ambiguous relationship with the Night Princess. This world's so-called fate really wasn't reliable. Even calling it a world was giving it too much credit. Its total area was probably only about 2/3 of Backlund, and a country with a single stone castle already counted as a superpower. Zio naturally didn't believe him, but she was too lazy to pursue the matter further. After all, everything here was false. She glanced around the battlefield littered with corpses and, while waving to the soldiers on the city wall to have them open the gates, asked, "Where's Iceberg Admiral? Where is she now? And also, after my memories recovered, why didn't my Beyonder abilities recover along with them?" Because the rules of this world are stipulated by the Hand of Order within the Ghost Empire. Without the level of an angel, you have to follow its rules. And I'm somewhat special, you know that. At this point, Ebner paused, then shifted the topic. "As for Edwina, the reason I almost didn't make it in time for your battle was because all the identities I estimated she might have were wrong. She's neither a teacher, nor a scholar, nor a sage. If it's not that this world has a cognitive bias toward her, then it means that her true inner longing is very likely beyond my expectations. So, the reason you were able to come over so quickly was because you already knew I wanted to be a princess." Zio pressed her lips together again, unsure whether she should feel happy or depressed. It was a good thing for a friend to understand her, but having even her little secret thoughts laid bare was still rather embarrassing. End of the chapter. Chapter 1159, A Chance Encounter. After returning to the castle, Zio, the Night Princess, immediately announced the news of victory to the soldiers and adventurers. After the cheers died down, she introduced Ebner, this new hero, to everyone. Although Ebner technically belonged to the category of a blacklisted individual without a destined identity, judging from what he had just done, even if he claimed he wasn't a hero, no one would believe him. The arrival of a new hero who had eliminated the monsters besieging the kingdom was naturally exhilarating news. The king immediately ordered a grand banquet to be held to celebrate the victory and entertain the hero. But how could Ebner afford to waste time here? he stated that he needed to immediately go and rescue a neighboring country, tactfully declining the king's goodwill. Zio also seized the opportunity to volunteer herself as a guide, saying she wished to follow at the hero's side. Because the situation truly was urgent, the king, though regretful, did not refuse. He even bestowed large quantities of supplies and equipment upon them. Though Ebner had no use for these things at all. After resisting the rules of the Hand of Order, he and this world no longer belonged to the same system. The new hero is really amazing. What a pity he's leaving right away, otherwise I'd definitely have a drink with him. Her Highness the Princess seems to be following the hero. I'm so envious. It's just a shame I'm only level 8, by the hero's side I'd only be a burden. Only someone as strong as the Night Princess is worthy of teaming up with the hero, right? Hopefully the new hero can destroy the Demon King's castle. Amid the discussions of the adventurers, Ebner and Zio left the royal city and headed toward the neighboring country. So this is basically the distance from Ginster Street to the Brave Ones Tavern, and you're already abroad, not even one stop on the Backlund subway, Ebner complained as he looked at the map the king had given them. Zio responded absent-mindedly, occasionally turning her head to glance back at the king standing on the castle balcony, watching them leave. The king looked very much like her father, Mason Dericha. Combined with what Ebner had said earlier, that her identity largely came from her own subconscious, this king was likely the image of her father in her heart. Seeing this, Ebner sighed and said, "That's just an illusion. It's no different from a dream. After we go back, however many dreams like this you want, I can satisfy them all." "I understand." Zio nodded. After falling silent for a moment, she then asked, "Tell me, after we leave here, what will happen to this kingdom?" Two possibilities. First, it was a module temporarily added because of your subconscious. Once you leave, that portion of information might be removed. Second, it might assign some ghost to play your role and continue this world's story. Ebner thought for a moment before answering. This warship was called the Ghost Empire for a reason. Within its many worlds were countless ghosts, each implanted with an identity, forming the myriad living beings of those worlds. As for the origins of these ghosts, some were former subjects who had once believed in the Night Emperor and were taken aboard this ship after death. Others were people over the past several thousand years whose faith had been weak and who died amid various catastrophes. Of course, there were also those who had accidentally fallen into mirror worlds and died unnatural deaths. Story. Zio caught the implication hidden in Ebner's words. The core of the Ghost Empire consists of the former Demoness of Apocalypse, Monica, an unknown planeswalker, and a Hand of Order left behind after the Night Emperor's death. The planeswalker turned what he saw on his journeys into worlds, but under the Demoness influence, the stories, or scripts, of these worlds are inevitably destined to encounter catastrophe, or even apocalypse. But the balance aspect of the Hand of Order brings vitality to these worlds, which is us, the intruders, Ebner explained while thinking. Or rather, even that former Demoness of Apocalypse, Monica herself seems to have been hoping for a savior or hero, which is why the current rules came into being. These worlds, having such a strong video game style from my previous life is really not right. Ebner did not say this last sentence aloud. So that means only by saving the world within the story will the correct exit appear. Zio grasped the hidden meaning in Ebner's words after a bit of thought. Ebner nodded. That's right, but saving also has different levels, corresponding to different exits. For example, after we just wiped out the monsters besieging the castle, an exit appeared within the royal city. Theoretically, if we had stayed and attended the king's banquet, we could have left directly through that exit. However, that exit is low level and would definitely deviate from the correct route, moving us farther and farther from the endpoint. Zio had experienced similar rules once in Daniel's maze, so she wasn't particularly surprised. She instead asked, "So once we find Edwina, we'll go straight to the Demon King's castle?" "Yes. And we'll also retrieve the Beyonder characteristic of the previous hero, Giuseppe, as material for your advancement to an imperative mage," Ebner said with a smile. As for that so-called Demon King, he didn't really take it seriously, just a sequence 3 level monster. In this world, that was merely level 30. If Giuseppe had focused on grinding levels a bit longer back then, he might not have lost. While they were talking, they had already entered the neighboring country's territory. After all, it wasn't far. What surprised Ebner slightly was that this place was already blanketed in ice and snow. Countless monsters were sealed within blocks of ice, like oversized ice sculptures. What a huge area of effect ice and snow spell. Does this country have a legendary mage above level 20? Ebner asked in confusion. Zio searched her character setting, memories and shook her head. The strongest here is their queen, a level 16 arcane scholar. It couldn't be her. Then it's very likely Edwina made her move. Ebner's eyes lit up as he took Zio and flew straight toward the neighboring country's castle. Soon, a towering structure that had already collapsed by more than half appeared before them. The walls were breached. Ebner frowned as he slowly descended. Zio grabbed a soldier digging through the ruins and asked, "What happened here? Where is your queen?" The soldier raised his head dully. Then, as if recognizing who had seized him, a look of joy appeared on his face. "You're Her Highness the Night Princess. That's wonderful. Please, save our queen." Even without being able to use beyond her abilities, the level gap of over 10 gave Zio immense authority. She asked again, "Soldier, tell me, what happened?" "Yes, Your Highness." The soldier responded, organized his thoughts, then continued. "Not long ago, the monsters breached the walls. Just as the queen was about to die in battle, that frost dragon from the northern abyss of horns arrived. It used its dragon breath to kill all the monsters. But that dragon wasn't here to save us. Afterward, it took all of the kingdom's gold and books. When the queen went to negotiate, she was instead abducted by it. Stole the gold and the books." Ebner repeated those two words with a strange expression, and the image of the flag on the golden dream, composed of coins from various nations, surfaced in his mind. As expected of a pirate admiral, even the role that fits her subconscious is that of a habitual plunderer. Zio sighed inwardly. It was obvious now, they had already determined that the evil dragon was none other than Iceberg Admiral Edwina. At the same time, inside a cave within the abyss of horns, the queen who had been captured by the dragon gradually awakened from her confusion. "I am the kingdom's scholar queen." "No. That's not right. I'm Felina of the kingdom of Lone. I remember that after parting ways with Stuart, I accidentally fell into a gap between mirror worlds during one experiment. How did I suddenly arrive in this strange world?" End of the chapter. Chapter 1160, The Goals of the Old Ones. The so-called Abyss of Horns was, in fact, a high peak shaped like a horn. At the very top of the mountain was a hollow cavity, bottomless and unfathomable, like an abyss, hence the name. At this moment, Ebner and Zio had already flown to the summit of the mountain. "Ebner, you know, it's one thing that Edwina robbed money and books, but why did she also abduct that queen along with them?" Zio asked after glancing down into the abyss. "I'm not too sure either, maybe that queen herself represents wealth and knowledge." Ebner wrapped an arm around Zio's waist and answered as he slowly guided her downward. He wasn't worried about Edwina, who was still mentally confused by this world attacking him. Although his insight ability was greatly restricted within the Ghost Empire, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't sense danger in advance right before an attack. Zio was about to say something more when a sudden dragon's roar rang out beside her ears. Immediately afterward, a torrent formed from wind and snow surged forth, instantly coating both sides of the abyss walls with a thick layer of frost. The power of this breath of dragon's breath was terrifying, even carrying traces of the authority of catastrophe. Compared to another frost dragon, the King of the North, it was stronger by an unknown margin. So this is a level 25 legendary dragon. Truly terrifying. Seeing such a dreadful attack and comparing it with her current only finishing move, the flame sword aura, Zio deeply realized the gap between them and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. However, she wasn't panicked, because after this breath of dragon's breath reached the area around her and Ebner, it suddenly changed direction, as if it had passed through to another world, and vanished. The power of this skill even exceeds Edwina's own baseline. This world itself is giving her a certain boost. Is it because, as a catastrophe-oriented world, it favors this kind of villain role more? While pondering, Ebner also looked toward the source of that dragon's breath. A gigantic dragon, ice blue all over, flew out from a cave on the other side of the mountain wall. It hovered in midair, fixing him with its vertical pupils. She still hasn't broken free from this world's identity. Looks like we'll have to help her out and knock her awake. Zio recalled how Ebner had flicked her forehead earlier, her eyes now filled with eager anticipation. Ebner, however, rejected Zio's plan without a moment's thought. It wasn't that he was unwilling to let Zio attack Edwina, rather, at Zio's current level, she couldn't even break through the defense, and awakening memories itself was a technical task, not something that could be done by simply beating someone. On the other side, the Frost Dragon, seeing that the two humans trespassing on its territory dared to look down on it so blatantly, immediately let out an enraged roar. Several magic arrays instantly appeared out of thin air around it, as terrifying power continuously gathered toward its body. As a level 25 Frost Dragon, it possessed a level 15 racial level and a level 10 Grand Arcanist profession, making it extremely adept at all kinds of ritual magic. Seeing this, Ebner also stopped chatting idly with Zio. Directly borrowing his own Miracle Invoker abilities, he reached forward and grabbed, pulling the Yellow Saintess Natalia and the Black Saintess Medea, two demonesses of catastrophe, out from the gaps of history, at the same time. Seers were best at prying power into their own use, and prying at one's own power was even simpler, saving even the need for rituals and preparation time. The moment the two angel-level demonesses appeared, they activated their petrifying demon eyes under Ebner's control. In an instant, the frost dragon's originally sapphire-like beautiful scales were dyed gray-white, and its movements gradually stiffened. Even the already formed magical patterns could no longer be maintained and dissipated into the air. Only its head could still move, staring in terror at the two demonesses who had appeared from nowhere. It could sense that everything below its neck was already immobilized. If not for the man opposite using fierce winds to support its body, it would probably have already shattered into pieces upon falling. "Are you the new hero?" The dragon wanted to ask this aloud, but the muscles connected to its mouth had also petrified, to the point that it couldn't even make a sound. Thus, it could only watch helplessly as that man leapt onto its body and pressed his palm against its forehead, unable to do anything at all. Believing itself about to be controlled by some kind of enslavement magic, the dragon shamefully shed tears of pain. But moments later, when its eyes regained clarity, a distinct look of embarrassment appeared within its vertical pupils. And at this time, she, had already realized that her petrification had been lifted. She hurriedly used her innate transformation ability, changing into Edwina's appearance. Transforming into a human was an innate ability of legendary dragons. Edwina deliberately avoided looking at Zio's somewhat teasing gaze. Taking a deep breath, she temporarily returned to her usual state and nodded, saying, "Thank you for coming to awaken me, otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to recover my memories on my own." The way this world bestows information is extremely overbearing. It should be that strange ability recorded by that planeswalker. It's indeed different from spectators and secret peekers. Ebner nodded, though inwardly he thought, strictly speaking, this method actually resembles the ability of a memory theater. Memory theater was very likely a manifestation of an authority that an even earlier Lu Bo, predating the god of luck, had collected for the unknown. If not for Bernadette probing Lu Bo's secrets through the Pale Death, Ebner wouldn't have discovered that such a thing was hidden deep within the land of the unknown. According to Ebner's speculation, that thing was probably connected to the high-dimensional overseer, and might even be one of that being's authorities. Add to that the clearly hacked mist of uncertainty, the primordial hunger, corresponding to the pathway of the goddess of wealth, and the ring of fate promised to the little snake Will. Sometimes, Ebner couldn't help but wonder, could it be that all of these existences had once suffered losses at Lu Bo's hands, and that among the ring of old ones outside the earth today, half of them had come to demand the return of their authorities from him? Forget it, overthinking is pointless, unless there's another reckless fool like Bernadette who actively goes looking for death. At the very least I'd need the status of a true god before I could explore the depths of the land of the unknown. Pulling his drifting thoughts back, Ebner shook his head and returned his attention to Edwina. At this time, Zio had already relayed the general situation Ebner had just told her to Edwina. After slightly nodding, the latter took the initiative to say, "The reason I abducted the queen was because there was an aura of knowledge on her." End of the chapter. Chapter 1161, Giuseppe. An aura of knowledge? Ebner frowned. Some inexplicable associations arose in his mind, and he then asked Edwina to lead the way so they could go and see that queen for themselves. Edwina gently nodded and did not refuse. After all, she was the one who had abducted the person, and she would have to release her sooner or later anyway. Next, the three of them flew together into a cave in the mountainside and quickly arrived at the place where the giant dragon had previously stored its treasures. Because Edwina had used her abilities as a Grand Arcanist to construct an ice and snow prison here, the queen, only level 16, was completely unable to break free, so she was still obediently staying inside the treasure chamber. When she noticed the three of them entering, the queen was first stunned, then looked in surprise at the man leading them and exclaimed, "Viscount Ebner Bryan." As a lady who lived in Backlund and was enthusiastic about reading newspapers, she naturally couldn't fail to recognize the famous hero detective. Hearing his own name, Ebner, who had already had some guesses, carefully examined this neighboring country's queen a few times. As if it were exactly as he had expected, he nodded and said, "Mrs. Felina, so it's you." Mrs. Felina was the fifth survivor of that experiment 11 years ago. She had previously followed the Storm Church's mysticism magister Stuart to Dysai Bay for a vacation, after which she disappeared without a trace. Of course, after seizing the trident, Ebner knew that Stuart had only used the vacation as a pretext. In reality, he had joined the secret mission involved in the sea monster scramble around Sonia Island. After advancing to Sequence 3, Ebner had even deliberately tried to insight Mrs. Felina's whereabouts, but he hadn't obtained even the slightest clue. He had thought that the spherote contamination on Felina or the Storm Church's protection had interfered with his insight, yet he never expected that she had fallen into the Ghost Empire. And judging from her appearance, she had clearly already recovered her memories, which made sense. She carried contamination at the source matter level within her body. On this point, Edwina and Zio really couldn't compare to her. "You know me." Hearing Ebner accurately call out her name, Felina became even more astonished, to the point of doubting whether the Ebner in front of her was real. Could this be something generated by my subconscious? But that doesn't seem right. I don't have that deep an impression of this detective. If not for my own special ability, I probably wouldn't even remember what he looks like. Even if the subconscious were at work, Stuart should be the one appearing here instead. While Felina was letting her thoughts run wild, Ebner avoided the crux of the matter and replied, I attended your exhibition, and Stuart is my friend. In fact, even the formula for my mysticism magister came from reading his personal biography. Then Ebner changed the subject and asked, Mrs. Felina, how did you end up here? When asked, Felina hesitated for a moment, but still organized her thoughts and answered, I'm actually a beyonder. Previously, I obtained some ritual magic knowledge related to mirror traversal, so after careful preparation, I attempted it once. As a result, even though I had accumulated enough luck, an accident still occurred during the traversal, and I fell into the gap between mirror worlds. When I woke up again, I discovered that I had been assigned the identity of this queen, and was then abducted by a giant dragon. At this point, she suddenly stopped speaking, because in this world her profession was arcane scholar, which came with an innate appraisal skill. Edwina's attributes were now displayed plainly before her eyes, letting her know that the cold-faced woman standing opposite her was precisely the dragon who had abducted her. Seeing this, Ebner smiled and said, Edwina was previously suppressed by an identity, just like you, which covered up her original memories, but she's already awakened now. As he spoke, he smiled meaningfully at Felina and said, the reason she subconsciously abducted you is probably because you possess some kind of trait that attracted her, don't you? This kind of trait had not only attracted the mysticism magister Stuart, apparently even Edwina, who was already a prophet, hadn't been able to escape it. The more dangerous that knowledge, the more captivating it is. Ebner mocked inwardly. Ignoring the sudden change in Felina's expression, he continued, this place is extremely dangerous, and getting out will probably require going through many more worlds like this one. Since we've met here, would you like to join my team? Seeing that Ebner didn't continue pressing the matter of her traits, Felina relaxed slightly. After a moment of hesitation, she asked instead, what kind of place is this? This is the Ghost Empire, Ebner answered. The Ghost Empire? Felina's heart tightened. She suddenly wondered whether she had added too much good luck when preparing for her mirror traversal. Otherwise, how could she have happened to fall into this relic of the Trunsoist Empire that adventurers across the seas dreamed of? But this kind of good luck was something she didn't want at all. After all, as a member of the Life School, Felina knew very clearly that the Night Emperor was a true god. Just thinking about the countless dangers hidden within a legacy that he had poured all his efforts into was enough to make one's scalp tingle. Felina swallowed and seriously considered Ebner's invitation. Although she was somewhat wary of this detective who seemed to know her background so well, if she didn't join him, relying on herself alone, she probably truly wouldn't be able to leave this world. Setting aside everything else, she couldn't even defeat the Demon King in the Demon King's castle. If she stayed here, it would only be a matter of time before she was killed by the Demon King's army. As her thoughts raced, Mrs. Felina made her decision and nodded. Viscount, I'll join you. Very good, welcome aboard, Ebner said with a smile as the corners of his mouth lifted. This lady was tied to the ritual of the divine casket, tied to many truths behind the arrangements of the Seal of Catastrophe, and even her coincidental appearance here might very well have been arranged by some seal setup. Ebner naturally wouldn't let her wander off alone, his invitation was just courtesy. If Zio and Edwina weren't present, Ebner would have directly hypnotized her and taken her into Grozel's travels for research. We'll take her along. I'd like to see what the Seal of Calamity is really trying to do. Ebner narrowed his eyes slightly and muttered silently. Zio and Edwina, who understood Ebner extremely well, exchanged a glance. Clearly guessing that he had other plans in mind, they accepted the addition of another member to the team. Next, this four-person party, composed of a hero, a princess, a dragon girl, and a queen, spent more than 2 hours traversing several great nations with city walls and more than a dozen small nations with only wooden palisades. They repelled multiple demon armies besieging cities and obtained considerable supplies. In no time, the fame of the new hero party spread throughout the world. 1 man and 3 women, standard Japanese RPG hero party configuration. Amid Ebner's faint inner complaints, the 4 finally arrived beneath the Demon King's castle and encountered the first demon general of this world, a level 21 lionman. Ebner didn't make a move. He let the 3 companions face the opponent instead, so they could grind levels. Yes, according to the experience in Ebner's memory, under the rules of the Hand of Order, the levels across all worlds within the Ghost Empire were shared. That meant levels gained in this world could be carried into the next one. And if they were following the correct route, then each subsequent world would only be harder than the previous one, so it was better to let them level up a bit more now, saving him from having to constantly divide his attention to look after them later. While Ebner was thinking this, the 3 ladies had already slain 4 demon generals in succession and advanced to the front of the Demon King's main hall. At this point, Zio had reached level 18, Felina level 19, and Edwina, because her level was already too high and the earlier demon generals didn't provide much experience, was still at level 25. After a brief rest, the four pushed open the doors to the Demon King's main hall and saw the figure seated on the throne. The former hero. Zio, Edwina, and Felina exclaimed in unison because of the false memories implanted in them. Ebner, however, stared at that all-too-familiar figure with a strange expression and said, "Giuseppe Castia." End of the chapter. Chapter 1162, The Truth of the Past. Giuseppe Castia, a member of the Fenaport royal family and heir to the dukedom of Sevilla. However, several decades ago, he met an untimely death while exploring the Tudor Trunsoist ruins in Backlund, after which he was possessed by Lubo. Afterward, during his travels, he met Lamia, married her, and lived in seclusion within a secret valley on Blue Mountain Island. Recalling the life record of this most useless self, Ebner was certain that Giuseppe had already died, had formed a soul stone, and had even left behind an imprint at the corresponding location within the land of the unknown. So what exactly was this Giuseppe standing before him now? Whether it was his aura or that hazy, illusory fate, it was undeniably the Giuseppe from Ebner's memories. Ebner frowned, then activated the pure white eye. A moment later, he nodded in realization and said to the three companions beside him, "This Giuseppe should be a character recorded by the Planeswalker, then granted a level under the rules established by the Hand of Order. He's probably already very close to the angel level." Hearing this, Zio, Edwina, and Felina all nodded solemnly, each preparing their strongest attacks. That said, although Ebner spoke seriously, he himself wasn't particularly nervous. After all, he could summon genuine angels at any time, certainly stronger than this half-baked Giuseppe. What's more, dealing with him might not even require a fight. Just as this thought crossed Ebner's mind, he saw Giuseppe, clad in armor burning with green flames, slowly rise from his seat. He lifted his chin and swept his gaze over the four below the steps, speaking arrogantly. "You are the new heroes. Your highest level is only 25. How disappointing. With strength like this, you dare stand before me. That's really edgy. And weren't you also level 25 when you knelt here back then? You've got the nerve to say that about others." Ebner mocked inwardly, while simultaneously diverting part of his attention to guide the power of the Wheel of Fate toward Giuseppe's imprint within the land of the unknown. Abilities like the Go-San family sheep shearing simply didn't work on things or people involving uniqueness, at least not at the angel stage. So long as the unique power of the Wheel of Fate was introduced into Giuseppe's imprint, briefly linking his fate to the wheel itself, this image recorded by the Planeswalker would cease to exist. On the other side, seeing that Ebner's group didn't respond at all, Demon King Giuseppe immediately erupted in rage. A vast pressure surged forth from his body, and words condensed from various rules manifested around him. He casually selected the word death, preparing to shoot it toward Edwina and the others. Zio and Felina, both below level 20, were seized by this pressure and were almost unable to move. Edwina fared slightly better, but she was still uncomfortable, since her level was the highest and the Demon King focused most of his attention on her. But at that very moment, the pressure suddenly vanished. The words condensed from rules disappeared completely, and even the Demon King's towering body shattered piece by piece, scattering into motes of light. Only a Beyonder characteristic and a crystal that seemed to have lost its luster remained on the ground. At the same time, a grand door shimmering with golden light abruptly opened behind the Demon King's throne. "You said he was comparable to an angel, and he just got instantly killed." Zio turned her head and looked at Ebner with a somewhat speechless expression. "Ebner's strength has already reached this level. I didn't even notice him doing anything." Edwina, the iceberg admiral, sighed inwardly. She had originally thought she was gradually catching up to him, only to realize that the gap was growing wider and wider. As for Felina, this was her first time seeing the hero detective take action. Instead of being shocked, she was simply surprised that he was actually a Beyonder with strength comparable to an angel. Ebner paid no attention to the thoughts of the three women. He walked straight forward, picked up the characteristic and the crystal, and activated his insight ability, intending to use these mediums to probe the truth behind certain matters that he still couldn't fully understand. The characteristic was the Dawn Paladin Beyonder characteristic extracted after Giuseppe's death, and the crystal was naturally the soul stone unique to the Lu boss. About a minute later, Ebner shut off the pure white eye. His brows were tightly knit as he pinched his chin and murmured in thought. "So that's how it is. I was wondering, no matter how useless Giuseppe was, he shouldn't have been unable to recover his memories in this world, to the point of coming to the Demon King's castle underlevel just to die. And with his demigod-level connection to the land of the unknown, he shouldn't have been so easily harvested by the recording ability of the Planeswalker either. So it turns out that his fate was massively deflected by external forces, even weakening his connection to the land of the unknown by quite a bit. His understanding of that place was actually worse than mine back when I was Sequence 5. The only one capable of doing this was probably Lamia. She used her marriage to Giuseppe to deflect his fate, making him mediocre, preventing him from completing a certain predetermined mission, forcibly dragging him to Blue Mountain Island for 10 whole years. And the backlash she bore for deflecting Giuseppe's fate was cleverly shifted onto Sauron because of the special nature of her true body materials and the fact that she died at the hands of a divine spawn. After all, Lilith clearly said that after Lamia's death, her true body was taken by Sauron. Shifting. Grafting. Perhaps the goddess had a hand in this as well. Additionally, merely relying on Lilith might not have been enough to weaken Giuseppe's connection to the unknown. There must also have been preset measures from those two ultimate old schemers, the MES. The arrangement of Giuseppe's fate was very likely orchestrated by the Seal of Calamity. After all, Giuseppe was the closest life after the Seal of Calamity itself. Then the one who tacitly cooperated with the two goddesses to block this arrangement and deflect Giuseppe's fate must have been the god of luck. As for the reason, I think I more or less understand it now. According to the mural Adam showed me, the unknown was a symbol that only came into being after first seeing Lubo transmigrate. But it probably possessed only the symbol, without the corresponding source matter and characteristics to support it, which is why it kept letting Lubo descend into reality, in hopes of perfecting itself. And among the parts into which the ancient son of chaos was split, both the uncertain mist and the nation of disorder should be things the unknown needs. After all, both uncertainty and disorder carry the meaning of results being unknown. And judging from Vera's state, the uncertain mist was very likely captured by the unknown as early as the first epoch or the early second epoch, even before the god of luck. The newly born consciousness within it may already have been assimilated or erased by the unknown. Otherwise, Vera could never have obtained such high authority over the uncertain mist while only being in ordained existence. This was probably both the only way Rhine could save Vera, who was already completely mad at the time, and also an attempt to reclaim source matter that had already been taken by the unknown through the granting of authority. This is extremely dangerous. The situation Vera will face in the future won't be any better than Klein's struggle with the celestial worthy, even if I help share the burden. After all, the psyche within the uncertain mist can now barely be considered a part of the unknown. No wonder she bluntly said that the characteristics of the two rule pathways were a burden to her. That really is the case. If she were to accommodate the nation of disorder, it would essentially be adding strength to the unknown. And I think I know why she's so obsessed with finding the magic wishing lamp now. She's probably planning to let the lamp god take the fall first, letting it engage in internal attrition with the unknown. That really is a clever choice. Back to Giuseppe, the Seal of Calamity, or rather, the awakened unknown part within the seal, planned to entangle the fate of Giuseppe of the Order pathway with the Ghost Empire, help him obtain the Hand of Order, then advance to Sequence 1 and awaken the psyche of the unknown. After that, it would follow the Ghost Empire into the location of the flaw in the seal created by the Night Emperor, find the nation of disorder, and accommodate its power. But this was obviously unacceptable to Lilith and the other deeply corrupted goddesses. After all, once the unknown fully awakened, there was a very high probability that they themselves would become part of the unknown or its puppets. They would never allow the unknown's power to continue growing. So that's why there were 10 years of married life between Lamia and Giuseppe. Sigh. I never really believed that Lamia was merely a simple tool for learning human nature, but I still didn't expect calculations this deep. As his thoughts came to a close, Ebner let out a sigh, put away the soul stone and the characteristic, then turned to Zio and said, "I'll keep this Dawn Paladin characteristic for you for now. I'll give it to you after we get back." Zio nodded and didn't say anything like thanks. Between her and Ebner, there was no longer any need for such formalities. Let's enter the next world. End of chapter. Chapter 1163, A New World. The Forsaken Land of the Gods. The sky was pitch black at high altitude, with silvery white lightning flashing from time to time, illuminating the barren, lifeless plains and the rivers where dark liquid faintly flowed. On the flat land encircled by the river in a zigzag shape, there were faint traces of dilapidated buildings, clearly the ruins of a city-state. This was the abandoned city-state that housed the skeletal demon wolf Leonard needed. It had no name and was only referred to by the upper echelons of Silver City as Nightmare Town. This was because once someone entered the town's range, they would be dragged into nightmares that were extremely difficult to escape. Only by making sufficient preparations in advance would one have a chance of waking up. It was precisely due to this peculiarity that even Chief Colin Iliad, a demon hunter, had no way of dealing with the skeletal demon wolf inside the town, because it could easily retreat into deeper layers of nightmares, places the chief dared not pursue. Moreover, the town was only 1 day's journey away from Silver City, and the route had already been cleared countless times. Therefore, after Derek mustered the courage to explain the situation to the chief, Colin Iliad gave it some thought and agreed to his request. Not only did he suspend the exploration of the former chief's mausoleum, but he also formed a fairly strong small team to accompany Derek to the outskirts of Nightmare Town. This was because Derek claimed that he had received a talisman bestowed by Mr. Fool, capable of pulling the historical projection of the mysterious Mr. Tower into reality. Although he had only met Mr. Tower briefly, Colin had been deeply impressed by him and took him very seriously. As a result, aside from himself and the shepherd Elder Lovia, the team also included another demon hunter, Wate Hillman, to prevent any accidents. Though small in number, this team's overall strength could be said to far exceed that of a standard full exploration squad from Silver City. According to Colin Iliad, this was because while Nightmare Town did not have many monsters, most of them were extremely bizarre. For those with slightly weaker strength, it was exceedingly dangerous and easy to be exploited. Therefore, having fewer people was better than having more, and if there were fewer people, the quality of strength naturally had to be higher. Looking at the city ahead, surrounded by illusory black rivers and not even fully illuminated by lightning, Demon Hunter Colin removed the 2 straight swords strapped to his back. Calm and unhurried, he applied silver-gray oil to one blade and poured golden liquid over the other. He then planted both straight swords in front of him, took 3 small metal vials from a hidden compartment in his belt, pulled out the stoppers, and gulped down the potions inside. At the same time, Wate also began making the necessary preparations. Derek Berg knew that they could not yet fully trust Mr. Tower or Mr. Fool, so he was not surprised and simply waited quietly for them to finish preparing. However, he glanced somewhat curiously at Lovia on the other side. Compared to the chief and the others, this shepherd elder appeared exceptionally calm, seemingly not worried at all about Mr. Tower's arrival. As if sensing Derek's gaze, Lovia turned her head and met his eyes. Derek instinctively lowered his head, but then heard Lovia say calmly, "At a time like this, you should be using your ability to help the chief and Wate achieve better preparation effects." "Yes," Derek responded, only then coming back to his senses. He felt that Elder Lovia was right. Even though he knew Mr. Tower was not an enemy, at the edge of such a dangerous ruined town, helping them increase their strength even a little was only appropriate. It seems Mr. Tower's earlier speculation may have been correct. Although Elder Lovia believes in the true creator, she may not necessarily have betrayed Silver City, just like me. With emotion rising in his heart, Derek no longer hesitated. He spread one hand and solemnly intoned in deep giantish. God said, "Effective." Silently, Colin Iliad and the others felt that the potions they had just consumed, the dawn they had created, and the oils they had applied all became noticeably stronger. Immediately afterward, a halo filled with warmth rippled outward, granting courage and strength to the entire exploration team. After Derek finished comprehensively enhancing the team's attributes with various notarizations, Colin glanced at Lovia, who was holding a beast-skin lantern as if merely observing, and then said to the tall young man whose height had grown slightly again, "Use that talisman to summon Mr. Tower." After saying this, he looked at Lovia once more and added, "That Mr. Tower has brought us information from the outside world, food free of contamination from the outside world, and secret techniques that remove toxins and corruption. So try not to show obvious hostility. It would be best to first observe some of his actions, to avoid misunderstandings." Demon Hunter Wate was a burly man with a shaved head, dark green symbols tattooed on his scalp, and a height approaching 2.5 meters. He appeared no older than 45, but his actual age was close to 80. At this moment, he glanced at Derek and said thoughtfully, "If this Mr. Tower really is reliable, should we invite him to explore the former chief's mausoleum? There's no rush. We'll have to see." Colin Iliad, his gray-white hair messy, answered directly without avoiding Derek. At this moment, Derek, who had already taken out the historical projection talisman, felt his face flush slightly. It seemed that his excessive concern over the former chief's mausoleum in recent days had been noticed after all. That makes sense. How could my thoughts possibly escape the chief? Fortunately, I listened to Mr. Tower back then and directly brought up Mr. Tower's curiosity about that mausoleum. While engaging in self-reflection, Derek ignited the talisman with his spirituality. He then felt his right hand become uncontrollable as it stretched into the void. After grasping a few times, he pulled out a figure dressed in a style completely different from Silver City. It was Ebner. Within the Ghost Empire, after consecutively breaking through 4 worlds, Ebner was once again separated from Zio, Edwina, and Felina in a new world. Ebner looked around and discovered that he was inside a modern hospital. However, the equipment was old, and thick layers of dust had accumulated everywhere, clearly abandoned for a long time. A standard opening for a horror game. Could this world be of the supernatural horror type? Seeing this scene, Ebner couldn't help but complain inwardly. After experiencing several worlds, combined with the memories of Alvin, Danitz, and Giuseppe, Ebner suspected that the worlds within the Ghost Empire might all be created based on games, only with storylines that were vaguely familiar yet distinctly different from those he knew before. Just what exactly was that succubus Monica's origin? Or was there something wrong with that unknown planeswalker? With these questions in mind, Ebner looked down at the school uniform-like clothes he was wearing. After rummaging through them carefully, he quickly found an old-style sliding phone. He opened the contact list with interest and discovered that there were only 3 contacts, girlfriend 1, girlfriend 2, and girlfriend 3. Seeing this, Ebner couldn't help but grumble inwardly. Why are all the personas assigned to me so improper? 3 girlfriends at the same time during student days. Serves me right to be trapped in this gloomy, terrifying hospital. Thinking this, Ebner immediately selected one of the numbers and dialed it. The 3 contacts obviously corresponded to Zio and the other 2, it wasn't hard to guess. But soon, the universal setting of horror games, or rather, all horror films, made its presence known. No signal. Well, looking on the bright side, even if it could connect, aside from Edwina, who once saw modern urban technology with me on the first floor of the Dream Maze Tower, Zio and Felina might not even answer the phone. And this hospital clearly isn't in a normal world. Not being able to connect probably means the 3 of them aren't in danger right now. With that thought, Ebner put the phone away and began searching around the room, which looked like a hospital ward. He soon found a note on the table. He picked it up and glanced at it, seeing read into script written on it. I'm really going insane. Are that red liquid and those sticky capsules really medicine? And why did this hospital become so rundown overnight? Don't trust the nurses. Don't trust the nurses. Don't trust the nurses. No, there are 3 you can trust, the one you can't trust is the 4th. The 4th one didn't lie. What was this? A game clue. A fragment of some rule-based horror text. Ebner's lips twitched, but he had no intention of solving puzzles step by step. That was the fun of the mystery type. Beyonders of the omniscient and omnipotent pathway were more accustomed to directly seeing the answer. The symbol of omniscience was that you could know whatever you wanted to know, without the need for decryption or investigation. Thus, Ebner activated the pure white eye. Playing a game, what's the point if you don't cheat? End of the chapter. Chapter 1164, Someone Who Is Everywhere. The root of urban legend rule type games is nothing more than the existence of an inner world overlapping with the surface world, and within that inner world, there must exist a murderous thing. For ordinary people, if they merely see some things they shouldn't during the overlap between the surface world and the inner world, there is still hope of survival. They can avoid danger by following the rules summarized by predecessors at the cost of their lives. But once someone, like Ebner, completely falls into the inner world, escaping becomes almost impossible, leaving only a tragic ending. However, that is only true for ordinary people. In Ebner's eyes, he very easily discovered the weak points in the spatial structure of this inner world. He then directly used the abilities of a wanderer to open a door and leave, completely ignoring the so-called rules. This caused the brain of a certain monster, one that was hiding in the morgue, waiting for its prey to gather all the rule text fragments, and then plunge them into despair at the moment hope arrived, to completely crash. The inner world of this urban legend rule scenario even nearly collapsed as a result. A long while later, that monster let out an unwilling hiss, but there was nothing it could do. After all, its domain had just interacted with the surface world, and it was unlikely such an interaction could happen again in a short time. Soon, however, it quieted down once more and patiently waited for the next prey to arrive, and it wouldn't have to wait long, because recently the frequency of interaction between the inner and outer worlds had been increasing, from once every few years to once every few days. Perhaps in the future, the 2 worlds might even remain overlapped for long periods of time. On the other side, Ebner, who had opened a door and left the inner world, instantly felt the hospital environment undergo earth-shattering changes. The originally dim surroundings became bright. The filthy rooms became clean and tidy. All kinds of facilities and instruments reverted from dilapidated to brand new. Although there weren't many people around, doctors and patients constantly passed by. In short, the place was filled with the presence of people, even though Ebner knew that the people in this world were likewise plagued by ghosts. At that moment, his phone suddenly rang. Ebner picked it up and saw that the caller ID displayed girlfriend 1. Feeling speechless, Ebner still pressed the answer button. Immediately afterward, Zio's voice came through the phone. Ebner, where did you go? You said you were coming to the hospital to keep me company, but you disappeared in the blink of an eye. And I couldn't even get through on the phone just now. Listening to this string of complaints, Ebner blinked, realizing that Zio had once again been overwritten by the identity assigned by the world. Suppressing a laugh, he said, I'm coming back right now. Although similar situations had already happened 4 or 5 times, this was the first time he had seen such a cute and naive side of Zio. Muttering to himself inwardly, Ebner directly ran toward the surface world version of the hospital room corresponding to the one where he had appeared in the inner world earlier. If nothing unexpected had happened, his previous self had triggered the urban legend rules there. Arriving at the ward on the 3rd floor, Ebner immediately saw Zio lying on the hospital bed, as well as Iceberg Admiral Edwina Edwards sitting by the bed, peeling an apple for her. The latter was dressed in a neat women's business suit, looking entirely like a modern professional woman, so much so that Ebner almost didn't recognize her. Zio also saw him at this moment and called out. Ebner, come here quickly. Teacher Edwards is here. Teacher Edwards. Ebner glanced at the school uniform-like outfit Zio was wearing, matching his own. Even though his insight ability was greatly restricted inside the Ghost Empire, he could still roughly guess the relationship among the three of them. Zio and I should be classmates in some middle school, and Edwina is a teacher in our class, possibly the homeroom teacher. But why is the teacher labeled as girlfriend too? If this isn't just this role indulging in self-wish fulfillment, then the plot development of this world is seriously problematic. And then there's Madame Felina, listed as girlfriend 3, what role would she be? A strict dean of discipline? Or someone's mother? Cough, cough, it shouldn't develop in that direction, right? While these thoughts spun through his mind, Ebner walked over to Zio's hospital bed. He didn't immediately snap Zio out of it, but first looked toward Edwina. The iceberg admiral, dressed in professional attire, nodded at him, indicating that she had already broken through the identity imposed by the world. As a demigod of the reader pathway, and under the rules of the Ghost Empire approaching level 30, with her Grand Arcanist profession already at level 19, she naturally wouldn't allow herself to be repeatedly confused by assigned identities and would take effective countermeasures. It was precisely because she had regained herself not long after entering this world that she had come directly to the hospital based on the role's memories. It had to be said that, because Ebner was no longer restricted by the rules, although he was also assigned an identity, he received none of its information, making things less convenient for him than for Edwina and Zio. At this moment, Zio noticed the exchange of glances between Ebner and Edwina, and her mood immediately soured. She snorted and said, "Ebner, where did you just go? You said you'd help me make up the lessons I missed, but you disappeared and went off to have fun by yourself." Judging from her tone alone, it was clear that Zio's role was extremely familiar with me, most likely a childhood friend. As his thoughts shifted, Ebner didn't answer her question, instead naturally reached out and tapped a finger against Zio's forehead. Although this version of Zio was quite cute, they weren't really here to play a game. Naturally, the sooner they cleared this place, the better. In the next moment, Zio's gaze changed, and her temperament instantly became much steadier. It was obvious she had regained herself. Recalling what had just happened, and having already experienced several worlds, she no longer felt embarrassed or angry. After all, making a fool of herself in front of Ebner wasn't a first, it no longer mattered. As for Iceberg Admiral Edwina, everyone had about the same number of black marks by now, and an unspoken, tacit understanding had long been established. Knowing that Ebner lacked any role memories, Zio pondered briefly before quietly explaining what had happened on her side. As it turned out, she and Ebner truly were childhood friends, having grown up together. Moreover, since both of their parents had mysteriously disappeared at the same place on the same day several years ago, the two of them were now even living together. 3 days earlier, Zio's role had accidentally encountered a strange person holding a giant axe at school. While fleeing, she fell down the stairs, spraining her ankle, which was why she had been hospitalized. But strangely, no one else had seen that strange person, so the teachers at school all believed Zio was lying and that she had simply misstepped and fallen on her own. That strange person really exists. It's possible ordinary people can't see them. Zio said in a low voice, glancing around the ward. That was the inner world, essentially very similar to the spirit world after being ordered. When I first entered this world, I directly appeared inside the inner world. It seems the two worlds are constantly intersecting. This is probably the disaster this world is facing. It's just unclear where the source is. As he said this, Ebner suddenly noticed Edwina holding her phone in front of him. Ebner looked over in surprise and saw the headline displayed in the phone's browser. Grand celebration for the 250th anniversary of the birth of Saint Roselle Gustave. Roselle. Old Huang. He really is everywhere. With this world's technology developed to such a degree, perhaps it was also Old Huang's handiwork. However, since the crisis in this world still existed, it meant that even Old Huang, as the Emperor of Knowledge, had failed to resolve the source of disaster back then. Either he had no way to leave the Ghost Empire directly, or he had taken a lower-tier exit and gone around another way. So is this a problem even the Emperor of Knowledge couldn't solve? Additionally, if Old Huang really did leave the Ghost Empire from here, then would the book he wrote, the Book of the Three Artifacts, also be located here? End of the chapter. Chapter 1165, The Truth Behind the Urban Legend Rules. However, Roselle might not have entered the Ghost Empire with his true body. The difficulty of this world might not actually have reached the point where even the Emperor of Knowledge was unable to solve it. Just as Ebner was deep in thought, his phone rang once again. The caller was, without question, girlfriend 3 among his contacts, that is, Madame Felina. Because this lady bore source-level contamination, she always recovered herself shortly after Ebner did, so it was not surprising that she would be the one calling. Ebner pressed the answer button, and a panting, extremely anxious voice immediately came through the speaker. "Detective Brain, please come save me. I've encountered a monster against which all attacks are ineffective. Before she could finish speaking, a beep beep sounded from the phone. The call had already been disconnected. Ebner immediately called back, but all he received was a prompt saying, unable to connect. It seems Felina also encountered the inner world not long after entering this world. Ebner did not dare to delay. He quickly asked Zio and Edwina. Did the role information you obtained contain any intelligence about Felina? Zio nodded and said. It seems the female police officer responsible for investigating our parents' disappearance case is called Felina. The police attitude toward this disappearance case was very strange. They seemed to take it seriously, yet also hastily closed the case and sealed it away. Over the years, only that officer Felina continued investigating privately. She previously came to ask us about some details of the case. I, in this role, didn't pay her much attention, but you, Ebner, were very enthusiastic toward her. So she's a policewoman. Ebner nodded thoughtfully, then quickly analyzed Felina's current situation. The disappearance of my family and Zio's family is obviously not an ordinary case. There's a high probability it was an inner-world intrusion incident, which is why the higher-ups at the police bureau had such an ambiguous attitude toward it. Felina's role probably discovered some clues on her own but didn't understand the truth, which is why she kept pursuing the case. Such characters, in horror movies and horror games, are usually the suicidal investigator type. But now that she's a companion, we can't not save her. Thinking of this, Ebner asked Zio again. Where did this role's parents disappear? At the amusement park in the western part of the city. But that place has already been completely demolished and turned into a signal base station, Zio answered after a brief recollection. An amusement park? Very good, both families left their children at home and went to the amusement park themselves. Getting disappeared like that isn't unjust at all. As Ebner silently complained, Zio had already jumped off the bed and said seriously. I'll lead the way. We'll go there immediately. As for her injured ankle, for a level 19 knight, it was not a problem at all. Edwina followed up. I'll drive. The spirit world of this world had already been transformed into the inner world under the power of order, so abilities like teleportation were greatly restricted. Moreover, in an unfamiliar city, Ebner could not accurately locate a specific target, and flying might be detected by various high-tech methods, causing unnecessary trouble. Thus, a car was indeed the most reliable means of travel at the moment. And Ebner was quite confident in Edwina's driving skills. After all, she had practiced back on the first floor of the Dream Labyrinth Tower. The three of them went all the way down to the underground parking garage. Only after getting into Edwina's sedan did Zio sigh with emotion. The civilization of this world is actually more advanced than reality. Even though it was also influenced by Emperor Roselle, why is there such a huge gap? Because there are no gods in this world. This is actually the development speed that should exist after the Industrial Revolution. In fact, it's probably because the population here is smaller, it's much slower than some of the leapfrog developing countries in my previous life. Ebner sighed inwardly, but he did not voice such blasphemous thoughts. Since it was not rush hour, traffic was fairly smooth. In just over 10 minutes, Ebner and the others arrived at the signal base station in the western part of the city. Speaking of which, the area of this world was much larger than that of the initial Hero world, roughly comparable to the entire Backlund metropolitan area, but its population was 3 times that of Backlund, making every inch of land extremely valuable. Even places that had experienced inner world intrusions were not left idle. Instead, the amusement park had merely been converted into a signal base station, a facility that did not require many people to guard. After all, as long as the limited staff here were trained and made to follow the summarized, urban legend rules, they could largely avoid falling into the true inner world. And even if 1 or 2 people went missing, it could easily be covered up. However, while the staff followed the rules, Officer Felina, who came here to investigate the case, would not, and might even try the taboos listed in the rules. Most likely, before Madame Felina awakened, her role had already triggered the inner world marker and fallen into the intersection of the 2 worlds, which is why she called me for help after encountering a monster. She's really unlucky. Still, with her strength and luck, holding out for a while shouldn't be a problem. After backtracking around the base station area, Ebner thought as much. Of course, this was also because Felina did not have much personal connection with him. If it were Zio or first trapped here, he would collapse this entire world if necessary just to rescue them first. At this moment, Edwina noticed a small table next to the unattended gate of the base station area. On the table lay a stack of printed notices. She picked one up and glanced over it, seeing the following written on it. 1. If you hear laughter within the base station area, do not hesitate. Immediately enter the base station's main control room and inform the staff on duty. 2. The staff on duty will be a man in his 60s wearing a black work uniform. If the person you encounter is not him, do not speak to them. Silently exit the control room and enter again. 3. Under no circumstances are you to go to the roller coaster area. 4. If you fail to enter the control room in time and the surrounding environment changes, buy a carousel ticket as quickly as possible and ride the carousel continuously until the laughter stops. 5. Except for the control room, do not enter any building that has a door. 6. Absolutely do not attempt to climb over the amusement park's fence. After reading it, Edwina pondered for a while, then casually picked up 2 more copies and handed them to Ebner and Zio before carefully saying, "This urban legend rulebook itself also contains a certain degree of power. Its purpose seems to be to create specific loopholes in the inner world through taboos. This should be an application of authority from the knowledge pathway, though it may not necessarily be an exchange. Rather, the rules of those inner worlds themselves already contain certain loopholes, and these words are merely the keys that activate them." As an insight type beyonder, Ebner immediately understood whose handiwork this was. Emperor Roselle. Zio spoke the name for him. Although the Emperor failed to solve the root of this world's disaster back then, he still imposed restrictions on it and delayed the arrival of the catastrophe. The rulers of this world must also possess items left behind by Roselle, which is why they can print such rules, imbued with power to resist the invasion of the inner world, Edwina added from the side. Ebner nodded slightly, acknowledging their deductions. However, now was not the time to discuss these matters. The most urgent task was to rescue Felina first. After opening the pure white eye and observing carefully for several seconds, Ebner led Zio and Edwina to a warehouse beside the main base station building and lightly drew a line through the air with his hand. Immediately afterward, a crack appeared out of nowhere, from within which bursts of cheerful laughter could be heard. Ebner and the other 2 did not hesitate and stepped into the crack together. In the next instant, they appeared in front of the roller coaster ticket booth. End of the chapter. Chapter 1166, returning once more to the forsaken land of the gods. Roller coaster was one of the classic attractions in amusement parks, but for some reason, in arrangements over a long period of time, this ride would always first pass through a tunnel filled with all kinds of demons and monsters before finally entering the proper soaring stage. Ebner did not know whether Roselle, when using the knowledge authority to endow the urban legend rules, had deliberately designated the roller coaster as the most dangerous area by making use of the symbolism of this arrangement. However, according to his backtracking, Felina's previous role had indeed courted death by touching this taboo, resulting in the present Felina being trapped inside the pitch-black tunnel. According to the normal process, the moment we entered here, we should have been forced to buy tickets and board the car, then wait to enter the tunnel. Although Edwina's abilities of backtracking and prophecy could not be used, her Grand Arcanist profession provided similar skills, so after a brief observation she discovered the trick. But the way we entered was clearly not normal, so the rules here developed loopholes and didn't force us onto the train. Ebner nodded, then glanced at Edwina a few times and smiled. "So, we'll have to get ourselves a car." Because they had encountered similar situations in previous worlds, Edwina immediately understood Ebner's meaning. She sighed helplessly, but still resigned herself to the task, removing her formal outfit and handing it to Zio for safekeeping before transforming into an ice frost dragon. Seeing this, Ebner and Zio skillfully jumped onto the dragon's back. In the next instant, the dragon flapped its wings and charged along the track straight toward the tunnel entrance. Strictly speaking, Ebner was not incapable of forcibly breaking the tunnel's rules, but doing so would not guarantee Felina's safety inside. Thus, he decided to first enter according to the rules, find his companion, and only then flip the table. The speed of the ice frost dragon that Edwina had transformed into was extremely fast. The moment it started moving, it surpassed the roller coaster's maximum speed, so in just 1 second, they followed the track straight into the tunnel. The instant they entered the tunnel, the 2 people and 1 dragon realized something was wrong. Although the theme of this roller coaster was the underworld, this place was practically real hell. Foul-smelling blood water was everywhere, and severed limbs were scattered all over the ground. At that moment, several ghosts suddenly appeared and pounced toward the 3 of them. They had green faces, sharp fangs, and horns growing from their heads, looking very much like the little demons of the underworld described in legends. Seeing this, Zio stepped forward. The school uniform on her body immediately shattered, a set of silver armor manifested, and a flaming longsword appeared in her hand. With just 2 strikes, she chopped off the ghosts' heads. "They can be killed," Zio said while holding her sword on guard. She carefully examined the headless little ghost bodies for a few moments before speaking to Ebner and Edwina. Edwina had already reverted to human form, but she did not retrieve her formal outfit. Instead, she condensed a suit of frost armor around herself. They're all flesh and blood beings. It's not hard to understand that they can be killed. In fact, the biggest problem in the Ghost Empire is that our original powers cannot be used, while the power gained through leveling is granted by the authority of order. Once order stipulates that our skills are ineffective against the monsters here, or only effective under special conditions, that becomes extremely dangerous. What Felina encountered earlier was very likely this kind of situation. As she spoke, Edwina continued probing their surroundings and analyzing the situation. However, she was not too worried, since Ebner was clearly unaffected by the rules. So this is the might of the Hand of Order, Ebner exclaimed. At the same time, he did not idle, continuously using his insight ability to locate Felina. Very quickly, he obtained a result. Over here. Ebner pointed toward the entrance of a passageway. At the top of the passage hung a sign covered in bloodstains, on which the word restroom could still faintly be made out. Inside the restroom within the cave, Felina felt that her luck was simply terrible. Right at the start, because her role had courted death, she had entered this terrifying place and was now being chased by a monster against which all attacks were ineffective. If not for the fact that she was a level 19 arcane scholar who had mastered many spells, and had, in a moment of crisis, used the restroom mirrors to construct a maze and temporarily play hide-and-seek with the monster, she would have been torn apart long ago. But this clearly would not last long. She could feel the monster drawing closer and closer, possibly breaking through the maze and finding her location at any moment. Suddenly, the mirror that served as the maze's medium shattered. Felina's face turned pale as she immediately cast invisibility, hiding behind the rubble in a corner, hoping that the monster would not discover her. But to her despair, the heavy footsteps grew closer and closer, soon arriving right in front of the rubble where she was hiding. Just as Felina fell into despair and prepared to fight to the death, she suddenly heard Ebner's voice. "Madam Felina, come out, it's me." Hearing this, Felina let out a long sigh of relief, but she still did not dare to completely trust him. Thus, while preparing various defensive spells, she cautiously stepped out from her hiding place. Then, she was horrified to discover that the terrifying monster which had filled her with dread was now being held by Ebner by the back of its neck, dangling in his hand like a harmless house cat. Although the size was wrong, the appearance was wrong, and the aura was not quite right, Felina still recognized that the cat in Ebner's hand was precisely the monster that had been chasing her. I remember that before the amusement park was demolished, it was called Black Cat Amusement Park. So this cat is the monster generated within this inner world? Zio asked curiously as she looked at the black cat hanging obediently. That's right. This inner world is the Black Cat's amusement park, and the people who accidentally enter are all its toys. Cats have a habit of playing with their prey. The laughter we heard before entering was both its pleasure and the wailing of humans, Ebner sighed. It could only be said that the amusement park's name had truly been ill-omened. And after studying an inner world monster at close range, Ebner had also gained a rough understanding of its origin. However, I still need to find what Roselle left behind in order to finally confirm it. As he pondered inwardly, Ebner looked at the still shocked Felina and smiled as he asked, "You're not injured, are you?" "No." Felina shook her head, then bowed and said, "Thank you for saving me once again." "It's nothing. I believe I said before that after leaving here, I'll need your help with some matters. Protecting you now can be considered an equivalent exchange," Ebner said meaningfully. "As long as it's something I can do, I will definitely help," Madame Felina replied earnestly. After a brief exchange of courtesies, Zio looked at the cat again and asked, "How should we deal with it?" "Kill it. Killing it is meaningless. As long as this inner world exists, it will regenerate." Ebner shook his head. "So the best method is to seal it. How do we do that?" A trace of curiosity flashed through Edwina's pale blue eyes. "Didn't that urban legend rulebook already say it?" Ebner asked with a smile. "Urban legend rules." Edwina frowned, then suddenly realized. The base station's main control room, the staff member wearing black work clothes. That's right. Its manifestation in reality is that so-called staff member in black work clothes. And only it, the master of this inner world, can shelter those who accidentally enter when the inner and outer worlds intersect. And due to the restrictions of the rules, as long as the lost person sees it in the control room, it cannot harm them. Of course, this thing isn't a rule-abiding cat. Occasionally, it can create a fake main control room to confuse people, but it still cannot bypass the rules. So as long as the lost person exits and re-enters when they don't see it, that's enough. As for how to seal it, it's very simple. Bring this true body directly into the outer world and place it in the main control room, letting it stay together with its manifestation. Because that place is a safe room under the rules, it cannot harm anyone there. And that place is also the only location in this base station that will not intersect with the inner amusement park, so it can no longer return to the inner world to harm people. Unless the entanglement between the inner and outer worlds deepens further. As Ebner spoke, he led the three companions out of the tunnel along the tracks, but did not head toward the crack he had torn open earlier. "Aren't we returning to the outer world?" Zio asked in surprise. Ebner casually erased the crack, then shook the black cat in his hand and replied with a smile. "Since we're bringing it along, we have to leave through a proper loophole. Otherwise, it would escape the constraints of the rules." A proper loophole, the carousel. Zio recalled the contents of the urban legend rules and said thoughtfully. Yes. The carousel is a concept of the error pathway. The power Roselle bestowed upon the rules should have borrowed this symbolism, which is why the carousel is the only legitimate exit in the proper process of this inner world. At this point, something suddenly stirred in Ebner's heart. He then activated the pure white eye, split off a wisdom eye, and followed the connection of the unknown, letting it descend outside a certain city in the forsaken land of the gods. He sensed that his historical projection had been pulled out by Derek using a talisman. In the forsaken land of the gods, outside Nightmare Town, where even lightning could not fully illuminate the darkness. The projected Ebner pulled out by Derek was somewhat sluggish at first, but in the blink of an eye, his gaze became lively. He looked around at the 2 demon hunters and 1 shepherd, greeted little son, and then turned his attention to the tall figure at the front carrying 2 straight swords on his back. He pressed a hand to his chest and gave a salute. "It is an honor to see you again, Lord Colin Iliad." End of the chapter. Chapter 1167, 1-42, and the Chief. It was a great honor to see you again, Your Excellency Colin Iliad. Although Ebner's current strength had already far surpassed that of the Chief of Silver City, because of the impression left by the original work, he still held deep respect for the man. After all, this was a true warrior who had dedicated everything to the residents of Silver City. If he had not fallen, he might have had a chance to advance to glory. Seeing that Mr. Tower had no hostile intentions toward the Silver City squad, Colin Iliad remained vigilant, but on the surface he still responded courteously. "Mr. Tower, welcome once again to set foot upon this land abandoned by the gods." Next, he took the initiative to introduce the situation of Nightmare Town to Ebner. According to the records, this abandoned city-state was actually a prison. The giants imprisoned captured captives here, as well as certain dangerous items that were inconvenient to deal with. After the Lord reclaimed the giants' authority, this place's function was preserved. Until the Lord's radiance disappeared, this city was suddenly swallowed by nightmares, becoming what it is today. I once explored this city, but within its deeper nightmares, something terrifying seemed to be hidden, so I did not continue further. In other words, the skeleton demon wolf was likely only the surface-level lord of this abandoned city-state, while something even more troublesome was very likely being suppressed deep within the nightmare. After stroking his chin and thinking for a moment, Ebner used the ability Cognizer to observe the ruins surrounded on 3 sides by a zigzag-shaped river, and then said thoughtfully. "There really might be a troublesome fellow hidden inside, however, we actually only need to block the entrance to the deeper nightmare and capture the skeleton demon wolf. There's no need to disturb him." Colin, Wit, and even Elder Lovia of the Shepherds were startled by that form of address and repeated it almost in unison. Meanwhile, son Derek, due to his habits from the Tarot Club, directly asked, "Mr. Tower, who exactly is hidden inside Nightmare Town?" For an existence that could be imprisoned here by the giants, its identity is naturally somewhat special. Ebner smiled, did not keep them in suspense, and directly said, "It is the child of the ancient god Phlegria, the remnant soul left behind after the death of a demon wolf, which has taken up residence here." Ebner's messenger was another child of Phlegria, so he was naturally not unfamiliar with the offspring of the demon wolf king. Moreover, because Phlegria reproduced through instinctive mating and breeding, producing many children, the separated beyonder characteristics could not be controlled, resulting in vast disparities in strength among his offspring. The weaker ones were even only at the low sequence level and were often killed by Phlegria shortly after being born. But the powerful ones, such as Antigonus, the Mother of Heaven, or the one inside Nightmare Town, were born as mythical creatures. Unfortunately, after Phlegria and Lilith perished together, the domain of the demon wolf race was jointly carved up by other ancient gods. This one was captured by the giant king at that time, imprisoned in the prison city, and ultimately died unwillingly. However, as a naturally born mythical creature, he was naturally not so easy to completely perish. In the end, during the cataclysm, his remnant soul transformed into a malevolent spirit, dragging the entire prison city into a nightmare, resulting in the current situation. Phlegria, the demon wolf king. Colin recalled the relevant information and made a brief assessment before carefully asking, "Is there anything you need our help with?" The reason he had personally led this squad, gathering the peak strength of Silver City, to the outskirts of Nightmare Town was naturally not just to protect Derek's safety, but to, within their capabilities, show goodwill toward Tower, in the hope that the other party, and the Mr. Fool behind him, would see the value of Silver City. After all, only things with value were worth saving. I originally thought that relying on myself would be enough to capture the skeleton demon wolf, but now the situation has clearly exceeded my expectations, so I do indeed need you to provide a bit of help. Ebner could guess Colin's thoughts, so he did not refuse and directly laid out his plan. "I need you to send one person into Nightmare Town to deliberately alarm the skeleton demon wolf, forcing it to attempt to flee toward the deeper nightmare, and I will set a trap and wait for it." Driving prey into a trap. A simple yet practical plan, a common hunting method, the only real difficulty lay in the setting of the trap. Of course, as the one driving the prey, I would also need to maintain strong pressure, otherwise, that skeleton demon wolf would not think of fleeing. After a brief consideration, Colin accepted Ebner's plan. However, relying on himself alone to drive away the skeleton demon wolf was indeed somewhat strenuous. In the past, it had always required the cooperation of an entire squad to force that demon wolf to retreat into the deeper dream. As for Lovia and Wit beside him, he still needed the two of them to balance Derek and guard against accidents, so he did not plan to let them enter the nightmare together. Otherwise, he would also have to guard against them, making the objective even harder to accomplish. Ebner easily cognized Colin's difficulty. After a brief thought, he simulated the ability of a scholar of yore and pulled out the projection of the Evernight Church's sealed artifact, 1-42. 1-42 was also known as the Mad Armor or the Bloodthirsty Armor. It was stained with the blood of a certain ancient god from before the Cataclysm and possessed part of the abilities of a Silver Knight. Ebner had previously come into close contact with it when he infiltrated behind the Chinese gate of St. Samuel Cathedral. Even Leonard, who could only simply utilize an extremely small portion of this item's power, had been able to heavily injure Jason Beria, the Desire Apostle. If it were in the hands of a top-tier demon hunter like Colin, it would naturally be able to exert even greater power. After briefly introducing the functions and side effects of 1-42, Ebner smiled and said, "I'll lend this item to you for now. After we succeed later, I'll have another gift to thank you." Colin was just about to say there was no need, when he heard Mr. Tower in front of him continue, "Don't refuse. You should have heard Derek say that equivalent exchange is a rule established by Mr. Fool. Moreover, I believe that gift is something you will definitely need." After hearing these words, Colin nodded thoughtfully. He had originally planned to use the merit from this operation to pray to that Mr. Fool for the method of using Worms of Time to add another trump card for exploring the mausoleum. But now, Mr. Tower seemed to have guessed his thoughts and had other arrangements, so he naturally no longer insisted on his own calculations. In fact, there's no need for any other reward. As long as Mr. Tower lends me this item once more when I explore the mausoleum, that will be enough. After using his demon hunting eye to observe 1-42 for a moment, Colin thought silently. And while Colin was holding 1-42 and observing the blood of the ancient god, the corner of Ebner's mouth curled up slightly. Because in his eyes, the fate of the chief of Silver City had deviated at this moment, gradually intersecting with Ormir. Although there would be all kinds of dangers in the process, this was the other party's only opportunity to advance to Angel. This chapter ends. Chapter 1168, Pulling Teeth and Indo. In the forsaken land of the gods, inside Nightmare Town. The moment Colin stepped into the town, an orange-red radiance suddenly burst forth from his body, illuminating the collapsed or decayed buildings, illuminating the streets paved with grayish-white stone slabs, illuminating the ruins that were quiet to the extreme. On the streets, one human silhouette after another appeared in his vision. Some wore linen-like long robes, others wore animal skin clothing, as if they were coming and going, busily occupied. Sensing the light of dawn, they all turned their heads at the same time without making a sound, collectively staring toward Chief Colin. And Colin Iliad, clad in the sealed artifact, 1-42, followed the experience from his last exploration and ignored them, striding resolutely toward the prison at the center of the town where terrifying criminals and beyonder items were once held. At the same time, two dark green, complex symbols surfaced in his eyes, drawing the streets shrouded in faint mist and the figures that looked normal yet made no sound at all into his pupils. Suddenly, he let out a muffled grunt and dropped to one knee. However, his hands tightly gripped the two straight swords, smoothly plunging them into the ground. At the back of his neck, bluish-black skin swelled slightly, and indescribably complex and mysterious symbols bulged out, half illusory and half real, spreading into higher or lower layers. In the next instant, the surface of 1-42 also changed. An indistinct silver armor eerily surfaced, protecting him. But demon hunter Colin had to stop his steps and confront, at some distance away, a gigantic demon wolf composed entirely of bones, black flames blazing in its eye sockets. Different from when I explored this place last time, the strength of this skeleton demon wolf has actually increased by quite a bit. Although it hasn't reached true demigod level yet, within this nightmare town, its combat power probably won't be weaker than mine. That Mr. Tower must have noticed this, which is why he lent me this armor formed from the Silver Knight characteristic, right? While thinking, Colin had already lowered his back, drawn the two straight swords coated with ointment, and charged toward the opposing skeleton demon wolf at hurricane-like speed. However, this demon hunter did not charge in a straight line. His footwork was strange, swaying his body left and right as he approached the enemy in a wave-like path. Seeing this, the black flames in the skeleton demon wolf's eyes flickered once. Immediately after, a pair of ghastly white, razor-sharp fangs extended from its mouth and touched the ground. With a snap, countless spirits surged out from those fangs and, together with the eerie figures in the ruins, rushed toward Colin. Yet, demon hunter Colin leapt up a step ahead of them, soaring more than 10 meters into the air. From a commanding height, he slashed downward with the twin swords in his hands. At the same time, as the armor on Colin's body flickered, countless orange-red sword lights pierced straight through the spirits and figures. In an instant, most of them were annihilated. Only a single spirit without a fixed form remained unharmed, instead transforming into a shield that stood between the demon wolf and Colin. Clang! At this moment, Colin's two straight swords also struck the shield formed by that spirit, sparking countless arcs of electricity. Amid the chaotic flashes of silver-white light, cracks immediately appeared on the surface of the shield, as if it would shatter with just a bit more force. But how could the skeleton demon wolf watch such a thing happen? It immediately clacked its bone fangs together, producing a melody like a lullaby, causing the 1 to 42 on Colin's body to instantly dim. Having briefly lost the empowerment of the Silver Knight, Colin knew that this attack could not break through the opponent's defense. He immediately used the rebound force to leap back, flipping in midair. Before he even landed, after sensing that 1 to 42 had already shaken off the influence of the lullaby, he launched another attack. After 3 consecutive rounds, the skeleton demon wolf's reliance, that near-demigod-level special spirit, finally could no longer hold on and was successfully breached by Colin. But the skeleton demon wolf was not panicked. It viciously glared at Colin, who had once again closed in, as if to memorize his appearance and aura. Then its figure gradually faded, preparing to flee into a deeper layer of the dream. The special nature of this place's environment put it in an invincible position. This was also the reason the skeleton demon wolf did not even take a demon hunter seriously. After all, it did not believe that the opposing half-giant would dare chase into the deeper nightmare, because that was the domain of their demon wolf race. If he truly followed it in, it had no idea how many methods it could use to completely keep him there. This human has already come a second time. If he comes again next time, I'll have to think of a way to lure him deep into the nightmare. His spirit is stronger than any I've sealed before. This kind of radiance isn't common. Just as the skeleton demon wolf was thinking with the brain it didn't actually have, it suddenly noticed something was wrong. It actually saw a human on the streets of this deep layer dream. But this deeper nightmare was different from the surface layer. It was essentially the dream of a divine child of the demon wolf race. Humans here could only be filthy slaves or reserve food, with absolutely no qualification to walk the streets. Before it could figure out what was going on, the figure on the street instantly arrived in front of it and said regretfully, "Skeleton demon wolf, what a pity you don't have blood. Otherwise, capturing you wouldn't require so much trouble. You forced me to use the abilities of the door and marauder pathways to develop, on the spot, a low-end version of the grafting ability, dragging you, this little dog, into my dream." This person was naturally Ebner's historical projection. Taking advantage of the gap while the skeleton demon wolf and the chief were fighting, he completed the grafting of the dream, ultimately making it walk right into the trap. Although the skeleton demon wolf was not very smart, no matter how stupid it was, after hearing Ebner's completely undisguised words, it understood its situation. It immediately prepared to erupt violently and subdue the human in front of it. "You're still not behaving after coming into my dream. Don't you know I have lots of scary things here?" Ebner shook his head with amusement. Immediately afterward, his pupils suddenly became gloomy as he simulated the ability of a horror bishop. In the next moment, the fear within the skeleton demon wolf was manifested one by one. Antigonus, the mother of heaven, the god of the undead; Salinger, the god of fear; Moore. Looking at the figures that continuously appeared around the skeleton demon wolf, Ebner could not help but click his tongue. He hadn't expected this little wolf to be weak in strength yet fear only big shots, but why wasn't there a goddess? I remember that in the original work, Antigonus mentioned that the goddess had a gentle personality and was extremely good at soothing the soul. Although she wasn't liked by those children of Phlegria, in the eyes of this kind of mid to low level little wolf, the goddess might very well be a white moonlight, so naturally it wouldn't fear her. With strange thoughts spinning through his mind, Ebner glanced at the little wolf that had already collapsed onto the ground, only able to whimper. He directly manifested an operating table in his own dream, then teleported the skeleton demon wolf onto it and bound it with a demoness spider silk. Ebner himself held a hammer in one hand and pliers in the other, smiling at the trembling demon wolf as he said, "Come, let's pull out a tooth first, don't be afraid." While pulling out the tooth, most of Ebner's attention was focused on Nightmare Town. The result, however, was that there was no movement at all. He could not help but think regretfully. Moore's evil spirit is really cautious. I've already tried my best to suppress my own strength, yet it still refuses to come out. Forget it, let's leave it at this for now. My projection entering its nightmare domain doesn't give me an advantage. One moment of carelessness and I could flip the cart. Next time, when my main body comes over, I'll enter its dream again and take a look. Within the ancient palace above the grey fog, Klein, who was preparing to head to Calderon City for his first exploration, was struggling over which blasphemy card to use to fuse with his spirit body when he suddenly received a sacrifice from his son. This is the skeleton demon wolf's fang that Leonard needs, and the blood of the trickster abomination that I wanted. Mr. Tower's efficiency really is high. I can't fall behind either. Thinking this, Klein gritted his teeth and ultimately picked up the Demoness card. His spiritual intuition told him that, compared to the Black Emperor, Moon, and Error, the Demoness was more compatible with the environment of Calderon City. At the same time, the Red Glove squad Leonard was in once again narrowly missed the fugitive they were pursuing. That bastard might already have boarded a passenger ship heading to Indoport, one Red Glove said with a rather grim expression. Sost, however, merely nodded silently and instructed, immediately verify this information. If it's true, we also need to disguise ourselves and head to Indo at once to intercept and kill him before he returns to the Twilight Temple. For follow-up operations, members below Sequence 6 are not to participate. After all, within FASAC territory, our Red Gloves are in a very delicate position. Indo. Hearing the name of the city, Leonard felt somewhat dazed, because not long ago, World had conveyed some information to him through Mr. Fool, and among it was Insangwil, that guy was very likely in Indoport. This chapter ends. Chapter 1169, Gathering at Indoport. FASAC, Indoport, Golden Horn Bay Manor. One of the vice presidents of the secret order, that scholar of your Nelly Pitt, lived in seclusion here. He had originally wanted to excavate the truth behind the unknown divine war that took place here at the end of the fourth epoch, in order to digest the scholar of your potion. But unfortunately, during the period last year when the Twilight Castle ruins appeared in the outer sea, he happened not to be in FASAC. Regretfully, he missed it and failed to investigate it personally. However, he was not dejected. At present, he was searching for a way to re-enter that nightmare ruin. On the surface, Mr. Nelly Pitt's identity was that of the mayor of Indoport, and he also held the title of Viscount. Coupled with the fact that he had lived here for nearly 40 years, no one had ever suspected him. As it was already approaching midnight, Nelly put down his work and called for his manservant to help organize the documents so he could continue tomorrow. But just as the manservant entered the living room, Nelly's eyes suddenly narrowed. A few seconds later, he sealed the room with spirituality and demanded sharply, "Who are you?" This was definitely not his manservant, because his manservant's spirit body threads would not be controlled by another person. Worthy of being Mr. Pitt. My little trick really couldn't fool you. The manservant first gave a strange smile, then transformed, becoming a lady with delicate and beautiful features. Daphne Priestley. Nelly Pitt recognized the other party's identity, but his vigilance only deepened. After the chairman's disappearance, there had been no lack of struggles among them vice presidents. Although they had not completely torn their faces apart, it had still resulted in the current situation where each of them controlled a separate branch. "What business do you have with me?" Nelly Pitt asked cautiously. Seeing this, Daphne did not beat around the bush and replied with a smile, "I'm here to convey the chairman's order. The chairman will be holding a gathering at 8 o'clock Saturday night, and he wants you to attend on time." "What? The chairman? He has reappeared." Nelly's astonished expression was something even the abilities of a clown could not fully suppress, but he quickly calmed down and asked carefully, "Do you have any proof?" "Of course." As she spoke, Daphne handed a badge to Nelly. Nelly took it carefully and examined it before nodding. It is indeed the chairman's aura. At this point, he paused, clearly having confirmed the authenticity of the order Daphne conveyed, and then asked, "Where will the gathering be held? Who will attend?" "You, me, Mord, and all the other demigod-level members will attend. Speaking of which, you're not even the farthest one. After this, I still have to make a trip to the southern continent. As for the location, the chairman said that as long as you keep the badge with you, you will naturally know when the time comes." Daphne gave a simple explanation, answering his questions. Nelly rubbed the badge thoughtfully for a moment, then said in a flat, emotionless tone, "All right, I've received your notification. I will attend on time Saturday night. You may leave now." Daphne had long been prepared for the dismissal. After all, the three vice presidents did not get along with each other, so she merely lifted her skirt and performed a courtesy before disappearing. Clearly, what had just appeared was only a historical projection, and not even her own. After she left, Mr. Nelly continued to toy with the badge while thinking quietly for quite a while, until his real manservant knocked on the door and entered, reporting that his friend Mr. Osman had come to visit. Osman. Gluttony of the psychological alchemists. Why would he come looking for me so late? Nelly was puzzled, but after hesitating for a few seconds, he still instructed the manservant to bring the visitor to the reception room. Indoport, inside a small inn in the dock district. Insangwil picked up a quill and wrote in his notebook. "Because Gluttony Osman suddenly decided to visit the mayor of Indoport, I once again missed Azek Eggers. After writing this passage, he complained in a muttering monologue, the one tracking gluttony is actually Azek. This city is becoming more and more dangerous. It's completely unsuitable to stay any longer. Ince had an extremely deep impression of Azek, that death consul in poor condition. Back in Tingen, the other party had nearly ruined his plans, and later he had even almost been beaten to death by him directly. At least before becoming Sequence 3, Ince absolutely did not want to encounter him again. The angelic evil spirit of the Sauron family within his body, however, laughed indifferently and said, but that Fatman does have some ability. Under his maneuvering, during this year's Twilight Day festival, the Einhorn family will hold an exhibition of part of their family collection here in Indo, and among them is my sword, isn't that right? Fatman? Ince asked in confusion. Heh, it's that gluttony. He's performed a mental-level disguise on his own image. It's normal that you couldn't tell. The evil spirit said casually. Just hold on for a few more days. After the Twilight Day festival ends on Monday night next week, we'll take that sword and immediately leave the city. I hope it goes smoothly. Inside, always feeling a little uneasy. Only after touching the fallen morning star he was wearing did he finally calm down. Although this item was not of a high level, it lived up to its reputation. When it came to concealing oneself, it was indeed quite reliable. Indoport, inside a villa in the West Borough. Sultana, a member of the official Demon Hunter squad, carefully glanced at Azek, whose expression had not been very good since returning, and asked hesitantly, Ancestor, was there something wrong with the intelligence I obtained? Seeing his descendant looking at him nervously, Azek's expression softened somewhat. He shook his head and said, it wasn't your problem. Someone diverted his fate. Diverted fate. Someone can actually do something like that. Sultana looked shocked. Although she was a member of an official squad, she was still young, only 23 years old, and her experience was inevitably limited. Even though she was already a Sequence 7 spirit medium. I more or less know who did it. Coincidentally, I'm also looking for him. Mr. Azek first sighed, then explained to Sultana, there are quite a few pathways capable of diverting fate. After reaching high sequence, Spectator, Reader, Mystery Prior, and Monster are all adept at this. This time, the one manipulating fate behind the scenes was a sealed artifact. But you'd better not inquire too much, because the more you understand it, the more it understands you. There was actually such a sealed artifact. Sultana clicked her tongue in amazement, but wisely did not ask further. In fact, she had not originally planned to help this bargain ancestor of hers at all. It was only after meeting Silica and learning that gluttony of the psychological alchemists was the enemy of her ancestral line that she changed her mind. In the mountain hot spring manor outside the northern suburbs of Indoport, Countess Laws, Greed, Xenia, welcomed her guest, or rather, her master, Miss Sloth, Closphia. At the last Supreme Council meeting of the psychological alchemists, they had agreed to Gluttony's request to come to Indoport to help a month later. And now, they had arrived right at the tail end of that promise. Do I need to notify Gluttony that we've arrived? Xenia asked for instructions. Closphia's eyes rolled slightly, and then she smiled. Wait a bit. Notify him after Mr. Lust arrives. At the same time, because Vice Admiral Iceberg had followed Ebner on an expedition and the entire crew of the Golden Dream was on leave, Danitz also chose Indoport as his vacation spot for a certain reason. Wrapped in a dark cloak and carrying a suitcase, he was sweating profusely as he walked along the dock road toward the outside of the harbor. Afterward, Danitz glanced left and right, reached out to stop a carriage, and instructed an old Faceac. In. The driver looked at him with a blank expression and said, "You, #hashtag it and what? What the hell is he saying? I can only understand a few words. Damn it, don't Faceac people speak old Faceac." Danitz was stunned for a moment, then couldn't help cursing inwardly. He had always thought that knowing old Faceac would let him travel freely throughout Faceac. After holding it in for a long while, Danitz laboriously opened his mouth and subconsciously spoke in Loanese. "Take me to the nearest and first." Hearing this, the driver seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and replied in broken Loanese, "So you speak Loanese? That's great. Damn it. Why would a Faceac person not speak old Faceac, but instead speak Loanese?" Danitz complained inwardly a few times, but still got into the carriage and tossed the driver 10 pence. As a result, the carriage only moved forward for 10 seconds before stopping. What happened? Danitz looked at the driver in confusion. The latter pointed at the signboard by the roadside and once again said in broken Loanese, "We're here." Here. Hearing this, Danitz froze again, then jumped off the carriage and looked toward the roadside. Sure enough, he saw a rather old 4-story building. I actually got played by a carriage driver. Danitz was just about to get angry when he realized the carriage had already disappeared at some point, turning into an alley. I didn't remember what he looked like. But at least my goal was achieved. I just wasted 10 pence for nothing. As Danitz was consoling himself inwardly, his gaze suddenly sharpened again, and he raised a hand to rub his eyes. Because he saw a relatively familiar person. Right in front of Danitz, at the inn's entrance beneath the oil lamp, a young man with short golden hair parted in a 3/7 style was leaning against the wall, blowing on a silver-white harmonica. He had a pair of emerald green eyes and wore a white shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, a completely open black vest, and dark trousers. He wore a single, lonely black glove. He was none other than the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea, Anderson Hood. Why did this wolf-fish canned food also come here? This chapter ends. Chapter 1170, The Foundation. At night, inside an apartment of roughly only 80 square meters in the urban legend world. Ebner, Zio, Edwina, and Felina gathered together, compiling the intelligence they had obtained during the day while exploring the Black Cat amusement park. Because the area of this world was limited, land was extremely valuable, so an 80 square meter apartment was considered quite a large residence. Overall, those fragmented, inner worlds are actually the spirit world corresponding to this hidden space. However, unlike the abstract, unreadable spirit world we recognize, the inner world here appears far more orderly, almost like a reflection of a certain region of the outer world. This should be the result of someone forcibly carrying out a definition, borrowing the power of the Ghost Empire itself to accomplish it. Ebner slowly explained the results of his observations and pointed out the root of this world's disaster. I'm afraid it's the fusion of the 2 worlds, returning to chaos. The core of the Ghost Empire is that former apocalypse demoness, Monica, which also perfectly matches her own symbolism. After listening to Ebner's analysis, Zio said thoughtfully, was it Emperor Roselle who defined the inner world? Did he do this in order to slow down the trend of 2 worlds fusing? But this method is only a chronic death. It doesn't solve the root cause of the disaster. Ebner nodded, agreeing with her view. I also think it was Roselle's handiwork. I just don't know how exactly the fusion of the 2 worlds was triggered, to the point that even Roselle, who was already an angel at the time, was powerless. Perhaps if we find the items Roselle left behind in this world, we'll gain some clues. Additionally, we can ask the rulers of this world. Since they can produce those urban legend rules containing power, they clearly know something about the inside story. Zio, as a veteran agent of MI9, immediately proposed several plans. But we don't know where Roselle's leftover items are. We don't even know who the real power holders here are. In my character's memories, although a mayor is elected every few years, that's only the surface-level administrator. He definitely isn't the real power behind the scenes, Mrs. Felina raised an objection. In response to her doubt, Zio borrowed Edwina's phone and pulled up the previous news article titled, The 250th Anniversary Celebration of St. Roselle's Birth. Because the technological level of this world was only around that of the early 2000s from Ebner's previous life, and had only just developed 2G networks, plus the apartment being relatively far from a base station, it took quite a while for the webpage to load. Zio pointed at the images on the page and analyzed, under normal circumstances, it really would take quite some effort to investigate, but tomorrow just happens to be Emperor Roselle's birth anniversary celebration. According to the memories I obtained from my role, such celebrations used to be held only once every 10 years, but recently they've been getting more and more frequent. In the past few years, they've actually been held every single year. I suspect the celebration is just a smokescreen. The rulers of this world are probably using it to conduct some kind of ritual to maintain the power of Roselle's leftover items. So I guess that during tomorrow's celebration, whether it's Roselle's items or the real power holders behind this world, they will both appear. Hearing this, Edwina and Felina both nodded after some brief thought, feeling that Zio's speculation made a lot of sense. As for Ebner, he thought of the churches scattered across the northern continent and felt that the rulers of this world might be gathering faith to replenish the power of Roselle's leftover items. After all, this world had no gods. As a saint who had opened wisdom and brought civilization, Roselle naturally received the worship of the masses. Next, the 4 of them refined the plan for tomorrow's actions, exchanging ideas back and forth, before washing up and resting separately. At a sewer entrance on the edge of the city, a squad wearing special operations gear filed down one after another, murmuring something under their breaths while occasionally knocking on a specific rung of the ladder. However, in the next moment, the ladder seemed to extend infinitely, suddenly becoming so long that the end could not be seen at a glance. Yet the squad did not panic. Instead, they began climbing upward, and after climbing for more than 10 minutes, their view suddenly opened up as they entered a vast plain. This was clearly an inner world, but it was planted with large quantities of wheat and vegetables, looking unexpectedly full of vitality. Every time I see these crops, I feel like humanity still has hope, that we can ultimately defeat the apocalypse. One squad member murmured while gazing at the wheat fields. Upon hearing this, the squad leader's expression suddenly changed. He said sternly, B-rank combat personnel Robin, I suggest that after this mission handover, you immediately undergo psychological intervention. You must understand that when facing inner world monsters, any weakness or despair can be exploited. Hearing this, the squad member's face stiffened, and he gave a bitter smile. Captain, I was just venting a little. Isn't that unnecessary? No. Your mental state is already very dangerous. You're highly emotional and extremely easy to become nourishment for the growth of the inner world. The captain glanced at him. Don't think I'm exaggerating. Among the combat squads I've led, nearly half the people died for this very reason. All right. After the report, I'll go for psychological intervention. The squad member shrugged. After that, the combat squad once again fell into silence, until they crossed the wheat fields and arrived at the gates of a castle. Restrict, protect, obey. Following regulations, they stared at the line of text personally written by Saint Roselle above the gate for 3 minutes before entering the castle and quickly arriving at the first-floor mission hall. An elderly man with white hair and beard was already waiting there. Honorable Speaker, we have completed the initial exploration of the newly appeared inner world at the 3rd Municipal Hospital. This is the reconnaissance briefing. The captain saluted first, then took out a floppy disk and handed it to the elderly man. Thank you for your hard work, but you cannot rest yet. Just now, D-rank personnel reported that the Black Cat amusement park has undergone changes. You have 30 minutes to prepare, then depart to ascertain the cause. The elderly man said gravely after accepting the disc. Yes, sir. The captain stood at attention and saluted again, then led his team out of the mission hall. After that, he instructed his subordinates, free activity for 20 minutes. Assemble at the gate at 11 sharp. Having said that, the captain then looked at B-rank member Robin. You go for psychological intervention. You can be 5 minutes later than them. There's enough time. Yes, Captain. Robin replied verbally, but the moment he lowered his head, a sinister smile curved at the corner of his mouth. On the other side, after reviewing the contents of the floppy disk, the elderly man could not help but sigh. Inner world incursions are becoming more and more frequent, and the avoidance rules are getting harder and harder to follow. If this continues, it will be very difficult for the Foundation to keep this hidden from the general public. Fortunately, the time of the prophecy is approaching. I just wonder whether the one who successfully sealed the monster inside the Black Cat amusement park will be the new saint foretold in the prophecy. This chapter ends. Chapter 1171, The 3 Divine Artifacts. The Saint Roselle birth anniversary celebration was held on the only mountain in this urban legend world. At the summit of this mountain stood a temple, said to enshrine Saint Roselle's remains and relics. Under normal circumstances, it was not open to outsiders. Only during the 1 month when the celebration was held were civilians allowed to enter, to express their gratitude to the saint. Although ordinary people were unaware of matters concerning the inner world, the civilization Roselle had brought to this world was still worthy of such treatment. Worship was an officially mandated requirement. Every resident had to participate, and since Ebner's group of 4 did not want to wait any longer, they lined up at the foot of the mountain early the next morning. This scene inexplicably reminded Ebner of the mass testing before his transmigration. The only difference was that there was no need to wear masks. However, in a world shrouded by the symbolism of a demoness, thinking about an epidemic was definitely not a good omen. Ebner muttered to himself for a few moments, then said to the 3 women behind him, "Later, I'll enter the temple first. If you notice anything abnormal, act immediately according to the plan we discussed last night." Understood, Zio and Felina nodded. Only Edwina hesitated for a moment before saying, "I have foreseen that this world is about to undergo a huge change. It seems that something is awakening." Foreseen. Ebner frowned slightly. Although he had the same premonition, that was because he had the pure white eye as a cheat. An ordinary seer should find it very difficult to peer into the river of fate within the Ghost Empire. What was more, Edwina's beyonder abilities were still being blocked by the Hand of Order, and she currently only had the so-called professional skills bestowed by it. That meant this foresight did not come from her herself. So that was it, no wonder she had turned into a dragon in the very first world. It must have been that 2-5 dragon forcibly enhancing the effectiveness of her abilities by using the authority of the White Tower, giving her a cheat, right? No wonder her initial level exceeded her own sequence level. I even thought it was preferential treatment for a villain. As his thoughts turned, Ebner did not point it out. After all, it was actually better that the 2-5 dragon had made preparations. At the very least, the safety of Edwina and the others should be guaranteed. Because the birth anniversary celebration had been held very frequently in recent times, the organizers were highly experienced, so it quickly became Ebner's group's turn. The solemn temple appeared somewhat empty. At the central seat, a man with chestnut-colored, slightly wavy long hair, blue eyes, a high nose bridge, thin lips, and 2 meticulously groomed mustaches sat upright. His complexion was ruddy, his expression dignified, looking just like a living person. In his hands, he also held a book with a relatively ancient style. The moment Ebner stepped through the temple doors, he could tell at a glance that the Roselle seated on the chair was not a person but merely a mechanical puppet covered in realistic synthetic skin. Moreover, due to long-term lack of maintenance and depleted energy, it was on the verge of being scrapped. Still, calling this Roselle's remains isn't exactly wrong. This so-called celebration really is a kind of ritual. Its purpose should merely be to maintain the spirituality of this puppet so that it doesn't completely dissipate. But what use is that? Preserving a bit of spirituality still won't make him move again. Ebner was somewhat puzzled, then shifted his gaze to the book held in Roselle's hands. After a brief consideration, he no longer bothered with restraint and directly reached out to summon the book in front of himself. The other worshippers around him were completely accustomed to this and showed no reaction. Only an armed squad from the Foundation inside the temple seemed to notice something amiss. They immediately called for reinforcements and surrounded the temple tightly. Ebner ignored them. After all, these ordinary people's firearms could no longer harm him. Most of his attention was already focused on that ancient-looking book. The Book of the Three Divine Artifacts. It really was here. Looking at the name on the cover, Ebner nodded slightly and then casually flipped through its contents. A moment later, he closed the book and pondered inwardly. The Emperor who brought civilization wields the Holy Seal. The Sovereign who proclaims death holds the Divine Sword. The Star King who achieves miracles raises the Magic Mirror. To seal the giant serpent that returns from reincarnation. This book roughly tells the story of three heroes using three divine artifacts to seal the all-devouring giant serpent. Only the final description is the key point. It should be the trigger condition for Roselle granting special powers to the so-called three divine artifacts. Although it might be a bit narcissistic, I feel that every sentence Roselle wrote is hinting at me. The Emperor who brought civilization most likely refers to Mechanical Emperor Evans. The Sovereign who proclaims death should be Lord of the Undead, Vicente. As for the Star King who achieves miracles, that would naturally be the original Wanderer, now the Miracle Invoker, Alvin. After all, as Alvin, I was revered by multiple life-bearing planets and was indeed honored as a Star King. In other words, it requires three different selves of me, each holding one divine artifact, and then performing the ritual according to this book's description, in order to activate the special ability added by Roselle as the Knowledge Emperor. Hey, it shouldn't be just Roselle. Judging from the effect being aimed at countering the revival of the giant serpent, one can guess that there must be the scheming of the Calamity Seal in this setup. Moreover, the one who originally incited Roselle to forge the so-called three divine artifacts was precisely the Calamity Seal. It's unlikely that it didn't meddle in some way. Only it, working together with Roselle's power to arrange things, could form an effective means to target the God of Luck. The only question is, why was this book placed here? Right, the later me favored by the Calamity Seal should have been Giuseppe. And Giuseppe has fate-level entanglements with the Ghost Empire, so he would inevitably come here. Placing the Book of the Three Divine Artifacts in this world counts as an ingenious arrangement. After all, if it were placed elsewhere, Giuseppe might very well miss it under the calculations of various gods and angels. But who would have thought that Lilith would be even more ruthless, personally stepping in to drag Giuseppe back for 10 years, massively diverting the fate of that of me. Of course, Lilith and the goddess simply didn't want a me of the Order pathway to grow and allow the Calamity Seal's conspiracy to succeed. As for whether I could obtain the Book of the Three Divine Artifacts, they were not opposed. After all, the final me, whether Oliver or Ebner, doesn't really matter to them. Of course, judging from the series of arrangements Lilith and the goddess made earlier, including Vera, Will, Yalalin, and Gozanam, they should all be more inclined toward me as Ebner. After all, compared to my previous selves, I'm relatively clean. As for the 2-5 dragon, it's accustomed to betting on multiple sides, so I'll withhold judgment for now. Chapter 1172, The Holy Seal. Although the God of Luck and the Calamity Seal are both me, from this round of long-distance confrontation, it's clear that neither of them is an easy opponent. But for me, their mutual targeting is actually a good thing. For example, these so-called three divine artifacts can become a ready-made support for me in the future when I deal with the God of Luck's follow-up moves. Hey, in other words, compared to the God of Luck, the Calamity Seal thinks I'm easier to deal with. Of course, this is most likely a gift it left for Giuseppe. Ebner closed the book and let out a quiet sigh. At this moment, an elderly man dressed in a retro long robe, with white hair and beard, entered the temple surrounded by an armed squad. His expression was solemn, and he was holding a golden seal in his hands. Because Ebner had used a secret technique to reduce his sense of presence, the armed personnel around actually could not see him. They only vaguely sensed that something was wrong, yet could not determine the source of the anomaly. However, the elderly man holding the golden seal made a brief judgment and then walked straight toward Ebner's direction. He only stopped when he was a few steps away from Ebner, then organized his words and spoke. Your Excellency, I am the chairman of the Foundation, Gold Gene. Please show yourself. I have important matters to convey to you. As he spoke, his gaze kept sweeping around, yet he was never able to meet Ebner's eyes. He can roughly judge my position but can't see me. Is he relying on the power of that seal? Ebner frowned slightly. If he didn't know that the Solon family's angelic evil spirit had always been residing in a seal in the real world, he would definitely think that this golden seal was one of the 3 divine artifacts, the seal. While Ebner was thinking, the old man named Gold Gene repeated his words once more. I have important intelligence to convey to you. Hearing this, Ebner came back to his senses. After hesitating for a few seconds, he lifted his secret technique and simply appeared out of thin air in front of the other party. The surrounding armed squad did not panic at the sight. They often encountered similar scenes in the inner world, but their nerves still tensed up. Relax, then withdraw from the temple. This excellency has no ill intent. The old man turned around and smiled as he instructed the squad members. His authority seemed very high. Even though the armed squad clearly showed concern, they still carried out the order. After only the old man named Gold Gene and Ebner were left, the former placed the golden seal back into Roselle's hands, then bowed and said, Your Excellency, the saint foretold your arrival. According to the saint's final instructions, the Foundation will follow your commands. The Foundation? That's a meme Roselle would come up with, and what this organization is doing now is indeed quite similar to the Real Foundation. Ebner muttered to himself inwardly, but outwardly asked. Tell me about the origins and current situation of your Foundation. Although upon seeing the other party he had already seen through most of it, due to the restrictions of the Ghost Empire, some key links were still missing. The old man seemed to have anticipated this question long ago. Without much hesitation, he replied. Your Excellency, the Foundation holds the highest authority in this world. And our mission is to delay this world's destruction as much as possible while waiting for your arrival. Next, he began to recount the origins of the Foundation and its development over more than 100 years. It turned out that when Roselle's mechanical puppet entered this world, the situation here was already quite dire. The spirit world and reality drawing ever closer, and the gradual disappearance of the barrier between them, caused many ordinary people to suddenly mutate into monsters, wantonly attacking others with low spirituality. The remaining humans could only hide and cling to life. But Roselle's arrival gave the people of this world hope. Not only did he bring civilization, he also added new rules to the 2 worlds, making the inner world itself more orderly. At least it had rules to follow when invading the outer world. After that, Roselle's mechanical puppet attempted to resolve the root of the disaster, but not only did it fail, it also exhausted the puppet's energy, making it unable to maintain normal operation. However, before completely crashing, he handed the Holy Seal to the Foundation that he had personally trained, told them how to barely use the Holy Seal by relying on the mechanical puppet, and finally left behind a prophecy. Wait, you said Holy Seal. This golden seal is the Holy Seal. Roselle called it the Holy Seal. Ebner interrupted in surprise. Gold Gene nodded and said, yes. It has always been called the Holy Seal. It is Saint Roselle's most precious treasure. Only, urban legend rules stamped with the Holy Seal can take effect. The Holy Seal is this golden seal. Then what was the seal that once housed the Solon family's last angelic evil spirit? I remember that it was once Roselle's imperial seal. Was it a spare for the Holy Seal? Or was it purely a decoy imitation to mislead others? Judging from the outcome, that Sauron family evil spirit has now completely separated from the seal. If it really were the Holy Seal, it would effectively have already been destroyed. Roselle foresaw that the seal would be destroyed, so he made a substitute and placed it outside, while hiding the real one within the Ghost Empire. Then who was it that destroyed the seal? Wait, I remember that when searching the soul of Jason Beria, the Apostle of Desire, who attacked my teacher, I obtained some related intelligence. The Androlad family had used a seal-type high-tier sealed artifact in their struggle with the other 2 major demon families. It could bring misfortune to people. It was an item Duke Yaldabaoth handed to the Androlad family to wield. Yaldabaoth was Roselle's adopted son. It was only natural for the old Huang-crafted seal to end up in his hands. So, was this a series of arrangements carried out by Yaldabaoth to destroy the seal? Why would he do that? That's right, Yaldabaoth's birth is inextricably linked to the god of luck. He was one of the products of the latter's soul stone experiments. If he actually represented the interests of the god of luck, then everything makes sense. Something that would affect the god of luck's future dominance would naturally need to be destroyed. Yet he didn't choose to do it himself, instead letting others' hands accomplish it. Thinking carefully, the Norse family and the Berith family, who directly collided with that possibly counterfeit seal, were almost completely wiped out by me. The lone royal family, which later obtained the seal, was destined to become my enemy. And Ince Zangwill, who ultimately caused the complete separation of the seal and the evil spirit within, would probably not escape calamity either. Yaldabaoth clearly knew these consequences, which was why he didn't act personally. However, he probably never imagined that what Roselle left for him was merely a high-quality fake. End of this chapter. Chapter 1173, The Father God. However, if the Holy Seal here truly was the seal among the 3 divine artifacts, then there should also be an angel's evil spirit sealed within it. Who would that be? With that thought in mind, Ebner did not stand on ceremony and directly picked up the so-called Holy Seal to examine it. After a moment, he discovered that there really was a soul of extremely high level lurking within the seal. It was just that, compared to the magic mirror back then, the sealing of the Holy Seal was far more complete, so it had remained in a state of deep slumber. Although I still can't determine the exact sequence of this remnant soul, from my observations it should be related to the order pathway. No wonder the Holy Seal can influence the hand of order within the Ghost Empire, creating those urban legend rules. Understanding dawned in Ebner's heart, but outwardly he showed no change in expression as he asked the elderly men before him. Mr. Gold Jean, when you came to find me just now, you said you had important information to tell me. What was it? Hearing this, Gold Jean, the white-haired and white-bearded chairman of the Foundation, became solemn and said gravely, "It is a sentence that the saint instructed the Foundation to pass on to you." "What is it?" Ebner pressed. "The root of the disaster lies in the primordial plane," Gold Jean meticulously repeated Roselle's final words from back then. Primordial plane. Upon hearing this, Ebner's eyelids twitched. That name is rather intimidating. Primordial is not a descriptor just anything is worthy of. Primordial plane, that's a place name, right? Where is it? Ebner asked again. The primordial plane is the place where this world first intersected with that other realm, and it is also the first inner world that formed after the saint saved the world. Our Foundation headquarters is currently located there. Additionally, because that plane is vast, with a pleasant climate and fertile soil, it is also the largest grain-producing region in this world. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to support a population of nearly 7 million. Farming inside an ordered spirit world. You people really are impressive. However, as far as I know, every single inner world produces a monster that is nearly unsolvable for that world. Only by using rules to seal it, like how I dealt with that black cat, can one possibly develop the corresponding inner world. The very first inner world, the primordial plane, would naturally be no exception. So, was it Roselle who sealed it back then? And what kind of monster could it have been, such that even Roselle was unable to completely resolve it? At that thought, Ebner suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. With a wave of his hand, he created a hidden space and stored Roselle's mechanical puppet, the Book of the 3 Divine Artifacts, and the Holy Seal inside it. Then he instructed Gold Jean. "Immediately take me to the entrance of the primordial plane. Something has probably gone wrong." With that, he grabbed the elderly men in front of him and flew straight out of the temple, while simultaneously pulling out a historical projection of himself to rendezvous with Zio, Edwina, and the others, protecting them in passing. If any major danger arose, it would immediately lead them away. But unexpectedly, they were still a step too late. When the projection arrived outside the temple, more than 10,000 people on that mountain peak had all vanished, clearly having fallen into a suddenly appearing super-large inner world. Fortunately, although the projection's strength was inferior to Ebner's true body, it possessed similarly abundant means. After a brief observation, it found a weak point in space, tore open a rift, and drilled its way inside. Meanwhile, Ebner's true body no longer had the bandwidth to worry about the projection situation. While carrying Gold Jean through the air, he was shocked to discover that in just a few short minutes, hundreds of inner worlds had appeared across this world, as if the apocalypse itself had entered a countdown. How could this happen? The elderly man, who was also observing the scene through the shared vision provided by Ebner, cried out in shock, his face filled with disbelief. This must mean that something has gone wrong in the so-called primordial plane. If this world is to continue existing, hurry up and point the way. Ebner said with a frown. I'm not too worried about Zio and Edwina. They have the talismans I gave them, as well as the backing of the princess and the dragon. Escaping safely shouldn't be too difficult. As for Felina, the fact that she so coincidentally entered the Ghost Empire and encountered me means someone must be arranging things behind the scenes. Naturally, someone else will worry about her. Hearing this, Gold Jean snapped back to his senses. After a brief consideration, he made up his mind and pointed toward a small alley at the foot of the mountain. The nearest entrance is in the sewer beneath that alley. Ebner followed the direction he pointed and saw that the space around the alley was already becoming abnormal, as if something were about to burst out, creating an extremely oppressive feeling. The precursor to an inner world invasion. As expected, is the thing sealed within the primordial plane about to break free. Ebner narrowed his eyes and evaluated the power level being displayed. After making a preliminary judgment that he could handle it, he set the chairman of the Foundation back on the ground, then directly opened a door and stepped into the so-called primordial plane. On the boundless plains where the Foundation headquarters was located, the once vibrant scenery had completely vanished, replaced by a bizarre blood-red expanse. The wheat, vegetables, and other crops planted here had transformed into grotesque monsters, sprouting tentacles and revealing sharp teeth as they lunged toward the few armed squads still resisting. Inside a hastily constructed defensive position, several soldiers together hurled Molotov cocktails, temporarily driving back the wheat monsters that had charged forward. Yet there was no joy on anyone's face, only deep gravity. "Captain, this won't work. Those wheat-turned monsters can regenerate endlessly, and we're running low on Molotovs," the observer spoke up. "Yes, Captain. We should withdraw first and come back after replenishing our supplies," another team member followed. His expression was extremely ugly. The more he had loved those wheat fields before, the more he now loathed them. The captain, however, shook his head. "Withdraw. Headquarters has already fallen, where can we retreat to? Besides, it was our negligence. We failed to notice that Robin had already been possessed by a monster and still brought him back to headquarters, which led to this disaster. We must make up for the mistake we made." Hearing the captain's resolute words, the other team members fell silent for a few seconds, then spoke one after another. "Captain, you're right. This is our responsibility. I must personally kill the monster that possessed Robin. If the Foundation is gone, the world will be destroyed sooner or later. We have no path of retreat at all. Captain, we'll use the remaining Molotovs to draw away those monsters. You charge straight into the castle and restart the Saint Seal in one go." The captain pressed his lips together, then accepted his subordinate's suggestion and gave them a military salute. Then, under the cover of his teammates sacrificing their lives, he charged all the way to the castle gate, upon which were inscribed in the saint's own hand the words "Restrict, Protect, and Obey." But at that very moment, a woman of peerless beauty, her entire body exuding an aura of temptation, walked out from within the castle. Embedded in her sleeve was a human face, faintly recognizable as Robin's. At the sight of this, tears streamed from the corners of the captain's eyes. He had not cried when headquarters fell. He had not cried when his teammates sacrificed themselves to buy him a chance, but now, his tears flowed uncontrollably. Because he recognized the woman before him, she was precisely the original monster that the saint had sealed beneath the castle. Despair flooded the captain's heart. He understood that all of his and his teammates' efforts had already come to nothing, that the world was about to end. His mentality collapsed. But collapse did not mean surrender. Even knowing it would be useless, he still raised his firearm and pulled the trigger at the woman's sleeve. Even if he was going to die, he would first deal with the traitor of his squad. However, the face of Robin embedded in the woman's sleeve twisted into a mocking expression, as he waited for the captain to humiliate himself. At that moment, the captain's gun barrel was pressed down by a hand, and a man abruptly appeared at his side. It was Ebner. Seeing the way he appeared, the captain froze for a moment, then burst into wild joy. Are you the new saint descended as foretold in the prophecy?" Ebner looked at the captain with appreciation and gave a slight nod. Just as he was about to reply, Robin's face sneered and spoke provocatively. "A new saint? Ha ha ha, unfortunately, you're too late. The demon lord has already revived. You all." Before he could finish, the beautiful woman cast him a single glance, and he instantly turned into a block of stone. Before being completely petrified, Robin struggled to move his mouth, vibrating the air in broken fragments. "Demon Lord, why?" The woman known as the Demon Lord ignored him entirely. Instead, she walked straight up to Ebner and respectfully bowed. "Greetings, Father God." End of this chapter. Chapter 1174, The Succubus Creator. Father God. What kind of ridiculous title is that? Could it be that some version of me from a previous life caused trouble again? Ebner looked at the woman before him. She had signature long green hair, wore tight-fitting clothes, and exuded an intense aura of allure, and immediately judged that she was a demoness. Moreover, she was a demoness at the angel level, though clearly not a living one. The main material of this ghost empire is actually that former apocalypse demoness, the succubus Monica, who was tricked by the Night Emperor. Could the soul in front of me be her? Does she really have something to do with me? No wonder the worlds inside the ghost empire are filled with all kinds of déjà vu. Don't tell me this is all my fault. As his thoughts raced, Ebner carefully controlled his tone and asked, "Are you Monica?" This was not entirely posturing. After all, the other party was only a remnant soul now, and Ebner was not afraid of her. It seems the Father God hasn't fully recovered his memories yet. The green-haired woman smiled sweetly, becoming even more enchanting. "In fact, I am Monica, but Monica is not only me." "What do you mean by that?" Ebner frowned slightly and asked. At the same time, he casually waved his hand and sent the captain out of this inner world, because he sensed that what she was about to say next was not something an ordinary person should hear. The Father God is truly cold, shouldn't you be asking why I ended up like this? Monica let out a coquettish complaint, then organized her words and replied unhurriedly. During the era of the First Solomon Empire, I already knew Trunsoist, and we shared a rather pleasant period together. So after Constantine, who had been contending with me for many years, was besieged and killed by Cheek, I directly led my entire family to seek refuge with him, not long after he had become the Night Emperor. But who would have thought that Trunsoist had long since colluded with Cheek? In short, after Cheek seized my Apocalypse Demonis Beyonder characteristic and used special methods to demote me to disaster, Trunsoist then used the power of an outer deity to control my soul. And forged me into this ghost empire. But he did not know that I was the world's very first succubus, created by you, Father God, and that your imprint had long been engraved into my soul. His control was not perfect. I seized an opportunity and, by borrowing your power, cut out this portion of remnant soul that is no longer under his control. So, I am Monica, but Monica is far more than just me. The first succubus, so the succubus race was also something I created. No wonder they never appeared in the original work. But I remember that succubi appeared far earlier than the god of luck. As early as the beginning of the second epoch, when the abyss had just been born, they already existed. That means this was the handiwork of Lu Bo before the god of luck. Hey, speaking of which, among the two great demonist families of the fourth epoch, one was my direct bloodline descendant, and the other was a race of servants I created. And in the end, they both benefited Cheek. Should I say the inertia of the plot is powerful, or that they were simply too useless? Ebner sighed, then shook his head and said, although most of what you said is probably true, all of it is merely meant to conceal a single lie. Oh. Monica showed no trace of panic at being exposed. Instead, she asked with great interest, which sentence does the Father God think is a lie? For example, your so-called remnant soul right now was never something you cut out using my power at all. Ebner glanced at the wheat and vegetables on the plain that had transformed into monsters and continued calmly. But rather the portion of you that was polluted by the primordial moon. End of this chapter. Chapter 1175, The Captain's Cabin. In fact, Ebner had noticed the abnormality of the remnant soul before him very early on. Setting aside the fact that the unknown land showed no reaction at all when facing her, the very sight of those out-of-control crops was already enough to make me suspicious of her true nature. Moreover, based on the information I've obtained in the past, I can vaguely guess the purpose behind the Night Emperor constructing the Ghost Empire. In that case, Monica, who suddenly vanished and did not allow a single member of the Trunsoist family to board the ship, should still be controlling most of the ship's functions, rather than being sealed inside this world. In other words, the part that was cut off would not be the portion that remained free due to Lu Bo's power, but rather the portion of her that the Night Emperor had controlled using the power of an outer deity. Regarding this, the green-haired Monica did not deny it. She merely revealed an admiring expression and said, as expected of the Father God, you saw through my essence at once. At that point, she smiled at Ebner with great charm, then asked, so then, how do you intend to deal with me? Ebner, on the other hand, revealed a playful expression, smiling without quite smiling as he said, you proactively came out to greet me from the castle, then used the opportunity of punishing your subordinate to establish a connection with me. After that, you selectively told me so many fragments of Monica's past, wasn't all of that just to buy time, so you could completely break free. After all, the seal established by the Knowledge Emperor isn't something that can be cast off so easily, is it? Hearing this, Monica's expression finally changed. She stared intently into Ebner's eyes and asked in a low voice, since you already guessed it, why didn't you stop me immediately? Ebner smiled and replied, why would I stop you? If your problem isn't completely resolved, how is the door leading to the main control room, or rather, the captain's cabin, supposed to open? Roselle was unable to do anything about you precisely because he too had suffered contamination from the primordial moon, so all he could do was seal you. But do you really think I wouldn't have a solution? Hearing this, Monica brushed back her hair and once again revealed a seductive expression as she said, Father God, if you were still the you of back then, you could naturally resolve this with ease. But for some reason, you only possess this level of strength now, and it's impossible for you to harm me. After all, I have the protection of a mother. With that, she seemed to finally completely break free of Roselle's seal. She spread her arms, preparing to draw down the power of mother. However, half a minute passed, and nothing happened. What's going on? Monica could no longer hide her emotions. Her expression turned pale as she looked at Ebner. In her view, the only possibility was that the Father God had done something behind the scenes. Ebner shrugged and said innocently, you've been sealed for too long. You might not know that the primordial moon has already changed people. In other words, your mother is now Lilith, that stepmother. How could she possibly lend you any power? And without any external support, although Monica had been a Sequence 1 Apocalypse demoness in life, after death, having turned into an evil spirit, and especially while in a remnant soul state, she could only rely on her angelic status to barely exert power at around Sequence 4. She was fundamentally no match for Ebner. Thus, after figuring out her predicament, Monica immediately used the petrifying demon eyes in an attempt to slow the Father God, while she herself decisively chose to flee. As long as she could leave this place and hide within any one of the worlds inside the Ghost Empire, the Father God would be unable to take control of this massive ship, let alone find her. After all, the so-called final world, the so-called correct route, was in fact nothing more than finding the world where she herself was located. She herself was a part of the ship's core. Only by controlling her could one obtain authority over the Ghost Empire. In other words, she herself was the final door and the exit. Facing Monica's sudden betrayal, Ebner seemed to have been prepared. With a wave of his hand, he rendered the petrification ability formless. Then, looking at Monica, who was frozen in place and unable to move even an inch, he said mockingly, "How unfortunate for you, your mother now favors me more." Monica's expression changed repeatedly before finally settling into a pitiful, delicate look. Her eyes seemed to be veiled in mist as she pleaded, "Father God, could you preserve this personality of mine? Or let me take the dominant position when merging with the main body? You know, I truly adore you." However, no matter how she begged, Ebner remained unmoved. He knew very well that there were no good people among demonesses. Even his own creations and descendants were no exception. Keeping them under his own control was far more reassuring. Thus, he directly activated the pure white eye and took the completely immobilized Monica, pinned in place by Mother, into the unknown land. On a street in the surface world, the captain of the armed squad had not yet recovered from the shock of hearing the sealed monster call the new Saint Father God, when he suddenly realized that he had returned to the city. The teammates who had just sacrificed themselves were all nearby, equally shaken. "Captain, are we all dead?" The observer was still holding a grenade pin, but the grenade meant for mutual destruction had vanished. "This is our city, not the world after death." Another team member denied the companion's speculation after looking around. Seeing that his teammates were still alive, the captain felt both joy and shock. Tears once again flowed uncontrollably down his face. This startled the rest of the team, who immediately became alert, wondering whether the captain himself had been possessed by some monster. But at that moment, a strange piece of information suddenly entered everyone's minds. Though the characters were unknown to them, every person understood the meaning clearly. The inner world has henceforth disappeared. The foundation is hereby dissolved. Inside the castle of the primordial plane, the three ladies, Zio, Edwina, and Felina, had also successfully reunited with Ebner. They were now examining with scrutinizing gazes the progenitor of succubi, Monica, who stood beside Ebner like a maid. "She is?" Zio asked first. "She is the so-called monster of the primordial plane, and also the final door to the many worlds of the Ghost Empire," Ebner explained with a smile. "Door?" Edwina examined Monica from head to toe with an academic gaze and asked in confusion, "Where is it?" Ebner did not answer Edwina directly. Instead, he turned to Monica and instructed, "Monica, the captain's cabin of this ship." "Yes, Father God." Monica bowed respectfully. Immediately afterward, the surrounding scenery abruptly changed. The castle, filled with a sense of history, vanished, replaced by a scene brimming with science fiction aesthetics. An all-metal control console, seats that could rise and lower, and projection screens displaying the status of various worlds, it all looked extremely advanced. But in reality, this is just a skin, all show and no substance, with no real technological content. At its core, it's still just an application of extraordinary powers, Ebner complained, then continued, "However, with Monica's assistance, I can now barely be considered the owner of this ship, though most of its functions are still unusable." Just as Edwina and the others were about to look around, a sudden alarm sounded inside the captain's cabin. "Alert, alert. Monica is about to arrive at its destination but lacks the required credential. Docking denied. Repeat alert, lacking credential. Docking denied." The sudden sound drew everyone's attention, and they all turned their gaze toward the activated central projection screen. Immediately afterward, a projection of a kingdom shrouded in gray-white mist appeared before the four of them. At this moment, the Ghost Empire had stopped at the only gap in the mist, unable to advance further. At the same time, a ring worn on Ebner's finger emitted a faint glow, then vanished in an instant. Backlund, MI9 headquarters. Princess Vera, who was reviewing documents, suddenly paused, then smiled and said, "So you were indeed sleeping there. Cheek. Does this count as the Witch of Chaos hiding within the Nation of Disorder?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1176, The Source of Corruption. Warning. Lacking credentials. Unable to dock. In 3 minutes, the Monica will return. Listening to the warning echoing beside his ears, and looking at the nation on the projection screen that was shrouded in gray mist and appeared only faintly visible, Ebner activated the pure white eye and began to observe carefully. About a minute later, he closed his eyes, rubbed his throbbing temples, and pondered internally. The purpose of the Night Emperor cooperating with Mr. Door was indeed to open a breach in the seal of Sapphira Castle, allowing the power of the Nation of Disorder to leak out from the western continent. And this leak point is not only hidden deep within the secret space formed by these mirror worlds, but is also concealed inside the Night Emperor's own divine kingdom. That faintly appearing nation is not the Nation of Disorder itself, but rather the divine kingdom of the Night Emperor that carries a portion of the Nation of Disorder's power. No wonder only the Ghost Empire can approach it, even dock here. But then, what exactly is this so-called credential? According to what Monica, whom I just contaminated, confessed, after her main consciousness violated the Night Emperor's final will, she inevitably suffered punishment and has remained in a dormant state ever since. That is to say, for over 1,000 years, every time the Ghost Empire approached its destination, it would automatically return, endlessly sailing back and forth through the vast mirror worlds. With that thought, Ebner asked the green-haired Monica beside him. What is the credential? I don't really know. I have no memory related to it. Monica first shook her head, then after a brief moment of thought, pointed at a recessed slot on the control console. But my intuition tells me that whatever's missing belongs there. Ebner stared at the shape of the slot for several seconds. Then, with a flip of his palm, a hardbound book appeared out of thin air. On its cover, written in ancient Fasak, was a line of text. The Book of Virtues. The Book of Virtues is something I obtained from the ancient scholar Daphne Priestley. And Daphne's ancestor was a minister under the Night Emperor, as well as the knight canonized as Humility by the Book of Virtues. Besides Priestley, the other 6 knights were Loyal Augustus, Tolerant Einhorn, Gentle Sauron, Diligent Castia, Generous Odra, and Temperate Monica. I already mocked back then that these so-called virtues were probably exactly what the corresponding individuals lacked. But looking at it now, what it represents may not be merely virtues, it might be an alternative form of order or disorder. Moreover, when the Night Emperor was still alive, this book was a sealed artifact on par with level 0. It could temporarily elevate a canonized knight to the level of an angel. Clearly, it has an extremely close connection to the Night Emperor. And on top of that, after Daphne pledged allegiance to me, she even admitted that this Book of Virtues might have some connection to the Ghost Empire, and might even be the key to controlling it. Then, could the Book of Virtues be the so-called credential? Holding the Book of Virtues in his hand and looking at the recessed slot on the console, Ebner pondered for a long while. In the end, however, he did not place the book into it, instead allowing the 3-minute timer to expire and the Ghost Empire to turn back. Ebner refrained from attempting it for 2 reasons. First, the Night Emperor was a true god. His divine kingdom was bound to be extremely dangerous, especially since it also contained a leak point of a source of power. Who knew what terrifying things might be hidden inside? Although Ebner currently possessed angel-level strength, he was well aware that he was still far inferior to the Night Emperor. It would be better to return only after he was more prepared. Second, he suspected that the Book of Virtues, if it truly served as the credential, might itself be problematic. Something indispensable for entering a divine kingdom should possess more special characteristics, yet Ebner had not discovered any. Thus, he decided to put things on hold. After all, the gains from this expedition were already more than sufficient. Setting aside the various resources within the many worlds inside, including characteristics and extraordinary items, just the 3 portions of angel characteristics used to construct the Ghost Empire alone were priceless treasures. Of course, Ebner had no intention of dismantling the ship right now. But if the need ever arose, he might be able to instantly add 3 sequence 2s, or even 1 sequence 1, to his side. Such harvests already left Ebner very satisfied. He felt there was northwest need to recklessly court death. Finally, and most importantly, Vera's act of giving him the ring forced him to be cautious. After all, something that even an existence like Vera took seriously enough to investigate was bound to be extremely dangerous. Being careful was the wiser choice. Regarding Ebner's decision to abandon the attempt, Zio and Edwina both understood it very well, and even supported his choice. Madame Felina was somewhat confused, but she was an outsider and not familiar with Ebner, so she naturally did not ask further questions. As for Monica, having already been controlled, she would not oppose her master's decision. For a time, the captain's cabin fell into silence. Before long, however, Edwina curiously asked. Ebner, you said earlier that you've already obtained partial authority over the Ghost Empire. What exactly can you do? I can freely arrange for people to enter and exit the various worlds within the Ghost Empire. I can freely take items and resources from those worlds. I can use stored resources to create a new world within the Ghost Empire, and write rules for that world. I can make limited adjustments to the Ghost Empire's course, using mirror worlds to travel to any place in the universe that has mirrors. And I can also use the Ghost Empire's strongest attack once per day, Ebner explained succinctly. The so-called strongest attack of the Ghost Empire was the ability jointly unleashed by the Hand of Order and the Disaster Demonis, Order Catastrophe. I see. Edwina nodded thoughtfully, then continued asking. Then if I re-enter one of the worlds here, can my original abilities be restored? That won't be a problem. You can even retain your class level, Ebner nodded, then smiled and asked, what, do you want to experience more worlds? Yes. Those worlds each have their own characteristics and are all worth exploring. Edwina's blue eyes sparkled as she looked at Ebner. And today is only Thursday. I have time until next Monday, can I stay here and travel around? Of course you can. Such a small request was naturally not something Ebner would refuse. He quickly sent Edwina into an ancient world with a distinctly Eastern style. All of these worlds originated from the knowledge that a certain Lubo had infused into Monica back when he created the succubi. After Edwina left, Zio also looked at Ebner with anticipation and said after some deliberation. I want to return to the previous hero world. Maybe I can complete the ritual for Law Mage there. Although the people in the Ghost Empire are essentially ghosts, they are still intelligent lifeforms. That does meet the requirements. After thinking it over, Ebner felt it was acceptable to let Zio try. He opened another door and sent Zio into that world as well. Immediately afterward, Felina also requested to return home. Ebner verbally agreed, but after turning around, he directly hypnotized her, then placed her into Alvin's palace, preparing to find an opportunity later to bring her into Grozel's travels for research. With Zio and Edwina gone, he had far fewer concerns. Only after finishing all this did Ebner return his attention to Monica and ask a question he had failed to find an answer to in her memories when he had previously contaminated her. Who created the original you? Or rather, what was my identity when I created you, the progenitor of succubi? Hearing this question, Monica looked at Ebner somewhat strangely, as if surprised that he did not even remember who he was. Still, she answered honestly. You were the great father of succubi, lord of desire, source of corruption. End of chapter. Chapter 1177, returning to Backlund. Backlund, North District, inside the luxurious residence at 160 Birkeland Street. After fusing the Demonis card into his spirit body and completing his first exploration of the outer areas of Calderon City, Klein returned to reality feeling somewhat fatigued. He raised his hand and rubbed his temple, mocking himself silently. Calderon City really is dangerous. The Spirit World Plunderer is crafty enough too. Fortunately, I used the Demonis card and concealed myself well enough. If I'd gone in carrying the Sea God Scepter and the Tyrant card, I might have just charged in headfirst and caused a lot of unnecessary trouble. Now that I've confirmed the location of the Spirit World Plunderer, next time I can gather enough manpower and go there together. Just as he thought this, he suddenly heard a knock at the door. Then the butler he had hired came in to report that an unfamiliar gentleman had come to visit him and his wife. Visiting both dawn and daily. Could it be a Nighthawk? Klein did not dare to be careless. After dismissing the butler to lead the visitor to the reception room, he immediately untied the pendulum at his cuff and performed a divination. I will be in danger if I go to meet the visiting guest. After silently repeating the divination phrase 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw the yellow crystal pendulum rotating counterclockwise. This represented a negative answer, no danger. Only then did Klein let out a sigh of relief. He tidied his clothing and went downstairs to the reception room. As soon as he pushed open the door, he saw a man wearing a white shirt, black vest, and black trousers, with slightly messy hair, sitting on the sofa and drinking coffee. It was Marek, whom he had not seen for a long time. Long time no see, Klein greeted proactively, then deliberately smiled and asked, "Where are your zombies?" Marek glanced at him with an unclear expression, merely nodded, and said, "It really has been a long time." Then he turned his gaze toward the full-length mirror on one side of the reception room. Miss Sharon's figure stepped out of the mirror at just that moment. However, Marek froze for a moment when he saw Sharon, because her attire was not the small soft hat and matching court dress she usually wore. Instead, she was dressed in a snow-white gown adorned with ribbons. As she moved, the silk hem of the dress swayed rhythmically with her steps, and the emerald brooch on her chest flickered with light. Seeming to notice Marek's surprise, Sharon's eyes did not move at all as she simply explained. "Marionettes should be dressed as one pleases." As she spoke, she looked at Klein and continued, "It was his acting suggestion." Under Marek's strange gaze, Klein coughed lightly and said, "Ahem, marionettes are mostly theatrical props. I thought that since the potion is called marionette, it should also shape different roles." At this point, without waiting for Marek's response, he directly changed the topic. Is there something you came for this time? Marek looked at Sharon. She nodded, and only then did he organize his words and say. Next Friday, a ship from the southern continent will arrive at Pritz Harbor. It has close ties with the lone military. This ship is carrying a large amount of treasure and cultural relics plundered from the Star Plateau, the Pass River Valley, and the Hagati grasslands. Among them is a mummy, the 19th king of the ancient Highland Kingdom, Tetansis II. The original languages of the southern continent did not originate from ancient Fasak and have their own structures. In ancient Highland language, a king was also called Kadef, which is a specific term. Emperor Roselle translated it as pharaoh, who knows what he was thinking. Also, mummy was a term he coined. In short, pharaoh means son of the gods, king of humans. Tetansis II was once a high-sequence powerhouse, but after his death, the corresponding characteristic was recovered, leaving only his body, which was made into a mummy. Before Marek finished speaking, Klein, who had personally helped Sharon create a mummy, already understood his meaning. A mummy made from a demigod's body was, to other beyonders, at most a material full of spirituality and a good object for making zombies. But to a wraith, it was a necessary ritual for advancing to marionette. Marek obtained the wraith characteristic during the great battle at the dock warehouse last year. Later, Sharon obtained a method to remove the mental corruption of beyonder characteristics from the rewards of the Dream Maze Tower. So he may have advanced to sequence 5 for 5 or 6 months already. Could it be that he's already digested it? That speed isn't slower than mine. While thinking, Klein exchanged a meaningful glance with the quietly seated Sharon beside him. She directly nodded and said, "There is a trap. It may be very dangerous." "Whose trap?" Klein asked directly. He trusted Sharon. If the danger were truly immense, she would not have allowed Marek to come to him for ideas. Sharon said succinctly. "It could be a trap set by the Rose School of Thought targeting us. It could also be one set by the lone authorities targeting the Rose School of Thought. A demigod will appear." Klein thought for a moment and did not answer immediately. He only told Marek that he would consider it, and the wraith understood. After the three discussed their respective experiences for a while, Marek hurriedly took his leave. He still needed to reach Pritz Harbor before school ended to pick up a child. That was the only descendant of a close friend who had died tragically while helping him escape. After being brought back from the southern continent by Jane, the child was adopted by Marek and had been living in Pritz Harbor ever since. After Marek left, Klein looked at Sharon and said meaningfully, "Actually, we could think of something after 3 o'clock next Monday afternoon." Sharon shook her head and said, "I don't have anything that could move him." So you mean I do, or rather, the fool behind me does. But in reality, I'm just repaying favors." Klein felt helpless internally, but on the surface, he directly took responsibility for the matter. After all, a man can't say he can't, right? Moreover, this was probably the price of letting a marionette be dressed at will. Inside the captain's cabin of the Ghost Empire, Ebner froze for a moment upon hearing Monica's title for him. Father of Succubi, Lord of Desire, Source of Corruption. What kind of ridiculous name was that? No matter how you listened to it, it didn't sound like a good person at all. No wonder the god of luck turned out so lustful. Could it be he was influenced at a fundamental level too? And to be able to claim such a divine title, this Lubo probably seized authority over the Abyss, or even the Shadow World. But now both the Abyss and the Shadow World are still on Earth and haven't been offered to the Unknown, which is very strange. After all, every Lubo before the God of Luck would return to the Unknown after death. Could it be that he was caught by the Celestial Worthy or God Almighty, and that's why he failed? As his thoughts raced, Ebner wanted to ask Monica more questions. However, at that moment, his own avatar in Backlund relayed a message that George III requested a meeting with him and Alvin to further discuss the alliance and the release of the Demonis. Since Alvin, as a trump card, had also come along to the Ghost Empire, Ebner had no choice but to leave behind a clairvoyant avatar to continue questioning Monica and to receive Zio and Edwina, while he himself and Alvin directly disengaged from the Ghost Empire and wandered back to Backlund. End of chapter. Chapter 1178, Alliance and Ambush. In the Empress's burrow, inside a secluded palace of Sodlak Palace. Owen's avatar and Alvin, disguised as Zeradal, arrived here once again under Vera's accompaniment. This time, besides Ebner and Vera's old acquaintance, the Saintess of Black, Medea, there was another person standing by George III's side. He had a somewhat square face, black hair, blue eyes, a high nose bridge, thick beard, and a rather solemn expression. His appearance was not unfamiliar to many lone citizens, as his likeness was printed on the front of the 10-pound banknote. Of course, even those who had never possessed a 10-pound note in their entire lives could still see his statues or portraits in places like Memorial Square. He was the founder and protector of Lone, the first king, William Augustus I. At the same time, he was also a Sequence 1, Hand of Order. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, both sides went straight to the main topic, which was the signing of the alliance agreement. Ebner picked up the drafted agreement and read it carefully. He found that although the content was extensive, the core transaction actually consisted of only one clause. That was an agreement that Zeradal and the Secret Order would support George III in advancing to Black Emperor, and would, when necessary, help the lone royal family resist enemies attempting to sabotage the ritual. Correspondingly, the lone side would support Zeradal in becoming the fool or error, and would provide full assistance in matters concerning the confrontation with Amon. As for the other clauses, they were merely normal rights and obligations between allies, such as regular intelligence exchanges, and were not particularly noteworthy. Overall, the lone side was treating Zeradal and the Secret Order as equals in this alliance, showing genuine sincerity. But unfortunately, I'm a double agent. No, that's not right, I'm not Zeradal at all. Ebner thought to himself, then nodded to George III and said, no problem. I can sign this agreement. Upon hearing this, George III turned his head to glance at William I, the ancestor of the Augustus family. The latter gave a slight nod, picked up the agreement, and signed his name. As a hand of order, his name itself carried the power of order, capable of turning the clauses into rules and punishing violators. After signing, William I handed the agreement back to Ebner. As for contracts, Ebner, who possessed a phantom, pure white angel, was actually more professional than order. He could even summon 2 former pontiffs of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun to notarize the agreement. Unfortunately, as vassals of the Black Emperor, the Zeradal family was unlikely to have close dealings with the pontiffs of the 6 gods. Moreover, George III was still acting covertly. If Ebner summoned an angel from an Orthodox church, even a former one, it would likely arouse suspicion. After a brief pause for thought, Ebner reached into the void and pulled out a man with chestnut-colored, slightly wavy long hair. It was Caesar Rosel Gustav, the historical projection of the mechanical avatar left behind in the Ghost Empire. Because Ebner currently could neither, nor dared to, trace back the memories of the Seal of Catastrophe, he was unable to fleece Old Huang's true body. However, although this mechanical puppet, avatar of Old Huang contained no characteristics, due to the authority of the Knowledge Emperor, it had once reached a level close to Sequence 1 at its peak, which was not bad at all. Although not many people knew that Zeradal had once invested in Old Huang, it was certainly not something angels could be fooled about. Being able to summon a projection of one of Rosel's mechanical puppets would not arouse suspicion. As for how Knowledge notarized a contract, Old Huang had already demonstrated that in the urban legend world. Ebner made slight adjustments and had Rosel imbue power into his signature. At this point, the contract was complete, though both sides were well aware of its actual effectiveness. The authority of a mere knowledge magister was certainly not enough to destroy the Augustus family, at most, it would make them wary. And William I, who had survived from the time of the War of the 4 Emperors, was well aware of the survival abilities of the 3 cowardly families. He did not believe his order could truly take the life of a miracle invoker, let alone a servant of mysteries. Of course, violating the contract would still incur a considerable price, which was precisely the point of establishing such a contract. Moreover, in the eyes of the Augustus family, the alliance was beneficial to both sides, making a breach by Zeradal unlikely. Even more reliable than the Demonesses. After the alliance was concluded, George III smiled and said to Owen, "Owen, you should have already received the first £1 million ransom paid by the Demoness sect. Now that we're allies, why not release the Saintess of Red and the Saintess of Yellow?" Ebner was prepared for this. He feigned reluctance as he took out a card, then slammed it onto the ground. The figure of Margaret, the Saintess of Red, appeared before everyone. Although her clothes were still fairly neat, her eyes were unfocused and her expression haggard, completely lacking the bearing of a demigod. Ebner's eyelid twitched uncontrollably at the sight. Hey, I only told you to act a bit listless, aren't you overdoing it?" George III, after giving Owen a deep look, then cast a sympathetic glance at Vera standing to the side before coughing lightly and asking, "What about the Saintess of Yellow?" "Naturally, she'll be released after the remaining payment arrives," Ebner said matter-of-factly. In truth, the Saintess of Yellow, Natalia, had long since been turned into a marionette. This would likely not escape the perception of the Hand of Order present. Ebner planned to simply announce afterward that he had already released her. After all, with the cooperation of the Saintess of Black, releasing her meant she was released. George III did not say anything further. Since Owen had agreed to release them, sooner or later made no difference. After the Saintess of Black went through the motions of performing a prayer and confirmed that the Saintess of Red was merely exhausted and no longer under control, this alliance meeting came to an end. They were all angels or demigods, there was no need to hold a celebratory ball. After Medea and Zeradal each departed with their people, and William the First figure also disappeared, George III sat quietly on the throne, pondering alone for a while before summoning an attendant and ordering, "Invite advisor Herwin Lambies to come see me." After the attendant left, George III muttered to himself. I have a rather bad feeling. Perhaps I need to accelerate things and can't wait until next year to act. The rift between the Conservative Party and the new party isn't wide enough yet. I'll need Herwin to push things further. However, his plans fell through, as the attendant soon returned to report. Sir Herwin has left Backlund and cannot be contacted. The Saintess of Red, Margaret, pretended to recuperate for a day at the Saintess of Black's residence. Then, acting as though she had just recovered, she used mirror traversal to head toward Trier. However, just after she entered a mirror world, she suddenly felt that this place was already filled with various traps, like a spider's nest. At the same time, a round-faced woman with a rather refined temperament appeared, an eerie smile at the corner of her mouth as she said, Margaret Constantine, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Unexpectedly, Margaret was not flustered at all. She smiled faintly in return and said, I've also been waiting for you for a long time. Saintess of Blue, Veronica. I hear you've killed quite a few of my descendants. Take a look at who I am. As she spoke, her appearance changed, and her fiery red hair instantly turned green. The face of the Saintess of Blue, Veronica, twisted instantly. Her refined temperament vanished without a trace as she gritted her teeth and said, Monica. You're the primordial succubus, Monica. How could you still exist? Before her words even fell, Veronica launched an attack first. Countless strands of spider silk wrapped toward Monica, while she herself swiftly took out a small flag, preparing to flee. Since Margaret had turned into Monica, this meant it was a trap specifically aimed at her. Even the Saintess of Black had participated. Although she was certain that the Saintess of Black had already been summoned back to headquarters by the Saintess of Grey, otherwise she wouldn't have dared to act. But who could guarantee that nothing had gone wrong with the Saintess of Grey? Or that no other forces had joined in? The Saintess of Black and the Saintess of Red actually dared to collude with the primordial succubus. When I get back, I will definitely report this to the primordial. Just as Veronica thought this, she discovered that the star flag in her hand had not taken her back to the designated location. Instead, it had brought her into a completely unfamiliar world. Where is this place? Veronica surveyed her surroundings warily and found herself standing on an arena, with the spectator stands filled with all kinds of people. This is a world of combat. The victor gains glory, the defeated lose their dignity and are ruled by others. At that moment, a familiar, teasing voice rang out. Veronica's heart jolted as she hurriedly turned around, unsurprisingly seeing Monica floating in midair, her succubus wings unfurled. End of chapter. Chapter 1179, The Gathering. In fact, from the moment that Saintess of Blue, Veronica, prepared to ambush Margaret, she had already fallen into Ebner's calculations. And the reliance that had allowed her to repeatedly escape with her life from the hands of the Saintess of Black, Medea, the sealed artifact, star flag, formed from a wanderer characteristic, also failed to help her break free from her predicament. This was because Ebner had manipulated the Ghost Empire to overwrite the mirror world she had previously modified, unknowingly casting her into one of the worlds within the ship. As for what happened afterward, Ebner no longer paid any attention to it. If Monica, within her own domain, still could not take down an undying demoness whose power had been restricted by a hand of order, and whose personality had even been overwritten, then she was not worthy of being called the primordial succubus. In short, by the time Emlyn arrived at 28 Kingster Street the next day for a visit, the Saintess of Blue was already standing respectfully beside Ebner and presented him with a relatively pure portion of Fountain of Youth water. Of course, the current Saintess of Blue, although her outward appearance had not changed and she was still as refined and scholarly as before, was no longer Veronica in essence. Instead, her body had been occupied by Monica, becoming a vessel for the latter to descend outside the Ghost Empire. Emlyn did not pay much attention to the woman who led him into the reception room. At most, he thought she looked decent, but since he did not like things that could move on their own, he merely complained inwardly about Ebner's style and then put the matter out of his mind. Once only one person and one bloodkin remained in the reception room, Emlyn used spirituality to seal off the surroundings, then looked at Ebner, who was drinking coffee, and said, "The Marquis needs 3 portions of Fountain of Youth water, each with 1,000-year capacity. The price he's offering is..." Before Emlyn could finish, Ebner raised his hand to interrupt him. Having already seen through the other party's bottom line, he smiled and said, "No need to quote those probing prices. Just tell me the highest price you've been authorized to offer." Emlyn was immediately stunned and said in a low voice, "I haven't finished speaking yet, how did you know?" Ebner did not answer his question. He merely nodded to himself and said, "That Marquis is fairly sincere. I can accept the offer of 1,000,000 gold pounds per portion." Emlyn was momentarily dazed, feeling as though he had no secrets at all in front of the other party. He forced a smile, but in the end, he still could not suppress his curiosity and asked, I didn't detect any intrusion into my mind. How exactly did you do it? He had already obtained a Sequence 5 level vampire characteristic through a three-party transaction with Ebner and Derek, becoming a Crimson Scholar, capable of using moonlight to reflect the mind. You know, I'm a detective, Ebner said seriously as he looked at him. So this is deduction. Do you think I'm an idiot? Emlyn shot Ebner a contemptuous look, then raised his hand to pinch the bridge of his nose and chuckled. Then, great detective, can you deduce what I'm going to say next? Hearing this, the corners of Ebner's mouth lifted slightly. He then took a mirror and manifested the scene he had seen through within it. The surface of the mirror first rippled like water, then slowly revealed Emlyn's figure. However, a rectangular frame appeared near his mouth, inside which text continuously appeared, as if he were speaking. This form had already been applied in some comic books and was said to have been invented by Emperor Roselle, so Emlyn understood its meaning. Since the price has been agreed upon, let's discuss the specific details of the transaction. The Marquis hopes to schedule the exchange for next Wednesday at midnight, and the location will be determined by you, the Emlyn in the image said. Next, the image in the mirror changed to show Ebner. He wore a smile, and text likewise appeared near his mouth. It seems that among the marquises who need Fountain of Youth water, there is one who won't fully awaken from slumber until next week. I have no problem with the timing. As for the location, let's set it at Lady Helen's ancient castle. She is both a vampire and an archbishop of the Church of the Earth Mother. We can all feel at ease, can't we? The image ended there. Ebner pushed the mirror aside, then looked at the dumbfounded Emlyn with an ambiguous smile. After becoming a seer, and prying into the power of the Eye of Omniscience, Ebner already possessed a bit of Araz's flair. He had even considered integrating his honorific name into a mystical art, and spreading it to aid his acting. Unfortunately, those who didn't understand the field would find it difficult to use this mystical art, while those who did understand it would be extremely cautious toward it, making it ineffective for helping him act, so he had no choice but to give up on the idea. After quite some time, Emlyn finally came back to his senses and smacked his lips. So this is the kind of deduction you use. This has absolutely nothing to do with the deduction, I understand, okay. Then, he restrained the pride that had arisen from his advancement and said with a smile. I'll inform the Marquis of your suggestion regarding the meeting location. Saturday night. One of the vice presidents of the secret order, the scholar of your Nellie Pitt, who lived in the Golden Horn Bay estate in Indoorport, stood up and drew the curtains after dismissing the manservant and butler. He then sat back down on the sofa, continuously rubbing a badge in his hand as he quietly waited for 8 o'clock to arrive. The president has been missing for over 100 years. Does this return mean that he has taken another step forward and become a servant of mysteries? Also, I wonder whether my conflicts with Daphne Priestley and Maud will earn the president's punishment. Daphne Priestley's side is easier to deal with. She isn't one of the president's direct subordinates, and the conflict between her and me isn't that severe. There shouldn't be much of a problem. But Maud is another matter. He himself is a descendant of the Zeradal family, and these past years he's been hiding in the southern continent precisely because he was jointly suppressed by Daphne and me. He will definitely complain to the president. But the fact that the president sought out Daphne first upon returning and had her notify the others to convene is itself quite intriguing. If it weren't for that, and if the results of my divination weren't fairly decent, I probably wouldn't dare to keep this badge on me all this time. Just as he finished thinking this, he realized that the time had reached 8 o'clock trier time. The badge in his hand suddenly burst forth with dazzling light, forming a door constructed of starlight and grey mist. As soon as Nellie's spirituality touched that door, he was informed that once he passed through it, his spiritual body would be taken to a hidden space. He hesitated briefly, knowing full well that the president's orders could not be disobeyed. Gritting his teeth, he still entered it. In the next moment, he found himself already within a magnificently splendid palace. At the same time, the prophet Tylers, who had also obtained a badge, was examining the door that had appeared before him. Because he had replaced a certain elder of the secret order using a Beyonder characteristic and was effectively an undercover agent, he felt rather conflicted at this moment, unsure whether his disguise would be seen through by Zeradal. But just then, a familiar voice suddenly came from within the door. Come in with confidence. Ebner. Tylers froze for a second, then his entire body relaxed. He stepped through the door with ease. End of chapter. Chapter 1180, Borrowing a Chicken to Lay Eggs. The location Ebner chose to convene a meeting of the Secret Order members was precisely the mutated ability, Bizarre Domain, that Alvin Abraham had obtained after advancing to Miracle Invoker. Bizarre Domain was similar to a low-end version of the space above the gray fog. It could distort spacetime, establishing a hidden space isolated from the outside world, where no information could be exchanged with the exterior. Within the Bizarre Domain, one could rely on spirituality to manifest objects that had been recorded or historical projections. And unlike the Tarot Club, the Bizarre Domain could allow people to enter with their real bodies through a door. However, for this convened meeting, Ebner did not do that. Instead, he only pulled in the members' spiritual bodies. Firstly, this was because some people were too far away, and teleporting them would also take a considerable amount of time. Waiting too long would damage Zeradol's mystique and would not be conducive to subsequent task arrangements. Secondly, when only spiritual bodies were present, it was actually more convenient for Ebner to operate and display his methods. In fact, the 11 demigods present were indeed intimidated by the magnificently splendid hall within the bizarre domain. It was not that they found the palace particularly luxurious, but rather that they were shocked by the methods displayed by the president. One had to know that the Zeradol of more than 100 years ago absolutely did not possess such a hidden space that could instantly gather people together. The president was very likely already a servant of mysteries. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Ebner, who had attached Zeradol's projection to himself, directly appeared at the main seat. With a wave of his hand, 2 rows of tables and chairs appeared within the palace. Next, he gave Daphne a look. Daphne immediately understood, stepped forward, and saluted Zeradol. "Welcome back, President. Congratulations on taking another step forward on the Beyonder pathway." After Zeradol gave a slight nod, she sat down in the first seat on the left. Seeing Daphne's demonstration, the others finally came to their senses and followed suit one after another. Those attending this meeting included not only Daphne Priestley, Nellie Pitt, and Maud Zeradol, the 3 vice presidents at the level of Scholar of Yore, but also 5 bizarre sorcerers and 3 non-core saints from other pathways who had joined the secret order. In the end, Maud, a descendant of the Zeradol family, seized the first seat on the right, while the other vice president, Nellie, sat below Daphne on the left. He had already made up his mind to follow Daphne in order to deal with Maud's possible retaliation. As for the others, including 2 bizarre sorcerers and 3 non-core saints, among them Tyler's, the undercover, they all sat on the left, while the remaining 3 bizarre sorcerers sat below Maud on the right. The factional alignment was extremely clear. Nellie's expression darkened slightly as he looked toward the lowest seated of the 3 bizarre sorcerers opposite him, that was his student, who had somehow defected to Maud's camp without him knowing. However, in this setting, it was not appropriate for him to act. At this moment, Ebner tapped the table with his finger and, imitating the tone from Zeradol's memories, said, "This meeting has 3 matters to announce. First, to declare my return. Whatever grievances you may have had while I was absent, I will not interfere. However, the tasks I assign from now on must not be delayed because of them. Is that understood?" As he spoke, he swept his gaze around with overwhelming pressure. Yes, everyone lowered their heads and responded. Among them, Daphne was the most devout, because she knew that the president had also come to believe in the Lord. Nellie let out a slight sigh of relief. So long as the president did not openly favor one side, things would be manageable. Only Maud was the most unwilling, yet he still had no choice but to accept it. Second, I am informing you that I have formed an alliance with the Lone royal family. From now on, all secret order industries within Lone are to tilt toward Constant Belden. At this point, he looked at the bizarre sorcerer seated below Maud on the right, the one who had just been glared at by Nellie, and said, "Barlow, Daphne told me you're currently in charge of Northwestern Lone affairs, correct? Then this matter will be entrusted to you." "Yes." The man named Barlow stood up respectfully, but after responding, he could not help thinking in confusion. Increasing investment in Constant is fine, but why invest in Belden, that small city whose resources have already dried up? Of course, he dared not ask aloud. Ebner naturally knew of their doubts, but he still added another sentence. "Especially Belden, that is the top priority. As for the reason, fill it in yourselves." After hearing this, everyone showed different expressions. Although almost all of them were put on using clown abilities, it was clear that each had their own speculation. Only Daphne and Tyler's knew the truth, since they both knew Ebner and were aware that he was precisely the Viscount of Belden. Third, an angel has recently returned to the Abraham family as well. He is currently being courted by various nations, and Abraham will most likely become an Enfef Duke of the Kingdom of Phaenopotter, or a royal house of smaller nations such as Seeger or Massey. Layman, Guy, Samantha, I need you to investigate the specific situation and look for opportunities to join the retinue of His Highness Alvin Abraham. Layman, Guy, and Samantha were the 3 non-core members, an unlucky mage, a fallen count, and an iron-blooded knight, all sequence 4 demigods. Back then, as a vassal of the Black Emperor, Zeradol had intermarried with the families of Solomon, Medici, and Ulysses, thus possessing portions of potion formulas for the lawyer, hunter, and monster pathways, but only up to sequence 4, anything higher, he did not have. The Abraham family had long suffered from the full moon curse, and their current manpower was not yet sufficient. Thus, Ebner was essentially moving resources from one hand to the other, borrowing some secret order members to help Alvin fill out appearances. Although the successive returns of angels gave the secret order members a sense of foreboding, this did not prevent Layman, Guy, and Samantha from bowing and accepting the order. "Yes, President." I attach great importance to intelligence regarding Alvin. After joining his retinue, you must do your utmost to demonstrate your value and become trusted aides, but be careful not to arouse his suspicion, Ebner reminded them once more before dangling the carrot. If anyone can uncover important intelligence, I will not be stingy with rewards. After all, I have not wasted these 100+ years and have collected quite a few potion formulas, among them are ones you need. Once you obtain the intelligence, Alvin can be made to take the characteristics himself, or turn you into marionettes. Naturally, the three of them had no idea that Ebner was planning to freeload. Hearing this, they were all filled with motivation. After issuing his commands, Ebner had no interest in conducting trades or free exchanges like the Tarot Club. Among these members, aside from Daphne and Tyler's, the rest were merely tools in his eyes. Some who had committed particularly heinous acts during their acting had already been placed on his death list. They were only being allowed to live a bit longer because their value had not yet been fully squeezed dry. You are to keep wearing my badge at all times. The time of the next meeting will be conveyed through the badge. All right, this meeting is concluded. After briefly giving these instructions, Ebner waved his hand and sent everyone's spiritual bodies back, completely ignoring Maud, who seemed to want to say something, and leaving only Daphne behind. End of chapter. Chapter 1181, Before the Tarot Gathering. Ebner, keeping Daphne behind, had no other ulterior motive, he simply wanted to learn about the political situation in Intis from her. After learning that Trier had basically stabilized, that the Eternal Blazing Sun Church and the Steam Church, along with the major families, were inclined to restore Roselle's early Grand Consul system, and that the Sauron family was very likely to once again take control of Intis's national politics, he let Daphne return. After all, this kind of transitional regime was actually very difficult to sustain in the long term and was destined to pay the price for a future defeat. As for whether Intis could win, although the lone royal family was desperately courting disaster, the goddess, because of my existence, was far more terrifying than in the original story. How could she possibly lose? Shaking his head, Ebner also left his own bizarre domain and returned to the villa at 28 Kingster Street. Since Zaya was still in the Ghost Empire, preparing for her advancement ritual, and Furs was busy with her final astrologer acting, the villa felt rather quiet. At this moment, Ebner happened to receive a message from Miss Klosvia of Sloth. That's right, a month ago I agreed to Gluttony's invitation to make a trip to Inderport. Ebner slapped his forehead, suddenly realizing it. He hadn't actually forgotten. With a separate eye of insight, acting as a memo, forgetting was impossible. It was just that there were still a day or two before the deadline, so no reminder had been triggered. According to Klein, Leonard also seems to have chased after a mission to Inderport, and the transformation staff, Earth, that I've already finished crafting still hasn't been delivered to him. Since he can't spare the time to arrange the ritual to receive the sacrifice, I might as well find an opportunity to personally hand it to him. As his thoughts turned, Ebner did not immediately head to Inder, because before that, there was still one thing he needed to do, that was to take Madame Felina, whom he had hypnotized, to the City of Miracles, Livid, for academic research. Monday afternoon. 22 Pasville Street, headquarters of the Academy Awards Charity Foundation. Because of the original story, Ebner had deliberately chosen this location when selecting the site. Audrey, who had already been working at the Charity Foundation for several days, followed behind a middle-aged professional woman, Margaret, transformed by the Red Saint, passing through the main entrance together, going up to the second floor, and returning to the office shared by the two ladies. Since they had gone to the Factory District and Bridge District that morning, Audrey, a noble young lady, was wearing a relatively plain dress, white as the base, accented with dark green, with ruffled cuffs and collar, and only layered lace at the chest forming a bow-shaped flower. She hadn't even worn any jewelry, only a belt of indiscernible quality. Only at her left arm did the clothing show a slight bulge when the wind blew and pressed the fabric against her skin. But in Margaret's eyes, someone who had once truly lived at the bottom, this kind of attire was still too eye-catching, which was why they hadn't entered the East District today. Margaret had been born in the era when Roselle had just become the son of steam. The living conditions of the slums in the early Industrial Revolution were only worse than those of today's East District in Lone. Miss Audrey, after inspecting several public schools, what are your impressions? Margaret asked with a smile. Having been brainwashed by Ebner, she poured all her enthusiasm into her work after becoming the manager of the Charity Foundation, using it to atone for the things she had done in the past. Audrey glanced at the lady before her, somewhat aged but still graceful, and after thinking for a moment, replied. Many of the children in those schools are truly pitiful. To save money, they all bring black bread for lunch, accompanied by a cup of plain water. But I suspect that this probably isn't the most genuine situation. They likely wouldn't let us see the worst scenes. But I can imagine that it must be terrible. As she spoke, pity gradually appeared in Audrey's emerald green eyes. World Gehrman Sparrow had once described similar things at the Tarot Club. Her friends Zio and Furs had also briefly mentioned the real situation of Beckland's lower classes, but things not personally witnessed could still only be imagined. This is already quite good, but the actual situation will only be worse than what you imagine. And our foundation's financial resources are limited, so every penny must be spent where it truly matters. Margaret sighed silently, as if recalling her own past circumstances. Before continuing, I brought you to see the lower levels not to make you feel the dark side of this world, but to ensure you have a clear understanding of certain matters, so you won't be deceived by people below. Audrey nodded slightly, with a bit of force but minimal movement. Although she was already a hypnotist, making it very difficult for ordinary people to deceive her, there were indeed exceptions. Some people regarded the bad things they did as righteous undertakings and even believed it themselves. In such cases, she could still be misled. The reason she had such a deep realization was actually because of the birthday gift Susie had given her earlier. That was an item Susie had crafted using materials from her own body after learning ritual magic, or rather, a talisman. It could temporarily raise the wearer's sense of smell to Susie's own level. Because Audrey had expressed envy multiple times during their challenges in the Dream Maze Tower over Susie's keen sense of smell, Susie had remembered it and, kindly, given her this birthday gift to fulfill her wish. Unfortunately, that very day happened to be when the bag-carrying assistant, Isengard, fed the box of corruption with wolf-fish canned food. As a result, when Audrey tried it out of curiosity, she was immediately hit, and to this day still had no appetite. After discussing a few more matters, Margaret stopped chatting and began to work seriously, while Audrey, upon returning to her lounge, kept thinking about one question. What would worse look like? Meanwhile, Klein had just comfortably taken a bath, easing his taut nerves. He then put on his pajamas, returned to his second-floor bedroom, and before the tarot gathering began, took out paper and pen to draw a complex symbol combining peeping and concealment. Immediately afterward, ripples suddenly spread across the surface of the full-length mirror in the room, and silvery light formed lines of lone script. The Supreme, Great Master, your loyal, insignificant, humble servant Erodes answers your summons. Do you have matters you wish to consult me about? Klein nodded and said, yes. Without waiting for Erodes to indicate he could ask questions, he directly spoke. Do you know who the officer I encountered earlier at Congressman Mock's house was? If you're not sure which one I mean, I can draw him for you. Congressman Mock had hosted another ball at his home yesterday and had introduced Klein, as Mary, an old friend from his Sherlock days, to him. The latter seemed interested in selling him shares of the coin company. In the dark, profound mirror, watery light rippled, reflecting a man with a cold, stern appearance, a thick beard, and eyes so deep blue they were almost black, the very officer Klein had mentioned. At the same time, silver words appeared on the mirror's surface, introducing him. His name is Konas Kaljar. He comes from MI9 and is currently a Major General and Deputy Director. Publicly, he claims to be only Sequence 5 of the Lawyer Pathway, but he controls a powerful sealed artifact. MI9, Deputy Director, Major General. Looks like he's the spokesperson of the royal faction within the intelligence agency. And the surname Kaljar sounds familiar. Right, it's the same surname as the best friend of Mr. Azek's son. I remember Mr. Tower investigated this. That Kaljar, who had been the best friend of Mr. Azek's son, had died long ago. The one who caused his death was actually someone the royal family had impersonated him. Klein nodded slightly, committing the information provided by the magic mirror to memory. He glanced at the clock, saw that it was almost 3 o'clock, and, without time to think further, asked naturally. Do you have anything else you want to say? If someone else asked such a question, Klein felt they would definitely be struck by lightning by Erodes or maliciously toyed with in some other way. However, he believed that the supreme ruler above the spirit world was still qualified to ask this, and he could take the opportunity to probe Erodes's limits. On the surface of the full-length mirror, the silver light twisted and transformed into new words without the slightest hesitation. Great Master, Zeradal seems to have regained his sanity. He has already arrived in Beckland and has had contact with people from the lone royal family. Because what came is only his projection, I am able to see it. You must have already known this intelligence, right? Zeradal. He really broke free. Klein raised an eyebrow and said. I know. All right, that will be all for this time. If I encounter more problems later, I'll summon you again. Yes, Master. Your humble, loyal servant Erodes is always at your disposal. Goodbye. A simple stick figure waving a handkerchief appeared on the mirror's surface. The emoticon seemed to be getting richer. This thing is getting more and more advanced. I wonder who it learned that from. Klein watched silently until everything returned to normal. Exactly 3 o'clock. Above the gray fog, inside the ancient, majestic palace, streaks of deep crimson light suddenly shot up, condensing into vague human silhouettes. After meeting up with Miss Sloth and Miss Greed at the hot spring estate in Inderport, Ebner, currently in a good mood, watched as Justice Audrey stood up as usual, lightly lifting her skirt and leading everyone in a greeting. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." End of chapter. Chapter 1182, Diary. Judging by her tone, Miss Justice didn't seem to be in a very good mood. Did something happen? The fool Klein's heart stirred, and he carefully observed the color of her emotions, discovering that this lady didn't have any other issues, she was simply in a rather bad mood. Next, he didn't close his spiritual vision, but instead smoothly turned his observation toward the others. The poet classmate, Emlyn, and Miss Magician all had much purer colors deep within their auras. Had they advanced? Hey, judging by the fact that their auras were still somewhat unstable, they should have all succeeded within a single day. With this, the Tarot Club members were now at minimum all sequence 6. Even among top-tier forces, they would absolutely count as core strength. Miss Judgment and Lady Hermit looked the same as always. They should be like me, only lacking the ritual to reach demigodhood. Little Son is in a really good mood. Could it be that he ran into some good fortune? And Mr. Hangman is feeling a bit uneasy, and even glanced covertly at the world. Could it be that something went wrong with the item I commissioned the artisan behind him to craft a few weeks ago? No need to mention Sharon, her emotions are, as always, calm. As for Tower. Hey, this guy is a pure fun seeker from start to finish. Not even worth mentioning. Just as Klein was complaining inwardly, the Tarot Club members had already completed their mutual greetings. Lady Hermit Catlia, as usual, pushed her glasses up and turned slightly to the side, respectfully saluting toward the highest seat at the bronze long table. Respected Mr. Fool, this time it's still 3 pages of diary. As she spoke, with permission granted, Catlia had already materialized the diaries, watching them disappear from before her eyes and appear in the palms of Mr. Fool. Very good. Klein gave a flat compliment, then casually glanced at them, only to feel a bit surprised. Because he discovered that the diaries provided by the Queen of Mystic this time seemed to belong to Roselle the Great's early period, and didn't look like they contained any important information. Under normal circumstances, when one couldn't distinguish importance, later period diaries would definitely be prioritized, so as to maximize the reconstruction of the mystery of Roselle the Great's assassination. I believe the Queen of Mystic has sufficient intelligence. Klein muttered in confusion to himself as he was about to read the first diary page. But at this moment, Mr. Hangman Alger raised his hand slightly and said, "Respected Mr. Fool, I have 2 pages of diary here." Ah. Mr. Hangman actually obtained Roselle's diary again. After he had scoured the Church of Storms stockpile in the beginning, he hadn't had any other channels for quite a while. Right, he joined Tracy's fleet. Maybe he managed to get some through Ailment Admiral. Unlike Lady Hermit, who was clearly going to ask questions later, the fool Klein, after transporting the 2 diary pages to his side, first asked, "What do you need?" "Mr. Fool, I want to know who the person behind Mad Captain Connors Victor is," Mr. Hangman Alger asked with some anticipation. After receiving permission from the Church of Storms to join Tracy's fleet, he mainly had 2 missions. First, to ascertain the background of the mad adventurer Gehrman Sparrow. Second, to investigate the details of Tracy's past slave transport operations. As for the first task, he actually knew the truth quite clearly now, but couldn't report it to the church, so he could only start with the second matter. He had previously asked Tracy herself, but she wasn't very clear either. She only knew that the mad captain who had once coordinated with her was likely backed by a military officer. "I know this. I just happened to ask Rhodes about it." Klein quietly let out a breath of relief, then calmly recited a name. Kunis Kalger. After saying that, he felt that Mr. Fool knowing a mere ordinary demigod might somewhat damage the sense of grandeur, especially since this person outwardly pretended to be only sequence 5, so he deliberately added with a tone of regret. "The Kalger family carries the royal bloodline of the Solomon Empire." What a pity. Royal bloodline of the Solomon Empire. This. As expected of someone known to Mr. Fool, this Mr. Kunis must be anything but simple. Mr. Hangman, Lady Hermit, and Miss Justice all instantly entered a state of intense imagination, deciding to start investigating this person remembered by Mr. Fool as soon as they returned. Klein didn't bother with their thoughts and first picked up the 2 diary pages offered by Mr. Hangman, reading them carefully. May 12th. The mystical item Hermes commissioned me to craft has already been completed. Because the 2 powerful mystic arts contained within were both provided by the Guy Lubo, I didn't refuse after he demanded the naming rights. Fallen Morningstar. That's the name Lubo chose, completely unlike the standard he usually shows. I thought that Chunny would pick something like Invincible Shining Thunder Ultra Recovery Chain, or something like that. Alright, that was a joke. Overall, Fallen Morningstar is indeed very good, and it fits the power of the Hangman pathway contained within the necklace. Although this is only a mid-sequence item, I used the abilities of a Knowledge Mentor to enhance its effects. The two mystic arts inside both far exceed what a sequence 5 item should have. Additionally, because its concealment effects are too outstanding, I'm worried that whoever holds it might be unfavorable to future transmigrators. So I actually added a backdoor into Fallen Morningstar. As long as you're not too far from it, shouting invalid in Chinese will cause it to temporarily lose its effect. So, Fallen Morningstar really was made by Old Huang. At that time, Old Huang probably hadn't yet realized the issue with the Seal of Calamity, and still trusted him somewhat. Otherwise, he would definitely have guessed that the other party was using this to lay out a scheme. And since Fallen Morningstar was commissioned by Hermes, then was the old man, the gourmet devotee Shoko, who handed it to me back then actually Hermes as well. They used my hands to pass Fallen Morningstar to Insanguil. What exactly were they aiming for? As his thoughts turned, Klein flipped open the second page. June 9th. Aglaia Constantine's condition is getting worse and worse, and her emotions have begun to grow irritable. Even the container I crafted can no longer hold her. I discussed with her the idea of temporarily returning to the divine painting scroll, waiting until I find a solution before letting her out again. But Aglaia refused. She said that after leaving the divine painting scroll, the environment there could no longer sustain her condition either. What she needs now is an apocalyptic or catastrophic environment. I tried bringing her to the sea region of the God War ruins, but even that couldn't meet the requirements. Watching her grow weaker by the day, I think I should go look for the legendary Forsaken Land of the Gods. End of chapter. Chapter 1183, Mr. Star, who finally straightened up. So it turns out the great emperor wanted to search for the Forsaken Land of the Gods, and within that intention was also the desire to help Old Lu and the daughter of the elf queen, that former apocalypse demoness, stabilize her condition. When he thought of this, the fool Klein cast a strange look at Mr. Tower, and couldn't help but sigh inwardly about the relationship between Old Huang and Old Lu. It was really fucking chaotic. As expected of the twisted, black emperor, and the unknowable, unpredictable unknown. After muttering inwardly, Klein set aside the 2 diary pages from The Hanged Man and instead picked up the 3 pages submitted by Miss Hermit. Although these 3 pages recorded Roselle's early experiences, since they had been selected by Bernadette, he still held higher expectations for them. As he read, Roselle the Great's experiences visiting the Fasak Empire in his youth gradually unfolded before Klein's eyes. Some of the content was laugh-out-loud ridiculous, such as Roselle competing in drinking with Fasak beauties, getting blackout drunk, and upon waking up being grateful that only his head hurt and not his ass. Some of it was thought-provoking, such as Roselle's investigations and conjectures about the origin of the Elf King prompted by the issue of chopsticks. And some of it was sorrowful and nostalgic, such as the half-giants of Fasak, whose bloodline deep longing for the giant king's court stirred the heart, especially when the bone flute sounded, and Roselle, amid the melodious yet mournful tune, thought of his own hometown. Reading to this point, Klein once again felt a spiritual resonance with the great emperor. And the last time had also been because of a similar Roselle diary. Moved by the thought, Klein manifested a page of Roselle's diary that he had obtained long ago. Without seeing the moonlight bright, how could one miss their hometown? Passing through neon lights and revelry, where am I heading? Standing in a noisy square, the bone flute sounds melodiously. Beside me lies an empty expanse. Looking at the lyrics Old Lu had written on the night of the full moon, Klein sighed once more. Although Roselle ultimately only wrote the 3 words, hometown, without elaborating on his inner feelings, Klein fully understood the emotional turbulence of that moment. Because he and Roselle, just like that half-giant Oneg who played the bone flute, both had a homeland of the spirit and the soul. So that line, the bone flute sounds melodiously, in the lyrics came from here. This probably wasn't plagiarism, perhaps Old Lu really did write it on the spot, it's just unknown what kind of lyrics the unsung later part contained. While various thoughts churned in his mind, Klein turned to the final page of this batch of diaries. There wasn't much useful intelligence on it, it was all about the familial bond between Old Huang and his daughter Huang Bebe. The diary ended with, after several days of consideration, I decided to teach Bernadette 2 Chinese characters as special symbols, telling her that this was a protective incantation given to her by her father, one she must remember forever. She doesn't need to understand their meaning, only remember them. These 2 characters are hometown. Klein repeated the word once again. He finally understood why the Queen of Mystic, Bernadette, had chosen these 3 diary pages, because they contained the protective symbol her father had left for her. His eyes felt slightly hot, as if he were seeing a river of emotion, calm and steady on the surface, yet beneath it countless undercurrents surged and churned endlessly. Klein withdrew his gaze, stabilized his emotions a little, and let the diary disappear. Then he looked up at Hermit Katlia and said, "What is your question this time?" Although phrased as a question, he had already anticipated what she would ask. Hearing this, the well-prepared Hermit Katlia immediately said respectfully, "Honorable the Fool, I wish to know whether these 2 symbols mean a resting place of the soul." As she spoke, after obtaining permission, she manifested the two characters' hometown. Eh? Bernadette actually knows the extended meaning of this term. Did she deduce it herself, or did someone reveal it to her while she couldn't confirm whether it was true? Klein was slightly surprised, and without hesitation designated Mr. Tower as the prime suspect. Of course, surprise aside, the fool's mystique could not be lost, so he corrected her calmly. Not quite accurate. Taken together, they mean one's homeland, the resting place of the soul and spirit. Taken together, the resting place of the soul and spirit. Hermit Catlia focused on the latter half of the sentence, because she knew very well where the Queen of Mystics' homeland was and didn't think that aspect was particularly special. Justice, the Hanged Man, and the others took the opportunity to learn two more Roselle characters, just in case they might be useful in the future. Only Ebner wore a somewhat strange expression, as if thinking about something. Beneath the shroud of grey fog, the fool looked at him deeply, then chuckled softly and said, "You may begin." As soon as the words fell, the Hanged Man Alger immediately turned to the world German Sparrow at the very bottom of the bronze long table, requesting his understanding, because the artisan he knew had encountered some trouble and the commissioned item hadn't been delivered yet. As expected, something went wrong. If I hadn't made a small fortune in the land of Evernight, I would probably have gone straight to that artisan already. Unofficial artisans, or those willing to accept orders of unclear origin, are extremely rare. If I can keep this one, I should try my best to do so. Klein pondered briefly, then had the dummy world respond hoarsely. I agree to this delay, but there won't be a next time. The Hanged Man Alger thanked the world for his understanding, but this matter drew the attention of Hermit Catlia. On the surface, she offered help, while inwardly planning to bypass the Hanged Man and establish direct contact with that artisan. The Hanged Man easily saw through her intentions and refused vigilantly. In his view, even if he truly couldn't resolve the artisan's problem, he could still seek out his current nominal superior, Tracy. The Admiral of Ailment was currently bewitched by Tower, his mind filled entirely with thoughts of cracking down on slave trading, and had no interest in an artisan. Hermit Catlia didn't persist on this matter and instead turned to Justice Audrey. The Dreamwalker characteristic she promised you is already prepared. You can receive it after the gathering ends. Justice Audrey was momentarily stunned, then quickly realized that this she referred to the Queen of Mystic. Back then, she, Mr. Tower, and the Queen of Mystic had explored the City of Miracles together. As a result, because the Queen of Mystic peeped the Dream Labyrinth Tower, their group encountered extreme danger and had no choice but to abort the expedition. For that, the Queen of Mystic had indeed promised her a Dreamwalker characteristic as compensation. So much time has passed, and she still remembered, she really is someone who keeps her word. Justice Audrey muttered inwardly, while outwardly nodding slightly. I understand. Next, after Star and Moon each finalized trades of certain Silver City-specific spiritual materials with Sun, the trading segment came to an end. Klein had the world German Sparrow seize the initiative before the Hanged Man and sweep his gaze around as he said. The Secret Order's leader, Zeradel, has already arrived in Backlund and has made contact with certain members of the lone royal family. Naturally, his attention remained focused on Mr. Tower. Although such matters were better discussed privately, Klein had long noticed that in crowded situations, especially when beautiful ladies were present, Mr. Tower's desire to talk became stronger, and he revealed more. Zeradel. Although in previous gatherings the world had already mentioned that Zeradel, as an angel, had escaped, the Tarot Club members were still far from that level and hadn't paid much attention. But now it was different. Among those present, aside from the Hanged Man, Hermit, and Sun, the rest all lived in Backlund. The arrival of an angel from a secret organization was more than enough to put them on high alert. This time, they all shared the same premonition, a major event was about to occur in Backlund. Otherwise, it couldn't explain why so many angels were arriving one after another. Hermit Catlia also connected this to the Queen of Mystics' movements over the past few months, feeling that she had spent much of her time in Backlund, never leaving even after becoming an angel. On the other side, Ebner naturally noticed the world's gaze, but what was he supposed to say? Could he really reveal that Zeradel was actually one of his own identities? The fewer people who know this, the better, otherwise leaks are inevitable. After all, many extraordinary abilities in this world simply don't play by the rules. Still, saying nothing won't do. Given my personality, if I don't reveal some solid information, it'll just raise suspicion. It's fine if the Tarot Club members are suspicious, but if someone with ulterior motives uses this to peer through Zeradel's secrets, that would be bad. As these thoughts turned, Ebner coughed lightly and said with a smile. There's no need to pay too much attention to Zeradel. His greatest enemy right now is actually Amon. Amon. Hearing this name, Star Leonard immediately straightened up. He was currently in Indo Harbor, an enemy territory. The Tarot Club had originally planned to take leave, but since they had finally locked onto the location of the Black Blade who had murdered the Viscount, and it still wasn't convenient to act yet, Captain Soest had given all team members an hour of rest so they could recuperate and prepare for action when the dusk ritual arrived that evening. "Mr. Tower, has Amon also entered Backlund?" Leonard asked nervously. If so, after completing the current field mission, he would need to consider fleeing to another city to lie low. "No, Amon hasn't dared to enter Backlund recently." Ebner shook his head. "But soon enough. Once the goddess begins pretending to digest the death uniqueness, Amon will send an avatar to probe. After all, he suffered a significant loss in Tingen before, he'll definitely want to find out what happened. And the clues he decrypts will inevitably point toward Backlund." Ebner didn't voice these last thoughts, so Leonard relaxed slightly, then moved past the topic and shared his own intelligence instead. The Church of Evernights renegade bishop, in Zangwill, is currently still staying in Indo Harbor. As he spoke, he looked toward the world Gehrman. End of the chapter. Chapter 1184, Arrangements in the Dark. In Zangwill, but after the Tarot Club ends, I still have to go hunting the Spirit World Plunderer in Calderon City together with Sharon. What's more, I'm not even confident right now that I can keep Ince behind. While sighing faintly inwardly, Klein manipulated the world to nod and say, "I know." After that, there was no follow-up. Leonard wanted to ask what he planned to do so that he could cooperate on his side, but then he thought of how the other party's actions weren't completely free and still had to obey Mr. Fool's orders. His lips moved a few times, yet he ultimately didn't ask. At this moment, Ebner interjected with a smile, "I'm also in Indo Harbor right now. If it's inconvenient for you to receive the item I helped you craft, I can deliver it to you directly." That old monster Rhine also came to Indo. Leonard's expression stiffened, and he hurriedly said, "No need to trouble you, once I have some free time, I'll set up the ritual to receive it." Speaking of which, after the battle at Tingen Cemetery, Leonard had become very wary of Ebner. After all, the other party seemed to be on good terms with Alvin Abraham, and that individual was very likely coveting the old man's extraordinary characteristics. Perhaps it was precisely because the old man had foreseen this that he had Leonard chant Mr. Fool's honorific name and become one of our own with Ebner. Ebner didn't mind Leonard's attitude. He turned back, first congratulating Magician, Moon, and Star on their advancements. This made Emlyn, who had been trying to show off since the start of the meeting, lift his chin, and also made Furs glance at him resentfully. Her final acting for digesting astrologer had ultimately still required Ebner's help, but the process was indescribable. After that, Ebner proactively shared what he had seen and heard in those worlds, such as the urban legend 1. Of course, he didn't mention the Ghost Empire, only saying that he had mistakenly entered a strange space. Everyone was quickly drawn in by the civilizations Ebner described, civilizations different from reality, and from time to time they asked a few related questions. Only Klein felt puzzled, because some of the worlds described by Tower sounded rather familiar. Could it be that he entered some ruin left behind by Roselle again? With such doubts, the Tarot Club gradually came to its end, and finally concluded amid everyone standing up to exchange farewells. Within the ancient palace above the grey fog, only Klein and Ebner remained once more. Following past habits, Klein transmitted the diaries into Ebner's hands. However, the latter only glanced at them before setting them aside, then said after some consideration, "Later, help me contact Pale Admiral Maria and tell her that she can fulfill the previous promise." He had already obtained all of Roselle's late-life diaries from Bernadette, so there was no longer any need to read them here. Hearing this, Klein asked in surprise, "You've already found the other 4 survivors of that experiment 11 years ago?" Klein was also very concerned about that experiment. "Yes, the Intis Embassy military attaché Bianca is currently working as a maid in my Trier villa. The former Rose School of Thought Divine Envoy Abbey, after you captured him, was locked by me inside Groselle's Travels for Reformation. Ms. D. of the Aurora Order, Lofia, after being abducted by me, was sent to a hidden location to prevent the true creator from finding her. Mrs. Philin of the Life School of Thought encountered me not long ago in the Ghost Empire, and is currently staying as a guest in my traveling palace. So now, once we have Pale Admiral Maria, we can completely discern the secret from 11 years ago and recreate a certain hidden ritual." At this point, he paused and then added, "As for providing help during her demigod ritual, I will also fulfill my promise so she won't have to worry." "All right, once I free up some time, I'll help you ask," Klein thought for a moment and nodded. Because the conditions had already been negotiated in advance, Maria had required that when Ebner researched the special circumstances of her body, Klein had to be present. So this was something he couldn't stay out of. Indo Harbor, inside a hotel room. After Leonard Mitchell opened his eyes, he pondered for a moment, then lowered his voice and said, "Old man, Zeradal of the Secret Order seems to have also arrived in Backlund." Inside his mind, that slightly aged voice quickly sounded. As expected. Hearing such a response, Leonard immediately followed up. Old man, are you familiar with that Zeradal? Didn't you say that the Zoroast family and the Zeradal family were both great noble families of the Solomon Empire? In his view, the old man and Zeradal, as former colleagues who had fought side by side, couldn't possibly be unfamiliar with each other. Palaz Zoroast let out a heh. The Zeradal I was familiar with already fell during the War of the Four Emperors. The current one should be his descendant. I may have seen him back then, or I may not have. Sigh, back then, Zeradal had already obtained clues to a second sequence 1 characteristic from the true creator, and was just waiting for the War of the Four Emperors to end to go search for it. If successful, he could have been considered a king of angels. Unfortunately, during the War of the Four Emperors, he directly encountered that one from the Antigonus family, an existence known as half a fool. And Bethel Abraham also participated. He could appear anywhere at any time. If he hadn't been quickly driven away and sealed by night and storm, I probably wouldn't have lasted until the end of the War of the Four Emperors. Half a fool. Leonard's eyelids twitched at that title, and he inexplicably thought of the one above the grey fog. He then forcibly restrained himself and turned his thoughts elsewhere. The old man is reminiscing about the past and his emotions are a bit unsettled, he actually said so much in one go. Amid the tangle of thoughts, Leonard continued. Is Zeradal's enemy also Amon? The sense of reminiscence instantly vanished from Palaz Zoroast's tone. He smacked his lips and said. Who told you that? However, strictly speaking, Zeradal probably still doesn't count as Amon's enemy, or rather, Amon certainly wouldn't look at him directly. How so? Leonard's heart stirred, and he added, this was told to me by that old monster Rhine. Palaz Zoroast fell silent for a long time. Only after quite a while did he continue. If Rhine thinks Zeradal is Amon's enemy, then he probably really is. It seems Zeradal has obtained a huge benefit somewhere. Both Zeradal and that newly advanced one of the Abraham family are in Backlund, so Amon will definitely come as well. This is a triangular balance, it's just that Amon still holds the absolute advantage. What does that mean? Leonard was somewhat confused, but that didn't stop him from sharing the intelligence he had obtained at the Tarot Club. It said that Zeradal has had contact with some members of the lone royal family. Palaz Zoroast fell silent again, then suddenly laughed and said. So that's how it is. No wonder I felt Zeradal was somewhat unqualified. If you add the lone royal family, then even Amon would indeed be somewhat wary. It seems the lone side still doesn't know about my situation. Are they afraid that Amon will make a move at the very end? What do you mean? Leonard keenly grasped the key point in the old man's words. Palaz Zoroast's tone suddenly became rather leisurely, but what he said had little to do with before. Put this way, leaving Backlund now is a good thing for us. I just don't know who tacitly approved my departure. Although this declares my direct elimination, at least I've temporarily escaped the vortex. Old man, what the hell are you talking about? Leonard looked utterly confused and began to deeply resent this kind of riddle-speaking behavior. That slightly aged voice replied. I mean that Rhine, or the fool, or perhaps those few gods, arranged things for me quite well. At this point, he suddenly changed the subject and sighed. I think I've guessed who has been secretly guiding your team to Indo. Who? Wait, didn't you say last time that you already had a guess? Last time I might have guessed wrong. As for my current guess, I still can't tell you, but the answer will be revealed soon enough. End of the chapter. Chapter 1185, Twilight Day Celebration. Hearing the old man's vague and ambiguous words, Leonard originally wanted to press him with a few more questions, but at this moment, Cindy, who had long wine-red hair, walked in carrying a set of exquisitely made clothes and said with a hint of excitement. Leonard, we got an invitation to the Twilight Day Festival through MI9's intelligence station in Fasak. The captain's idea is for the two of us to blend in. After locating the target, we'll use the sealed artifact, 2-098, to mark him so it'll be easier to make a move at night. Leonard subconsciously accepted the formal attire, then asked in confusion, why the two of us? Of course it's because our appearance doesn't easily arouse suspicion. If it were someone like Captain Soest, people would know there was a problem at first glance. While Cindy was speaking, she failed to notice that a figure holding a black cane inlaid with gold had already appeared at the doorway. That person was none other than Captain Soest himself. Seeing Cindy getting more and more outrageous, he couldn't help coughing and said, Ahem, what problem do I have? Cindy froze on the spot. She turned her head to look at her captain, then looked at Leonard and accused him, you didn't even remind me. You spoke too fast, I couldn't get a word in at all. Leonard muttered inwardly, but he didn't dare say it out loud. It seems you're both in pretty good condition, not nervous at all, that's good. Within Fasak territory, you need to maintain this kind of outwardly relaxed but inwardly tense mindset. Soest adjusted his flamboyant top hat and reminded them, pay attention to safety. If anything goes wrong, retreat immediately. I'll lead the other team members to provide support outside the hotel. Cindy and Leonard both put away their smiles and replied solemnly, "Yes, Captain." Indo Harbor, inside a small inn in the dock district. With dark gold hair, deep blue eyes, a high nose bridge, and one blind eye, Nsangwil stood in front of the mirror, carefully applying makeup. Speaking of which, he had learned the skill from Despair Nightingale, Panacea. Unfortunately, she had disappeared after the Great Smog incident. As for why Nsangwil was putting on makeup, it was naturally to attend the Twilight Day Festival, or rather, the Twilight Celebration, being held at the Pitt Grand Hotel in Indo Harbor. The angelic evil spirit within him wanted to obtain a sword from the Sauron family that was being exhibited in the hotel. He needed to scout the place in advance to make it easier to steal it at night. However, just as Ince concealed his single eye and hair color through makeup, the evil spirit within him suddenly spoke. "You're going to the celebration like this? That invitation Gluttony Osmond gave you allows 2 people to attend together. You don't even have a female companion, surely that will attract attention." Nsangwil's expression stiffened upon hearing this. He took a deep breath and ignored the evil spirit's provocation. Given his current circumstances, how could he possibly find a trustworthy female companion? "I'm just saying, you could directly use that pen to logically arrange one. That's still better than having none at all. Don't tell me your brain is empty and you can't even write a logically coherent story." The evil spirit clearly had no intention of letting it go and continued chattering. "Shut up." Ince finally couldn't hold back and barked a reprimand. Then, with a gloomy expression, he thought it over and felt that the evil spirit wasn't entirely wrong. On top of that, he absolutely couldn't stand being told he was incapable. Provoked into wanting to prove himself, he returned to the desk, picked up the feather pen, and wrote in his notebook. When arriving at the Pitt Grand Hotel by carriage, Nsangwil will coincidentally encounter a low-key noble lady. The two will hit it off at first sight, and she will proactively invite him to be her male companion. Looking at what he had written, the evil spirit of the Sauron family sneered inwardly but said nothing more. Instead, through a concealed channel, it transmitted the information to Gluttony Osmond, without letting Ince notice. Back when it helped Gluttony rid himself of that kind of contamination, this evil spirit of the Sauron family had secretly established contact with Osmond, serving as a hidden backup plan. After receiving this message, Osmond also wore a mocking expression. He then conducted a ritual, summoned a messenger, and handed over a freshly written letter. 0-grade sealed artifacts aren't so easy to seize. Nsangwil must have backup preparations. Better follow the original plan and let lust, greed, and sloth help me block the danger first. When faced with the possibility of advancement, sloth might remain indifferent, but greed definitely won't be able to restrain the desire in her heart. And once greed moves, lust, who covets her, will very likely intervene as well. 2 or even 3 demigods should be enough to exhaust all of Nsangwil's preparations. When that time comes, I'll step in to clean up. Not only can I obtain that sealed artifact, I might even gain some unexpected rewards. According to my sensing, the bloodline sources of both greed and sloth are extremely powerful, extremely ancient. As Gluttony Osmond pondered, saliva unconsciously dripped from the corner of his mouth. Indo Harbor, inside a private club in the southern district. Anderson disdainfully sized up Danitz and raised an eyebrow. With an outfit like that, you want to sneak into the Pitt Grand Hotel? No one would even believe you're a janitor. Before Danitz could respond, he ran his fingers through his short hair and continued to himself. Your appearance is passable. With a bit of grooming, you could look decent, but your behavior is far too crude. Those service staff would spot the difference between you and the others at a glance. There's no way you could blend in. Hearing this, Danitz was extremely unconvinced, but he also knew the other party was right. In the end, he deflated and said, "Then what should I do?" Anderson immediately curled his lips into a bright smile. "Tell me, why exactly do you insist on sneaking into the Pitt Grand Hotel today? I guarantee I won't tell anyone. Besides, it's already too late for you to train your manners. Why don't I go in on your behalf instead?" At this, Danitz couldn't help mocking him. You're not any better than me." "You're absolutely right," Anderson replied with a smile completely free of gloom. "You know, your captain and I were classmates, and her grades in etiquette were even worse than mine." "That means the captain's etiquette is worse than mine." Danitz froze for a moment, then realized he had been led around in circles by Anderson. Annoyed, he said, "I'm not in the mood for jokes right now." "I'm not joking. I really put in a lot of effort in etiquette class," Anderson said seriously. "Because I believe that elegant and understated mockery is the highest realm of mockery." Really? Considering Anderson's talent for infuriating people, Danitz actually started to believe him. "Of course it's real. If you don't believe me, go ask your captain." Anderson smiled, then suddenly changed the topic and asked again, "So, can you tell me what you want to do now?" It's an heirloom of the Edwards family that was lost when the Gustav dynasty collapsed and later fell into the hands of the Fasak royal family. That item isn't worth much, but it should be very important to the captain, and I heard it'll be exhibited during the Twilight celebration, so. Before Danitz could finish, Anderson already understood and smiled as he took over. So you want to steal it to please your captain? Yes. After voicing his true thoughts, Danitz let out a breath of relief, but then immediately became dejected again. But saying all this is useless. Just like you said, there's no way I can get in. Then don't sneak in, walk in openly. Anderson raised his eyebrows and said. Danitz stared at him blankly, his face filled with a "are you crazy" expression. Even if Anderson was fairly strong, forcibly barging into the Twilight Day celebration would likely draw the intervention of demigods. Take a look at this. Anderson smiled and produced a finely made invitation. This, where did you get an invitation? Danitz asked in disbelief. That's none of your concern. Anderson chuckled a few times, then once again sized Danitz up from top to bottom. Danitz felt his skin crawl under that gaze and couldn't help asking, why are you looking at me like that? The invitation's accompanying guest can only be a female companion. If you want to get in, you know what I mean, right? Anderson said maliciously. I just happen to have a one-time item that can change appearances. Danitz instantly understood and raised his voice. Bullshit. Absolutely impossible. Are you sure? Anderson shook the invitation in his hand. If you miss this chance, it'll be very hard to get another opportunity to please your captain, you know. And didn't I hear you say before that your captain is always waiting for someone's letters? That's not a good sign. Hearing this, Danitz opened his mouth, then closed it again without saying anything. His gaze drifted for a few seconds before finally settling back on Anderson's infuriating face. Gritting his teeth, he said. I agree. Let's do it. Bullshit, he immediately cursed himself in a low voice. No rush, there's still some time, first we need to buy you a suitable outfit. End of the chapter.